He used to be a legendary dragon king, a ruler feared by the entire world and killed by them out of ignorance. But life didn't want to let him go so easily, and he respawned as a weak 5-year-old human kid. No dragon mana, no god tier magic, just a system telling him, grind if you want your power back. His red hair is equal to hatred, fear, prophecy. Now the fate of the world rests on one question. Will this red-haired kid become its savior, or its extinction? Let's go. The only red dragon in this world meets its end. He never thought that humans could do it, but in the end, they still defeated him. The enemy army was commanded by a witch, and throughout the battle, the dragon wondered who she was, and whether there had always been someone so powerful among their ranks. When the humans pounced on him, he wondered if this was his retribution. But he had never set foot on human lands in his entire life. On the contrary, for millennia, humans had attempted to kill him time and again, at the cost of their lives and flesh. And in the end, the humans killed him. Perhaps it's just old age. He doesn't remember the exact details of what happened before his death. All that remains in his memory is that whenever he found a place he could call home, humans appeared out of nowhere, chasing and attacking him and his kind. They killed his friends, his family, and in the end, he was the only dragon left. Now, he has no one left to lose. The only thing he continues to hold on to in this life is revenge. So when he is attacked, he responds. But now it's over. He can finally rest in peace. While the people celebrated their victory, he closed his eyes and their enthusiastic cries died down along with his consciousness. But that was not the end. He heard a man's voice coming from above and wondered what that sound was. Was that a person? When he opened his eyes, he saw a smiling man in front of him, and he felt that he was in his arms. He became very nervous, not understanding what was happening, and wondered if he had really become a person. This thought made him start spinning and squealing. And the man told his wife that he seemed to like him very much. In fact, the dragon was insulting him in every possible way in his thoughts and asking him to let him go. And then he thought that since he was seeking death, it would tear him to pieces. Now, all that was left of him was smoke and a handful of ashes. He puffed out his cheeks, gathering all his fiery power, and then spat in the man's face. He immediately started shaking his head, screaming that this was so disgusting, and the dragon thought, what's going on? Where is his magic? At that moment, this woman stretched out her hands to him. He was very scared and thought, what is she going to do to him? This is just some kind of hell. But contrary to expectations, the woman just smiled and touched his cheek, calling him Lei. He stared at her in shock and thought, what kind of ridiculous human name is this? And why is she greeting him? Does she even know who he is? And then a thought occurred to him. Since God returned the great red dragon to the world, he has one more chance for revenge. Just as they did to them, the dragons, he will use this human body and destroy all people. He laughed evilly, and the man said that he was born such a fragile baby, but now he had a premonition that he would cause them problems in the future. His wife said that no matter what, he was their little child, and Lei began to gradually become quiet. Suddenly, for some reason, he felt sleepy. He was so tired. Does he really spend all his energy on controlling his mouth? Does this mean that this human body is too weak? That's how he continued to live in a human body. Enough time has passed since he was reborn. He also began to look at people in a new way. Now he even knows the names of his parents. He no longer calls them just short-haired and long-haired people. Jack and Scarlet, they look much better than other people. Scarlet's soft face always attracts the eye with its friendly expression. And this man, Jack, is well built and seems much stronger than the others. The villagers often visit them and show them their respect. But one day, some villagers came to them, and one of them told Jack that he was so grateful to him, because if it weren't for him and his excellent swordsmanship, his wife would have definitely died in the Black Forest. Another agreed and said that Mrs. Talon was also as good as ever. There was not a single magician in this wilderness. The two of them were simply a couple made in heaven. Scarlet said that they should not thank them. It was important to them that nothing threatened the people around them. Her husband agreed with her and added that they simply had to do this. Lei crawled up to them and Scarlet asked, is he awake yet? Let him wait. She will bring him something to eat. The man laughed and said that their baby was so smart that when he was hungry, he crawled to them and asked for food. He got a little nervous and asked, is it because of the lighting? His hair seemed slightly red. Jack looked at his son and said that for some unknown reason, his hair had started to turn slightly red a few days ago. After that, those people left in a hurry for some reason, and Lei thought that the fact that his hair was turning red meant that he might have some red dragon power left. As soon as the two left the house, they started whispering, and the man asked if there was some kind of curse on the Talon family. They were not ordinary people, so anything could happen to them at any moment. Lei thought that it seemed like those people were envious of his beautiful red hair. Were they already trembling in fear in front of him? This thought made him very happy, and Scarlet, having seated him at the table, asked if he was ready for dinner. He immediately began to eat like a beast, and thought that what he most didn't understand right now were those two people. Why? No matter what happened, did they never get angry? Even if he tested their strength time and again. During one of these tests, he directed a warm stream directly into his father's mouth. But even then, his father wasn't angry. On the contrary, he was only glad that he could now pee without their help. Lei only received a smile in response to all his pranks. He thought that if hell existed, this certainly wasn't it. Talented people were extremely rare in this world, and his mother, who was even rarer, was an outstanding mage. If only he could master the most powerful magic in the world, revenge would be much easier. Every child who reached the age of 2 can take a test of magical ability, and today the day had finally come to test his predisposition to magic. They said goodbye, and Scarlet set off with her son. Lei thought that, as a red dragon, he would also become an outstanding mage, and he was 100% sure that he would pass this test. If he could regain his magic, then no one would ever stop him from rising to the top again. They reached the city late in the evening, and he yawned widely, thinking that the only thing he really had to worry about was this weak body. They passed through the market, where an argument was currently raging. A poor man asked people for food, but the merchants began to chase him away so that he would not interfere with their trade. And Lei, watching them, thought it was sad that even though they were all human, some simply laughed or indifferently watched the suffering of those who were weaker. He had once considered it his duty to protect the weak, and he had been quite successful in this. Although, in the end, the result was disappointing. They reached Roland College, where the test was currently taking place, and Scarlet stood in line. Lei looked around and, seeing a crowd of women with small children, thought that there were so many people here. Suddenly, the loud screams of a girl named Alice were heard. She ran past them all in tears and exclaimed that it was unfair. Why can't she pass the exam? Finally, it was Lei's turn. The old man with the crystal ball asked his mother to sit down, then told her to let her son touch it. If he has a talent for magic, the crystal ball will glow at his touch, and the light of the corresponding color will show what element his magic belongs to. Lei was delighted and thought that now they would all be surprised by the power of the great red dragon. He touched the crystal ball, but it didn't react at all, and he thought, why isn't it working? He's not as good at anything as he is at magic. Hearing sobs and whimpers behind him, he turned around and saw that his mother was crying. He wondered if she was really that amazed by his talent. Maybe he had awakened the magic of the same element within himself as hers. And now she was crying with happiness? But when he looked at the crystal ball, he realized that the matter was different. It wasn't glowing at all. The old man said that he was very sorry, but her son had no predisposition to magic. Lei was very surprised and thought, a dragon? And without magic? Actually, in his past life, he was the greatest red dragon in the world. Scarlet said that there must be some mistake. After all, she graduated from this academy herself. How could her child not have a talent for magic? Lei hit the crystal ball several times, thinking that it was broken, and the old man, taking it away from him, apologized to Scarlet and said that he could not help her. Lei spat out the pacifier in displeasure and mentally exclaimed, is he kidding me? Does he even know who he is? He is the master of magic. He started pulling the old man's beard, shouting that he would become a wizard, and thought, why doesn't he have a talent for magic? Let him stop talking nonsense. The poor old man jumped up from his seat, trying to get rid of him, and Scarlet excitedly asked her son to let him go. A reincarnated great dragon without a drop of magic. What a cruel joke of fate. While they were returning home, he wondered if it was possible that God had deliberately punished him for killing too many people. But that was pointless. If he really wanted to punish him, then he shouldn't have given him a second chance. Suddenly, a thought occurred to him. He must be just testing him. If he can't become a mage, then he must find another way to take revenge on people. A new day dawned, and while they were having breakfast with the whole family, he called out to his father and asked him to teach him how to fight. His eyes immediately sparkled with delight, and he clarified, he wants him to teach him how to wield a sword? Lei thought that even if he can't become a mage, he could certainly become a swordsman. Then he would still have a chance to take revenge on humanity. However, the path to revenge turned out to be not as simple as he thought. 2 years had passed since he started learning swordsmanship, but he still hadn't defeated him. Today, everything was about to change. He prepared for battle, and when his father swung his sword, he thought he knew this attack all too well. After biding his time and constantly moving from place to place, he needed to wait for the right moment for him to release the sword and attack him from the flank. His father pounced on him, and he thought that now was the moment. Everything was as he thought. Perhaps this time, he could defeat him, but because of his clumsiness, he tripped over his own foot and immediately received a blow to the head. Today, he couldn't win. He thought, why is it always like this? This human body can't keep up with his thoughts, and his hands are just slowing him down. After this blow, he lost consciousness, and he woke up already on the bed. Jack laughed, and his wife exclaimed in displeasure, how dare he laugh? Can he be more gentle with him? He was only 4 years old. He told her that there was only a year left until the night exam, and if he continued like this, he wouldn't be able to pass it. She exclaimed that it was too much of a burden for him, and that he didn't have to follow in their footsteps. There were enough other worthy professions in the world besides being a swordsman. Jack gave her a thumbs up and told her not to worry so much. He watched his movements, and it seemed to him that he simply didn't have enough control over his body because he was still too young. They still had a year ahead of them, so they had to be sure that Lei would be accepted into the Avrion Knight Academy. After watching their argument, Lei thought that the Knight Academy exam would be held next year, and they still had a whole year to spare. Was it really too late? He was the reincarnation of a red dragon, so he simply couldn't be as weak as an ordinary person. He told his parents not to worry. He would definitely pass and become the strongest person humanity had ever seen. After that, he went to training. He should be physically stronger than any person his age, but his main problem now is control. He struck the dummy with the sword several times and thought, Why is this human body so clumsy? People have 4 limbs, so why did they decide it would be better to move each one separately? His father came out from around the corner of the house and said that he knew he was here. He gave him a sword and said that from now on it was his. He was already strong enough to train with a real sword. Lei looked at it with admiration, and Jack said with a smile that it would help him gain control of his body faster. After that, he whispered in his ear that he had one more gift for him. He led him to the barn, and it turns out his gift was a magic puppet. Lei did not understand the usefulness of this gift at first, and his father said that he should not underestimate it. It's a magical puppet used to train new recruits at the Night Academy. He said he didn't really believe it. It looked like an ordinary doll. Jack advised him to attack it and test it, and he took the sword with a grin, saying that then he would be lenient. After that, he pounced on the puppet, and the first level of training activated. The puppet immediately defended itself from his blow with its shield, which he didn't expect, and then knocked the sword out of his hands, and its system shut down. Jack said that was pretty good. If he could defeat a first-level magical puppet, he would guarantee his acceptance into the academy. It was thanks to his father. He had worked hard to achieve this. Lei looked at the puppet with admiration and thought that he would defeat it very soon. Time passed, and he had already begun training in the forest. Having fallen on his back, he caught his breath and thought that he couldn't control his movements properly. This human body was so weak. If this continued, he didn't know when he would be able to defeat the puppet, let alone take revenge. A girl approached him and asked why a puppet. He was startled by the unexpectedness, after which he immediately stood up and grabbed his sword, exclaiming, "Who was there?" But when he saw the girl, his eyes widened slightly in surprise, and she asked, "Is he okay?" She didn't want to scare him. Her name is Amy. She lives in the village. She saw him here so late all alone, and so she wanted to remind him to come down from the mountain early. He laughed awkwardly and said that she caught him off guard. "Is it really that dangerous here?" She answered him that no one was in danger during the day, but monsters might appear in the nearby forest after dark. He looked at her puzzledly and said again that she had caught him off guard, and she said with a smile that it just so happened that she often picked wild fruits and berries here, so she was familiar with this area. Since it was almost dark, she invited him to go down the mountain together, and he wanted to tell her his name, but she already knew it. She winked at him and said that he was quite famous in the village. His face darkened slightly at her words, and he thought that he really was a local celebrity. He remembered how the villagers always paid attention to him, and also whispered about his red hair, calling it a curse. In this village, no one from birth had red hair, but he became the first red-haired outcast, and although they lived with their parents, they feared and avoided him completely, unreasonably. He doesn't know if this is because adults always use the evil red dragon to scare their children. The color red has come to symbolize evil and power in human society. It's obvious that humans were the ones who exterminated the dragons, but in their history they portray themselves as liberators. Their act of revenge, or rather self-defense, was seen by humans as draconic cruelty. His face darkened at these thoughts, and Amy asked what he was thinking about. They had to go now. He followed her, and she said that lately she sees him every time she goes to the forest. Is he practicing his swordsmanship? He told her that he wants to become a swordsman, and she said that it was so great. His father is the only swordsman in their village. Then he will have to apply to the Night Academy, right? Her brother is also going to enroll there. He's very good at fighting. There is no one in the village who is stronger than him, but he must be very happy that his father can personally teach him swordsmanship. It is very difficult for them, ordinary people, to learn such things without a teacher. He asked, so she also has a brother? She confirmed it and invited him to be friends with him. Then they can train together. It soon got completely dark, but before they reached the village, Gary and his friends, Bob and Kyle, appeared. He ordered Lei to stay away from his little sister, and she, immediately standing up for him, exclaimed, "What is he doing? He didn't even do anything to her." He asked why she was with that red-haired guy. Hadn't she heard the adults in the village say that his curse was contagious? He approached her and checked if he had dyed her hair, while his friends meanwhile approached Lei and said that he had no shame and conscience since he dared to walk with Amy. Let him get out of the village. His parents must be having a hard time having a rat like him. What terrible thing have they done in their lives that it came back to haunt them with such consequences? His family should leave as soon as possible. They are all simple people. They don't need to face such horror. But can such powerful people be considerate of them? Plebeians? Lei clenched his fist in anger. He couldn't stand all these insults directed at his family and called out to them, and as soon as they turned to him, he immediately attacked them. Gary stood up to defend his friends, putting his hand out in front of him to block the blow, and felt pain. After that, he was thrown aside, and Lei told him to stay out of the way. He only wanted those who insulted his parents. Gary smirked and said that his parents were mercenaries, and his father was a swordsman. He must have trained a lot. If he really wanted to fight, he would gladly accept the challenge. He wouldn't use a weapon, because he didn't want to accidentally kill him. Amy got worried and told him to stop, and Lei, throwing the sword aside, said that then he would fight unarmed too. They could all attack him at once. He didn't care. After that, they started fighting, and Gary's friends began to support him, and Amy kept asking them to stop. At one point, Lei couldn't withstand his blow and fell, and he told him to finally admit his defeat. He was still too far from his level. Lei got up and said that he refused, and Gary noted that this was such a disappointment. He has a father who helps him with training, but he is still just as talentless. His father is an ordinary merchant. He doesn't think he should even try to become a swordsman. Let him do what he is really good at. Completely exhausted, Lei fell again, and then lost consciousness. After a while, Amy and Gary returned home, and she discontentedly told him that he went too far today. He told her that he asked for it himself. From now on, let her stay away from him. She herself knows how much the villagers are afraid of his cursed red hair. Their family is not like theirs. Their parents are ordinary people. She screamed that she hated him, and then ran to the second floor. Meanwhile, he began to remove the plate from his arm, but seeing a dent on it, he was very surprised and thought, is this possible? If there was no plate on his arm, it would have broken from the first blow. He would have won that fight. Meanwhile, Lei got home, his mother met him and asked why he was so late. It was time for dinner. Seeing bruises and abrasions on his body, she immediately worriedly approached him and asked, did he fight with someone? He lied to her that he was just slightly injured during training, and she asked, were the kids bullying him again? He needed to wash the wound quickly. What if there was a scar? She began to wipe his face with a handkerchief, and he said that scars only adorn a man. Jack said with a smile that he was a man too. It seems that training with a sword is a bit difficult for him. He said that he would practice a little first, but his mother objected, because it was dinner time, but still let him go. Entering the barn, Lei turned the puppet on the first level and immediately faced it in battle. He dodged the blow and thought that now he knew all the combinations of attacks on it. He found all the weak points. Suddenly, he accidentally pierced a post with a wooden sword, which took him by surprise. Because of this, he immediately received a blow to the head from the puppet. The next day came. He went to the forest again and noticed Amy there, who had been looking around all this time until she noticed him. At first, she was slightly embarrassed, guiltily pursed her lips, and then returned to her friendly expression and waved her hand. He approached her and asked if she was waiting for him. She told him that she actually wanted to apologize to him. She was very sorry. He immediately started training and told her that he didn't need her apologies. It wasn't her fault. She objected because it was her brother who beat him, and he said that he was just not as good as others yet. She burst into tears. He thought that people were nothing but trouble, and then sighed heavily, thinking that it was so irritating for him to deal with the so-called human nature. He took an apple from her basket and said that he would take it as an apology. She wiped her tears and with a smile told him not to worry. Her brother would not bother him anymore. From that very day on, Amy began to come to the same place every day. Sometimes she could chat about everything until noon, and sometimes she quietly read. Gradually, it seems, he's beginning to get used to the fact that she is always around. Meanwhile, a squad of swordsmen arrived at the Talon family house to take Jack. The squad leader informed him that the border villages had been attacked by monsters. They learned about it indirectly from the victims, but concluded that they had been infected. Most of them were now delirious and couldn't tell what had happened, so they would like to ask him to assist in the investigation. Scarlet said that monsters usually avoided crowded places, so the situation was extremely strange. She would go with him. Her husband told her not to worry. It was a completely routine investigation. And besides, Lei had an exam soon, so one of them should stay and keep an eye on him. She wanted to object, but he assured her that everything would be fine and that he would be back soon, and she had to agree. Soon evening fell. MC continued training on the mountain, and while he was taking a break, he thought that it was still too difficult for him to coordinate his movements. He turned around, looking at the girl, and seeing her smile while reading a book, he became slightly embarrassed. Realizing this, he immediately slapped himself in the face, telling himself to pull himself together. After which, he awkwardly approached her and suggested that she go home, since he was finished for the day. She looked up at him and noted that it was already quite late. They really should go back. She gathered her things and they set off, and Lei asked she hadn't been bullied in the village. Had she? He knows that there are always people who say that his red hair is some kind of contagious and cursed. She answered him that what others think is only their business. What is so special about red hair? She thinks it's even beautiful. In fact, he is special and differs from other people not only in the color of his hair, so let him just be himself. He thought about her words and remembered what Gary told him then. He needs to do what he is good at. Why didn't he think of this himself? He grabbed her by the shoulders and excitedly thanked her for the advice, then ran home and happily waved her goodbye. As soon as night fell, he went to the barn to practice with the doll. This time, he decided to move like a wild animal, that is, to be with himself. He clenched the sword in his teeth, prepared himself, and as soon as the doll was activated, he immediately rushed into battle, moving quickly on all fours. His body immediately became more flexible. Finding the right moment, he jumped high, and at that very second, the doll attacked, and then he struck back. The doll froze in place, after which it said that he had passed the first level, and he began jumping on the spot with joy, shouting that he had done it. His dad said that if he defeated the first level doll, he would be able to pass the entrance exam to the Night Academy. He wondered how far he could go, and now he decided to move on to the second level. As soon as dawn came, MC woke up and, leaving the house, found that his father was getting ready somewhere. He asked where he was going, and his father told him that he had received an urgent task. He had to leave the house for a while, but he shouldn't worry. he would be back right in time for his exam. Let him practice all the techniques on the doll thoroughly while he was gone. He was sure he would do great. He smiled and Lei, proudly lifting his head, said that he had actually already passed the first level. But Jack didn't hear him, because the commander called out to him. Scarlet brought him the sword, and he told her to take care of herself. He would miss her. After that, they said goodbye, and MC, watching him go, thought that the doll was nothing special. But when he returned, he would really surprise him. In the afternoon, he went to training again, and began to wonder how happy his father would be when he found out about this. This will be a lot of fun. Thanks to Amy's advice, he was able to understand how to deal with the doll. He needs to learn to be more patient and trusting of people. Emotionally, he is becoming more and more like a human. Although people irritate him, these three are exceptions. He will not take revenge on them. When he got to his place, he discovered that Amy had not come today, and then he realized that he was waiting for her. This made him very embarrassed and said that now no one could interrupt his training. He would never give in to human emotions again. He was the great red dragon after all. Evening came. He had already finished training and was dozing on the grass. When he opened his eyes and saw that the sun was already setting, he jumped up abruptly and thought that it was already so late. If he came back any later, it would be bad. He ran back to the village and thought that he still hadn't thanked her. It looked like she was busy today, but it didn't matter. He would talk to her tomorrow. When he reached the village, he saw a crowd of people excitedly discussing something. Among them were Gary and Amy's parents. It turned out their children were lost. They started asking everyone around if they had seen them, and the gun shop owner told them that 4 children had stopped by today to buy new weapons. He heard a fair-haired boy tell the others that he wanted to go into some forest to hunt monsters or something like that. Hearing this, the woman was horrified, and the mother of Bob and Kyle, Gary's friends, excitedly exclaimed that they were still children. How could they go into the forest alone? Why didn't he stop them? The old man became worried and said that he didn't think they would really go there. And the man exclaimed that the forest was very dangerous at night. Let them immediately report this to the guards. They need to start organizing a joint search. Walking past them, Lei wondered if they had really disappeared. Retribution had overtaken them so quickly, and they had done everything themselves for this. If the monster killed them, it would save him a lot of problems. But Amy was with them. She had been so kind to him, and he had no intention of revenge. Well, she was unlucky to have such a brother. A person's life is short, so it doesn't matter whether he dies sooner or later. He continued walking home, enjoying the vastness of the night, but suddenly the image of Amy and their first meeting popped into his head. He froze in place and felt a pang in his chest, after which he immediately turned around and ran back, thinking that it wasn't her fault. He hadn't yet told her that thanks to her words, he managed to defeat the training doll. He ran into the forest and mentally told Amy to wait for him. Meanwhile, they were overtaken by danger. Wolves. Bob and Kyle had long since lost consciousness. Only the siblings remained. Amy was very afraid and called for her brother, and he stood to protect her, although he himself was very scared. Right now, a huge three-eyed wolf was in front of them, ready to pounce on them at any second. Meanwhile, MC was halfway to them and had already smelled blood. Could Amy really be in danger? When he ran to the source of the smell, it turned out to be just a demon wolf cub. There were marks from human weapons on its stomach, and the body itself was still warm. This meant they were very close, but their tracks were so tangled. Where should he go? At that moment, a loud girlish scream was heard. Lei immediately headed there. Meanwhile, Gary was hit and flew backwards into a tree trunk, after which he fell to the ground. His sister called out to him worriedly, and the wolf pounced on them with a loud roar. Seeing this, she closed her eyes and covered her ears, mentally asking for help, and at that moment, the monster's blood splashed on her face. MC plunged the blade into the wolf's jaw and asked the girl if she was okay. She confirmed it and said that Gary and the other guys were unconscious. She warned him of the danger, but he still missed the blow and was wounded in the shoulder, which caused him to be thrown to the side. He dug his fingers into the ground, trying to slow down, and told Amy not to worry. He would not die. He decided to lead this wolf away and nimbly jumped onto a tree, and it immediately headed after him. He bit off the branch he was sitting on, and he immediately started running, nervously thinking that this human body was still too weak. He could not cope with an adult demon wolf. His speed is simply insignificant compared to his strength, and it is simply impossible to distract him. He landed next to Amy and thought that before, for him, this was just an insignificant demon wolf, but now he was a serious opponent. He covered his wound with his hand and told the wolf that these were his people, and that he should not dare stretch his paws towards them. The wolf only growled in response, and then pounced on him with its mouth wide open. He rushed towards it, thinking that if his attack did not work now, he would not last much longer. He needed to strike this wolf at its weakest point. Leaping high into the air, he struck right at the wolf's eye, after which it threw him aside. He, trying with all his strength to get up, thought that it was a pity that with his weak nails he could only damage one eye. In the old days, he would have been able to deal with him with one claw, but for now, he only had human weapons at his disposal. The wolf pounced on him again. Lei screamed and went on the attack, thinking that this was the end of the world. Now he would see if he could land a blow. He swung his sword, cutting off the wolf's limbs, and it immediately fell to the ground, throwing the children aside. MC was distracted by Amy's scream, and the wolf immediately struck him, throwing him aside, but he was able to land softly. Putting the sword in his mouth, He commanded the demon to fight him fairly and then rushed to attack. Spinning like a tornado, he rose to the wolf's muzzle, then dealt him several sweeping blows all over his body, causing him to immediately fall, and he fell with him. Breathing heavily and trying to endure the pain, Lei looked at Amy and thought that he finally succeeded. Immediately after that, a bright flash appeared above his head, which turned into a small, fiery dragon. It turned out to be the system. It was now giving him a reward for killing monsters. He had unlocked one dragon ability out of 100. Dragon's Gaze. He also had access to one medium monster crystal which he could absorb. He looked up in surprise at the system window and wondered what kind of useless information had appeared before him. It was more important to get them out of the forest now, otherwise the smell of blood would attract even more monsters. Barely standing up, he walked up to them and threw Gary onto his back. He was slightly surprised by his presence there, and MC, telling him not to move, strapped him in with belts. After lifting Amy, he immediately felt the weight. Apparently, 2 was his limit. He glanced at the other boys, but since he couldn't carry more than 2, he decided to leave them behind and thought he had done everything in his power. He was leaving the question of their survival to fate. Meanwhile, a crowd of people with torches had gathered at the entrance to the forest. They had all just returned from a search that had obviously been unsuccessful. Suddenly, one of them noticed movement on the bridge and told the others to look there. There were children there. The old man immediately turned to the others and told them to quickly call their parents. The man next to him asked, "Isn't that the red-haired boy from the Talon family?" Unable to carry them any longer, Lei fell and asked them to help them. They needed treatment. The people were surprised that he had carried them out of the forest all alone and began to discuss why they had gone into the forest at all. When Bob and Kyle's mother appeared, she pushed her way through the crowd, asking where her children were, and the man said that he had only carried these 2 out of the forest. Hearing this, she became very scared and immediately rushed to the forest, calling for her sons, but people began to stop her, saying that she couldn't go there alone. She called them a bunch of cowards and, having fought them off, rushed into the forest and screamed that they were waiting for her there, all alone. She continued to run forward, tearfully calling for her sons, but as soon as she felt the gaze of the local monsters on her, she immediately froze in place. Seeing the 3 shining eyes of the wolf, she rushed back with a loud scream, which surprised the people a little, and she cursed, saying that she was not scared at all. Deciding to take out her emotions on Lei, she grabbed his clothes and exclaimed in rage, "Where are her children? They are so obedient. How did they even get into the forest at night? Did he lure them there?" She hit him and began to accuse him of all sins, and the people sided with her because he was the only one who got out of the forest unharmed. Madam continued yelling at Lei, ordering him to tell her where he had put her children, and the people joined her. She slapped him in the face several times, asking why he only took out Amy and Gary. Where did he put her sons? He sighed and told her that he said they were in the forest, and she looked at him in shock, saying that they were just children. Did he leave them there to die? He thought, have they really forgotten that he is a child too? After abandoning him and calling him a cold-blooded monster, she returned to the crowd, and one of them asked if they really had to go into the forest to look for them, but their children were waiting for them at home. They couldn't go. MC looked at them and thought, because of his red hair, they forget that he is actually a human too? They don't consider him a child. They think he is a monster. This furious woman snatched the torch from the hands of one of the men, and then menacingly walked towards Lei, saying that there is no forgiveness for him. Looking at them, he thought they were scarier than any monsters. They were real monsters. Smiling nervously, the woman swung the torch at him and wished him a speedy departure to hell. And he, watching the fire approaching him, wondered, was he gonna die again? Was he really going to be killed with some kind of stick? He closed his eyes and smiled slightly, preparing for his death, but suddenly the torch stopped. Gary came to his defense, and one of the men exclaimed in surprise, what was he doing? The woman also began to be indignant, saying that all of this was the monster's doing. He had clouded his mind. Gary exclaimed in rage, were they kidding me? They had all gone crazy. How could they mete out lynching justice based only on their own conclusions? Let them not even dare lay a finger on his savior. Madam was still furious. All the villagers' fury had fallen on Lei, and it reminded him of his death as a dragon. It turned out to be just a dream. He suddenly opened his eyes and caught his breath, realizing he was in his room. He glanced at his mother, who was sleeping next to him and crying, and wondered why people could be so beautiful and cruel at the same time. He touched her hand, and she immediately jumped up, exclaiming joyfully, she wasn't sleeping, was she? It's good that he woke up. She immediately hugged him tightly, which hurt him, and said that since he knew it hurt, he shouldn't be so reckless again. He asked how long he had been sleeping, and she told him a whole week. If he hadn't woken up, she wouldn't have known what to tell his father. He asked about those people, and she told him that the 2 had only minor injuries, but Bob and Kyle were never found. Most likely, they were already dead. That night, Scarlet quickly ran towards the commotion. She worriedly called out to her son, and seeing what they were doing to him, she immediately froze in place, after which, with a gloomy expression, she asked who did this. The men asked her to calm down. After all, it was her son who told them to go into the woods and was responsible for this. She was also a mother. She could understand these feelings when a child suddenly disappears. The villagers began to agree with him, but she ignored them and, releasing magic, approached her son, after which she glanced at the madam, which frightened her. She fell to her knees and cried out loudly, Who will save their children? The villagers were angry with Scarlet, and someone even said that they should have gotten rid of this damned brat a long time ago. Ignoring their nasty words, she left. Currently, she patted her son on the head and said that everything was finally over, so he should not blame himself. He had already helped them a lot. That guy Gary told her everything. He really is something. She went to the kitchen and said that he must be hungry. She will make him something to eat. As soon as he was alone, he sighed heavily and thought that at first he was worried. He looked up at the system window and thought, does everyone have this thing? He pressed the dragon's gaze ability, after which streams of energy swirled around him and his eye turned black. He saw what his mother was doing even through the wall. He immediately realized that these were abilities from his past life. Even when he was a red dragon, he had a huge amount of magic at his disposal. Ever since he couldn't enter the Magic Academy, it seemed to him that he would never have a chance to use it again. But the magic really did return. He thinks that it will return to him gradually. He looked at the middle crystal of the monster and thought, did he get this for killing that wolf? Suddenly, smoke appeared in the room, and villagers screamed outside about fire, and MC looked out the window to check what was going on. He saw that their house was completely ablaze, and Scarlet immediately burst into his room, saying that they had to leave. She ran up to him and used water magic to put out the flames near him, while he used his dragon eye to find out who had set the house on fire. It was Bob and Kyle's crazy mother, and she didn't regret her actions at all. The rest of the villagers gathered near the house, and someone said that it must be that problem child's fault again. Meanwhile, Scarlet took Lay outside and began to deal with the fire. She waved her hands, swirling the flames, and then sharply moved them aside, dispersing them. As soon as she managed to put out the fire, she sighed with relief, and the villagers began to disperse, saying that here is another manifestation of the curse. If he continues to stay here, sooner or later, there will be nothing left in the village. Ignoring them, Scarlet turned to her son with a smile and asked if he was very scared. Noticing that he was staring at one spot and was silent, she called out to him worriedly, after which he took her hand and told her with a smile that everything was fine. She was simply amazing. The fire went out in the blink of an eye. She led him back to the house and agreed with him, adding that it was not for nothing that she learned magic. After that, he looked down in disappointment and thought that people so wanted their house to burn down, and them along with it. He turned to the villagers and thought that since they wanted him dead, he had to take revenge on them. A new day dawned. MC went to train. He stopped in front of the bridge leading to the forest and used Dragon Sight to find all the monsters in the area. His eyes illuminated a bunch of monsters in the trees, and he thought that this was not bad. It seemed that all the monsters nearby were quite small, so there should be no difficulties. Meanwhile, the monsters were completely unaware. One of them picked an apple from the tree and started eating it, and at that very moment, Lay attacked it from behind and struck. The body of the small demonic monkey fell to the ground, and MC, looking at the other bodies, thought that there were 20 of them, which was almost enough. The system informed him that he had received a small monster crystal. Did he want to absorb it? He looked at his other rewards and thought that he was lucky to have received it. After killing 20 small magical beasts, he was only able to obtain 2 crystals. He couldn't even imagine what effect absorbing them would have. Suddenly, a whine was heard behind him. It was the wolf cub, spinning around near the body of its dead mother. Lay looked at it thoughtfully, then approached it and said that now he, too, would have to survive alone. He extended his hand to it, and the system immediately informed him that there was a chance of taming the black wolf cub. Does he want to do this? He decided to try it, after which the crystal and the wolf cub merged. The system informed him that the black wolf cub had been successfully tamed. MC looked at his pet with admiration and was overjoyed. But suddenly this little beast turned into a stream of energy and entered right into his head. Because of this, he became very excited and exclaimed, "Why does it absorb into his body after taming? There will be no side effects, right? Is it even possible to summon it?" The little dragon nodded several times, confirming this, and then showed him his reward, the ability to tame. He dismissed the system window, since now is not the time to study this, and decided to do more important things. He activated his eye and thought that they must be somewhere nearby. He found the bodies of Bob and Kyle somewhere on a high mountain in a cave, and immediately went there. Their mutilated bodies were already there. The monsters had devoured everything. Lay carefully removed their clothes, filled a bucket with their blood and other things, and then went back to the village. As soon as he arrived home, his mother began to scold him, saying that she had told him not to strain himself. His wounds were not yet fully healed. He lazily told her not to bother him, and she indignantly noted that he had learned to respond when scolded. Today, he soiled his clothes again. He told her that tomorrow he would go to training again, so he went to bed. She sighed heavily, unable to cope with him, and said that his father would return in 3 days, so they would start training together. He was so happy that he even threw the blanket off the bed and exclaimed that he could not wait to show him what he had learned. Scarlet immediately furiously ordered him to cover himself with the blanket, and he meekly lay down on the bed, afraid that she would scold him again. As soon as the whole village fell asleep, MC woke up. He took a bucket and the boys' clothes from the barn, and then went to their mother's house. He knocked on the door, and she, going down to the hallway, irritably asked who decided to make noise there at night. The knocking did not stop. She had hoped that it was her sons returning, and she immediately opened the door, joyfully exclaiming, "Are they back?" She saw no one outside. In the clearing in front of her house there were only clothes. She immediately recognized it, this t-shirt of Kyle's. She noticed tracks leading from the t-shirt to the forest, and ran there, shouting that she would definitely bring them home. That's how she wandered deep into the forest. And when she realized this, she felt uneasy. She looked around and noticed that it was so dark here. She shouldn't have gone so deep into the thicket. Lei, meanwhile, was watching her from a tree branch. Suddenly, there was a crack, and she screamed loudly in fear, then turned around and noticed Bob's clothes on a branch. She ran toward it, telling her sons not to run away, but she had no idea that she was walking straight into Lei's trap. As soon as she reached the right spot, he released the rope holding the bucket of blood, and it fell on her, dousing her with red liquid. She was very scared and began to look around, asking who did this, after which MC jumped out of the tree and she exclaimed that she knew it. He really is an incarnate monster. He must pay for her children. She ran toward him, but noticing many eyes looking at her from the darkness, she immediately stopped. The monsters, smelling blood, began to surround her from all sides, and then they all pounced on her at once, and Lei stayed to enjoy this spectacle. After that, rumors about Madam's death began to spread throughout the village. Walking through the market, MC heard some villagers discussing it, but as soon as they saw him and made eye contact, they immediately fell silent. They put on nervous smiles and greeted him in a friendly manner, but he ignored them and thought that it seemed like new rumors had spread among them. But he only liked it. When he reached the house, he found horses there, and this meant that the troop, along with his father, had returned. He immediately ran into the house, already anticipating a meeting with him, but the atmosphere inside was very oppressive and gloomy. Realizing that something was wrong, he immediately rushed to the bed where his father was lying and asked what was wrong with him. He was lying on the bed and shaking all over, his whole body covered in purple spots. Scarlet told her son that his father was sick, but he should be strong. He will get better. Lei immediately used his eye and, seeing the energy emanating from it, nervously wondered what it was. He had never seen such a state in his life, even as a red dragon. Then Jack began to speak, muttering that the shadows would kill everyone, and one of the squad swordsmen told them that, unfortunately, he had been struck by a shadow affliction. In the border territories, he was attacked by a shadow beast, and to protect a local resident, he exposed himself to the attack. MC frowned and thought that he had never encountered this in his past life. So when did it appear? What happened in the world after his death? Scarlet thanked the swordsman for returning her husband to her, and he apologized to her for not being able to protect him. Lei, meanwhile, glanced at the system window and wondered if perhaps magic could help him. It was one of the highest levels of magic he had once mastered. It dispelled all black magic and protective spells, but he doesn't know how to regain this ability. If earning rewards directly depends on killing monsters, then only killing high-level monsters will help him. But now he's too weak. He asked his mother if he entered the Night Academy, would he become stronger? She looked at him worriedly, then crouched down to match his face and confirmed it with a smile. That's where his father once studied, and he, too, will become as strong as him. He confidently hit himself on the chest and declared that he would definitely enter the academy and find a way to cure his father. His words made her burst into tears, then hugged him tightly and said that she believed in him. Meanwhile, the academy elders gathered together to discuss something. They looked at the huge crystal ball filled with darkness, and one of them said that the prophecy had come true. The world had changed. This reddish boy, what awaits them next? Salvation or disaster? It's unknown. The chief elder ordered the others to report to the Knight's Hall that they must find him as soon as possible. If he was their salvation, then they would guide him, but if he was a disaster, then they would destroy him. After a while, the people gathered in the square began to chatter. A man said that he had been standing in line since dawn, just to get the best seats. The guy next to him said that they had too, just to have a chance to look at them. Then a shout was heard from the crowd. They're coming! Several knights in carriages headed forward across the square. People shouted, they have to see. They're already on their way. It's Knight Delbert. Girls with loving eyes looked at him and shouted, he hasn't changed a bit. Only the day of the annual entrance competition allows you to see these handsome knights. Sir Knight, what a handsome man he is. After a while, the knight struck the ground with his sword and said, ladies and gentlemen, he welcomes them all. He is Knight number 1, Winford from Avrion Academy. Next to him are Knight Delbert and Knight Bernardo, whom they know very well. Today, the three of them will evaluate children who have reached the age of 5 and who are applying for admission to the academy. If they're interested in joining Avrion Academy, they must demonstrate their full strength. He then waved his hand to the side and shouted, the puppet with the sword is in place. Now, they ask all applicants to come up to the stage in order. Now, the first trial will begin. A few seconds later, one of the applicants approached the stairs and, smiling, thought, it's just a puppet. Even if it's strong, he can definitely defeat it on his own. He then held out his wooden sword in front of him, and the puppet also prepared for battle. His mother clenched her fists and shouted, come on. His father raised his hand and shouted, go. His son is the best. But the next second, the child was thrown aside, and the organizer announced that the trial had been failed after 1 second. The boy's parents looked ahead in surprise, and then Bernardo said, that's a failure, next one. The protagonist, standing in the crowd, thought, Just as Dad said, I'll have to defeat a level 1 puppet at the entrance exam. Although a level 1 puppet can't move, it defends itself well and counterattacks as quickly as an adult. Then he looked to the side in surprise and heard the knights talking among themselves. Delbert said that he told him that coming here was a waste of time. Winfred replied that they should do what the elders want. Delbert, the protagonist, thought from this distance he could easily hear what they were saying. It seemed his senses had become sharper since he had more crystals. Then Delbert said that a knight must come from a noble family. He didn't understand why they should waste their time on these filthy commoners. Winfred replied that he disagreed with him. Delbert chuckled and said that no matter how many rounds had been completed, not a single one had passed. The next second, the wooden sword fell to the ground and Bernardo, pointing at Gary, shouted that he was accepted. The peasant shouted, "He did it!" He said that this child was special. Then Gary gave a thumbs up and smiled. The protagonist looked at him sheepishly. Winfred looked at him and said, "That guy." Delbert said, "Red hair." The crowd began to whisper, "It's him! That kid's cursed. How awful. His hair is as red as blood. Have they heard of his father? He must be like this because of the curse. Does he really think he can be a knight, being a monster who only harms others? Hey, what a funny joke." Then Bernardo shouted, "Next, you must get ready. The exam starts in a minute." Then he looked surprised. Delbert? He walked forward and said that he didn't believe in the prophecy. If the red one really is as good as the prophecy said, then he's definitely bound to pass, right? Bernardo shouted, "What is he doing?" Delbert stopped next to the puppet and used his 3rd level activation. The next second, the puppet rushed to attack, and Bernardo shouted, "Careful!" The protagonist stood in front of the puppet, and then it approached him and swung its sword. Winfred reached for his sword and shouted that he must step back. "It's too dangerous." The next second, MC struck. Everyone present froze in anticipation, and then the wooden puppet's head fell to the ground. The knight returned his sword to its sheath and told him to announce the result. After that, Bernardo shouted that he congratulated him. He is accepted. After that, the protagonist left the arena. Sometime later, the protagonist stood by his father's bed and said that he was leaving. He passed the test and was leaving the village with the knights. He knows that he probably can't hear him, but he shouldn't worry. He will find a way to ease his pain. At that moment, his mother came to him and said, "Lei, he must take this." The protagonist turned to her and asked what it was. She hung the necklace around his neck and said it was a family heirloom, hoping it would bring him good luck. He replied that he should go then, and that she should take care of herself. After that, they went outside. His mother told him to be careful, and that if anything happened, she was always there. He grabbed the straps of his backpack and, walking forward, told her not to worry. He was already a man. She watched him go, wiping tears from her face, and said, "Lei?" After a while, the protagonist approached the knights, and Winfred, sitting on his horse, said, "Now everyone is finally assembled. He should jump into the carriage." Another little one was already waiting for him. He thought, "Another one, isn't it?" Then he peered into the carriage and thought, "It really is him." They looked at each other in surprise and blushed with embarrassment. MC wondered why only he had passed the entrance exams. After that, they sat at opposite ends of the carriage and looked in different directions. After that, the knight said that they were leaving. A little later, Gary said it was him. The protagonist looked at him in surprise, and then he apologized. The protagonist continued to look at him in surprise, and Gary closed his eyes and said, he knows that he hit him then and said too much. After that, he stood up and bowed, adding, "He apologizes, he is such a fool." MC replied, "Come on, he's just a 5-year-old kid. He already saved his life, didn't he?" After that, Gary sat down next to him and said, "He talks like he's not even 5 at all." In response, the protagonist laughed and asked, "By the way, where is Amy? Didn't she come to see him off?" Gary asked, "Didn't she tell him that she studies at Roland Academy?" The protagonist was surprised. Roland Academy. He thought that Amy had never mentioned to him that she had a talent for magic. After some time, the knight shouted, "They must stop the carriage." The boys looked out the window, and Gary said, "The fog is so thick. What's going on?" Winfred shouted, "Who is he? He must identify himself." The next second, the fog began to clear, and a woman walked forward and said, "Please, they must help her." She was Anne Woodwork from the No Trace Guild. Then Bernardo ran up to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and asked, "What happened?" She fell to her knees and said that their party was attacked by shadow monsters. Bernardo shouted, "How did these creatures get here?" They hadn't encountered any monsters on the way up to this point. Delbert said that perhaps the monsters smelled the scent and were afraid to approach them. Winfred said that they were heading to the city of Rainy. If she was on their way, they could give her a ride. She looked at him and said, "Thank you. They just have to drop her off in the city." MC was surprised. "Rainy, aren't they going to the Knight Academy?" Delbert told them not to worry. "What's the point of sending children to the front lines?" He was surprised. "The front lines?" Winfred said, "That's right. Since the Avrion Knight Academy is a fortress located in the border territory, an armed conflict could break out at any moment. They will have to train in the city of Rainy for 10 years until they begin to work on basic combat skills before they can continue training within the walls of the academy itself." The protagonist thought in surprise, 10 years. For a dragon, 10 years is like a snap of the fingers, but for a human, it's a long time. He doesn't know if Dad can handle it. After that, they set off again, and Gary, looking away, thought that out of the entire mercenary squad, only she survived, and Lei's father was also attacked by a shadow monster. Even the knights turned pale upon hearing about them. He can't imagine what would have happened if they had suddenly encountered them along the way. The next second, a purple mist began to spread around, and Winfred shouted, "Everyone, get on full alert. The big guy is approaching." At that moment, zombie animals appeared right in front of them. The knight looked ahead and shouted in surprise, "That thing? It's the king of the zombie bears. They're infected shadow beasts." The next second, one of the bears screamed loudly and the others rushed to attack. Winfred and the others armed themselves. He shouted to get ready. At that moment, a huge bear appeared behind Bernardo. The knight turned around and thought, damn, he can't dodge. But the next second, MC rushed forward with lightning speed and split the monster in two. Bernardo shouted that he was doing well. They should try to defend themselves. The boys replied that they understood. Then Delbert attacked the monster and shouted, "Why isn't this big guy moving?" Winfred shouted that he didn't know, as if he was waiting for something. Then Gary stopped in front of the huge monster, but the next second, the bear attacked him from behind. Without thinking, the protagonist attacked the bear from behind. Gary shouted in surprise, "Lay?" The protagonist jumped to the ground next to him and said, "Be careful, these bears are zombies. Much stronger than those magical wolves." Then Gary cleared his throat, after which the huge bear began to emit a powerful sound, knocking down the knights in front of it with waves of sound. Gary clenched his teeth and shouted, "What is this?" The protagonist thought, "What enormous power." Then the bear pointed its paw at them, and Winfred said, "He's just standing there and not even attacking." Bernardo attacked another monster and shouted, "What the hell is this guy trying to do?" Then the bear said, "They'll never be able to defeat the shadow. The shadow will cover these lands sooner or later." Bernardo shouted in confusion, "Is he talking?" The bear added, "They're doomed, and the people around them will all die." Delbert shouted, "What does that mean?" Bernardo replied, "I don't know. Does he think he's threatening them?" After that, the bear suddenly pushed off the ground and flew upward. The knight asked, "Has it disappeared?" Bernardo replied, "It has." Winfred sighed and said they should be glad the creature didn't attack them, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten out of here alive. At that moment, a system window appeared in front of the protagonist, saying, "Monster crystals obtained, absorb?" He thought it felt like the creature's words were directed specifically at him. Then Winfred approached them and said, "Lay, Gary, they guys did an excellent job. He thinks they'll definitely become great knights in the future." Gary thanked him, and then the protagonist asked, "Sir Knight, if he often encounters talking beasts like these." He replied that it wasn't really like that. They almost never encounter shadow beasts within the border, and this was the first time he'd encountered such a talking creature. He wondered why this child was so calm. He shouldn't be like this at his age. At that moment, Delbert clenched his teeth in irritation. Sometime later, the city of Rainy. The knight said, "They've finally arrived. It's strange. There seem to be more guards at the entrance than usual." Then a guard stopped near Winfred and said, "Sir Knight, he's back." He asked why the security had suddenly been increased. He replied that the Kingdom of Allur had issued an Amber Alert, and martial law had been declared in all cities. At that moment, Anne bowed to the knight and thanked him for escorting her to the city. He replied that there was no need to bow like that, it was nothing. At that moment, Winfred said, "Is that so?" He thought, "An Amber Alert? Is it that serious? These lands are already dangerous enough, so will he be the chosen one who will bring salvation to the people?" The protagonist thought, "Dad, he will definitely become a knight. This is just the beginning. He must definitely wait for his return." The city of Rainy, 10 years later. The teacher, holding a book in her hands, said that most knights do not use magic, but possess a different kind of power. Could anyone tell her what this power is? Gary. He raised his hand and then said that it is chi. Cultivating chi enhances their body's abilities, heightens their senses, and can take them beyond human capabilities even in a short period of time. She smiled and said, "Okay, it seems they're all ready to practice. And who's to tell her why they have to be 15 before they can start practicing chi?" Lay? At that moment, Gary thought in surprise, "Where did he go again?" He smiled awkwardly and said, "I think he went to the bathroom." The teacher sighed and said, "Okay. So Naslavia, then she should answer her question." She stood up and said, "Yes, it's because chi practice can put a lot of strain on the body. After 15, a person's internal organs are already formed. That's why training doesn't cause such great harm to the body." The teacher said, "Very well, Naslavia. Students, as she just mentioned, are finally about to begin practical classes. So she hopes they remember well what they've learned here. This knowledge will help them when they put it into practice." After a while, the protagonist stamped his foot and said, "Nova, forward." The magical wolf charged at the huge bear, delivering a powerful blow with its paws. The protagonist pointed to the system window that appeared, which said, "Little monster crystals acquired, absorb." The next second, he sighed, energy spreading through his body. The system reported that the crystal's energy had been fully absorbed. After that, he stroked his beast and said, "Well done, little one." The next second, it returned to the necklace, and he said, "Okay, that's it for today. He'll come back later. Otherwise, someone will probably lose their temper again." On the way back, Winfred caught up with him and said, "This is truly amazing." He was wondering who he'd see first when he returned, and he really is no slouch, managing to elude the gaze of their valiant guards. Lay. He hadn't seen him for 10 years, and he'd grown much taller. The protagonist walked forward next to him and said, "He's still the same. He hasn't developed a single wrinkle in 10 years. He genuinely doesn't understand how old he is." He laughed and said it was a secret. He heard from his personal mentor that he's been secretly hunting animals a lot lately. Looks like today was a great hunt. MC said that was true. If the alarm hadn't been cancelled recently, it would have been harder for him to sneak away. Then he put his hands behind his head and said, "But he prefers hunting outside to sitting in class." Winfred said he should be glad he didn't wander further. If the security from the outer connection had discovered him, they wouldn't have stood on ceremony with him. By the way, Lay, he stopped by his house before coming here. His father's condition hasn't worsened, and his mother is taking good care of him. She also asked me to tell him not to worry too much. With that, he placed a hand on his shoulder. The protagonist turned around and thanked him. He thought that for 10 years, no matter the wind or rain, he still trained, but he still couldn't awaken any abilities. He was as helpless as he was before leaving here. Then Winford took him by the shoulder and said that they should go. They needed to return to the city together. He needed to cheer up. Tomorrow was the day he left for the academy. He couldn't wait to meet the other kids. MC replied, yes. After a while, the city of Rainy, the big gate. Aaron looked at the knight and shouted, he doesn't know? What do you mean he doesn't know? He replied, the Amber Alert was lifted, so they had no reason to stop him. He's just a kid, where else could he go? He shouted how many times had he told them that this boy was special, and it was very important to keep an eye on him. At that moment, Winford said, Aaron, he should be more merciful. He grabbed the knight and then turned around and said, oh, Winford, he's back. Then he noticed the protagonist and hitting him on the back, shouted, where was he, you idiot? He told him to keep an eye on him. He still skips classes. How many times is this month? The protagonist stroked the bump on his head and said, the Amber Alert was lifted a month ago, so going for a short walk is perfectly fine. Isn't he too cruel, Mr. Aaron? He shouted, and who gave him a reason to be angry? The protagonist added, besides, he will be leaving soon anyway, and then Mr. Aaron will be completely relieved. Winford stood between them and spreading his arms out to the sides, said, quieter. Aaron shouted, as long as he is still his student, he is not allowed to skip a single class. Winford told them to listen to him and take a step back. Sometime later, in the town square, the knight shouted, students, please, they must gather in the square as soon as possible. An emergency meeting is about to take place. At that moment, Gary, looking at the protagonist, asked, I can't believe he's back so quickly. Was he caught? He put his hands behind his head and replied, yes, just bad luck. At that moment, Naslavia, crossing her arms, looked at them. After that, the knight opened a scroll and said, he is Lancey's squire, and starting tomorrow, he will be accompanying them all to the Avrion Knight Academy. The journey will take about 7 days, so if they don't want anything to happen, they must follow his instructions the entire way. Is that clear? The others replied, I understand. At that moment, the knight approached Winford and asked if he had already decided which route they would take this time. He folded his arms and replied, yes, they will take the route through the swamp. Confused, he shouted, the swamp? Isn't it too early for these kids? Winford asked. Too early? If he wants to become a knight, he simply has to go through the trials, right? Not to mention that this time, it won't be just them who are being tested. The next morning, the city of Rainy, the city gates. The knights are getting ready to leave, and the young knights are gathering in carriages. At this point, Cool thoughtfully said, I wonder why they didn't just use the teleporter. Wouldn't it be easier to get to the right place with that? The guy next to him said that was true. Another guy pointed to the map and said that this would obviously save them a huge amount of time. Then Dan folded his arms and said, bunch of idiots. Of course, Avrion Academy doesn't have teleporters. Cool extended his hand and said that he thought they were on the same level as Roland Academy. They have one. Can't they afford it? At this point, Naslavia also laughed lightly and said that it seemed like he hadn't been paying attention to the teacher in class. The others looked at her in surprise. She pulled out a small book and, adjusting a strand of her hair, said, the Avrion Academy, located on the border, is forced to defend itself not only from external enemies, but also from shadow monsters. If a teleporter were installed in such a place, then if their academy were destroyed, the enemy would instantly teleport to any part of their country. Cool was surprised. So they discussed this in class? Dan thoughtfully said that was interesting. The thought hadn't occurred to him. Then Naslavia turned away, embarrassed, and MC, leaning on Gary's shoulder, wondered if he'd imagined it, or if she'd really just been looking here. Not far from the ruined fortress city, the knight shouted, they must get out of the carriage, set up camp and rest. At that moment, Gary called out to the protagonist and said that he always felt like Naslavia was looking at him. He was surprised. Looking at him? What was so remarkable about him? He told him to look back. They looked back, and at that moment, Naslavia turned away, embarrassed. Gary, still building the tent, laughed slightly and told him to just take a look. Come on. It wasn't the first time they'd met her. The protagonist asked if it wasn't because of his hair color. He replied that, besides, he wasn't the only one with red hair anymore. At that moment, Huang asked why he wasn't helping. Duo replied that he was feeling lazy. Ian stood next to the guy who thanked him. He replied that it was okay, he was strong enough. He laughed and said that his muscles were truly amazing. At that moment, Cool clenched his fist and suggested, let's race. Who can build the tent the fastest? They weren't tired yet, were they? The protagonist said that was true, but it didn't matter. Gary asked, really? Naslavia is a real beauty. He was just too lazy to notice her. He replied that he didn't want to. At that moment, behind the abandoned castle, Dan said, Monk, he should come here. He replied that he didn't think they should leave the camp like that. What's that stench? Disgusting. It smells like dead rats. Dan said there was no end to this slime. What the hell was it anyway? He supposed it looked like a swamp? At that moment, Lancey appeared behind him and said, yes, it is a swamp. If they don't want their broken legs to be put in one place tomorrow while they fall asleep in broad daylight, then he advises them to go to their tents to sleep immediately. They replied, yes. As evening fell, the protagonist hid behind the wall and thought, not bad. Fortunately, he'd had a chance to look around a bit during dinner. He didn't need to negotiate with the knights on duty to sneak out of here. He headed forward, but at that moment Naslavia grabbed his hand and asked, "Lei, where are you going so late?" he replied. "To hunt monsters." She was surprised. "Hunting monsters? Is he crazy? It's much more dangerous here than in the suburbs. And what if he meets an average monster? Then the knights won't be able to save him in time. He understands that himself." He waved her off and told her not to worry. For him, an average monster is no problem. She was surprised. What? She thought, this boy. As morning came, the knight shouted, "Hey, slackers! It's time to get up. They need to wake up." Gary, sighing, opened his eyes, and the knight shouted, "Whoever gets up last will be punished." Gary jumped back from the main character in surprise, noticing his red eyes, and shouted, "What's wrong with him? He couldn't sleep last night." He replied that it wasn't so, and he got enough sleep. Gary thought, what a liar. Then he took his weapon and left the tent. He told him to get up. He doesn't want to be punished. At that moment, a system window appeared in front of the hero, and he thought, great. At this rate, he'll have absorbed all the crystals from the small monsters by the time he reaches Avrion Academy. And then, maybe, he can start absorbing the medium ones too. After that, the carriages set off again, and Winford looked around. Meanwhile, MC fell asleep in the carriage, and Gary thought it was a bit too quiet outside. The next second, the horse made a loud sound, and a toothy worm crawled through the carriage window. The boys drew their swords, and Gary shouted, "It's a toothy worm. They must prepare for battle." At that moment, one of the monsters approached the girl, but Gary stood in front of her and abruptly attacked the monster, shouting, "Careful!" She looked fearfully at the wounded monster and exclaimed, "Blood, so much blood." Gary shouted, "Those toothy worms never move alone. There will be more and more of them. They need to get higher and get out of the carriage." The others shouted, "Okay, they'll get rid of them." Then Gary stepped on part of the carriage and shouted that everyone should form back to back in groups of 3 and try not to leave any blind spots. "We need to get out and fight." At that moment, Cool jumped out of the carriage and shouted, "Yes! We need to compete to see who can kill the most sharp-toothed worms." The protagonist thought, is he worried? Then he used Dragon Eye mode, and looking at the battle, thought that they were all small monsters, so there was nothing to worry about. After that, he looked up at the cliff and thought, those are the 6 knights who recently separated from the group. So that's it. Dan, noticing the protagonist, shouted, "Where are they going? They shouldn't break formation." In response, the protagonist pointed at him and said that they were just small monsters, so there was no need for his help. Besides, there aren't that many of them anyway, so it's time to sleep. Lancey said, "Looks like he'll only get a red belt." The knight next to him said, "Probably just scared." Another knight said not to look at that kid. He seems to be doing great. He destroyed the worm with one precise blow. His movements are ascetic, and he has good control over his body to reduce the strain. The knight said, "Not bad. He should get a white belt." Winford added, "And this is a girl. She rarely takes the initiative, but she has excellent instincts." He pointed at Naslavia, and the knight said, "And she has a very good grip." At that moment, Naslavia sharply turned to the side and pierced the monster. Winford said, "She's a smart girl, who clearly has a good head on her shoulders." Lancey agreed. Indeed, she didn't even get dirty. And then one of the students shouted, "What the hell is that?" The others said, "Those sharp-toothed worms have merged into a big one." The boy screamed, "I'm scared, Mom." At that moment, one of the boys pressed himself against a tree and begged for help, but Ian grabbed the monster by a body part and tore it in 2. He shouted that his comrade shouldn't be touched. The red-haired brothers also rushed to the attack. Cool also attacked the monster and shouted, "45, come on!" The knight watching them said, "It looks like they won't need to interfere. These red-haired teenagers are really good." His colleague laughed and said, "Except for one thing." Lancey noted that it was almost over. Winford agreed with him. Meanwhile, Ian approached the boy and asked if he was okay. He, struggling to breathe, replied that he was fine. They finally dealt with them. At that moment, the girl thanked him for helping them. Ian. Watching what was happening, Winford thought that Ian was not only physically strong, but also took good care of his teammates, which was quite rare in comparison. At that moment, Gary looked at the protagonist and asked why he hadn't helped them. He replied that he was too sleepy. Gary said the carriage was too dangerous. If something happened, they wouldn't be able to save him. He replied that as long as the knights were nearby, they would be fine. He said he was acting like a loner, as always. Then Winford sighed and wondered who would be the chosen child of heaven from the prophecy. Meanwhile, Cool laughed and said that he had killed more insects than anyone else. Dan folded his arms and said he wasn't surprised. His comrade added, "It seems that this monster has simply fallen into a stupor." He said, "Exactly. It seemed like they would become real knights very soon." At that moment, a girl was bandaging the wounded guy's hand and asked if it hurt. He replied, "No, it's bearable." Dan said that if you're lucky, you might even get a white belt. Gary folded his arms and asked, "White belt? What's that?" He asked. He doesn't know. Even though all their escorts are knights, they have a ranking system. He sees the knights accompanying them, the white retinue. They are the highest ranking knights. They looked out the window, and he added, they had all been awarded the white belt, which signifies recognition of all a knight's skills during the trial. There are also green and black belts, which indicate different types of knightly abilities. And the lowest rank for a knight is the red belt. This is awarded to anyone who didn't perform well during the trial. Anyone who achieves a white belt will receive special conditions that include not only training with a personal tutor, but also additional assistance. Red belts, on the other hand, are much less fortunate. Although they undergo basic training, no one really cares about them. In most cases, they are left to their own devices. Well, to put it mildly, They are practically non-existent for the academy. The protagonist thought in surprise, they are left to their own devices? In that case, wouldn't he have plenty of free time to hunt shadow beasts? Then he would definitely be able to obtain more crystals and top-tier abilities again. He clenched his fist and thought, great, he simply must find a way to get the red belt. After a while, the knight said they should get out. They had arrived. The guys getting off the carriage were surprised at how huge it was. This gate must be 50. No, must be at least 100 floors high. Wow. MC looked ahead and thought, this is the Avrion Academy. Dan said, although he had heard a lot about it, but he did not expect the academy to be so majestic. His comrade agreed. Yeah, right. He said that the entire academy is a city in which every resident is a knight. The academy is lit by magic crystals, not torches. It's so luxurious. Gary said, it's like a completely different world from the village he grew up in. At that moment, Lancey walked forward and told them not to wander off and mess around. If they got lost, he wouldn't look for them. They answered, yes. He added that they would still have many opportunities to wander around the area. After some time, they began the tour. Lancey said, this is the armory. The warehouse worker said, good afternoon. He answered, uh-huh. Then the knight said that this is the library. They should be silent. The girls, noticing them, began to talk. She must see. It's Sir Lancey, so handsome. Then, Dan pointed his finger at the worker and asked, are even the employees in charge of issuing knights? He answered, of course. All graduates are required to remain volunteers at Avrion Academy for 2 years, after which the person decides for himself whether to leave or stay. Then they moved on. He said that this was the final point of their tour before they went to the dormitory. Ian asked, what is this? The protagonist looked at the tombstone and thought, a cemetery? The knight stood next to a huge statue and said that this is the burial place of the knights who died in the battle for the kingdom of Allure. Then he turned around and shouted that he brought them here to remind them that their battle never ends. They must remember the duty of a knight to fight to protect their homeland at any time. They answered, yes. He added, they must fight to protect their homeland. At that moment, the protagonist thought, these people really use the bodies of dragons to make armor and weapons. Then Naslavia, raising her hand, asked, may I ask whose monument this is? He answered that it was a statue of the founder of the academy, the legendary Dragon Knight. The protagonist asked, a Dragon Knight? Who is that? He said that they would understand when they learned more about the history of the academy. Okay, now they should follow him. At that moment, MC thought, ignore him? He used his ability and stopped, and Gary, turning around slightly, thought, what's wrong with him? He said that they need to go. At that moment, he focused his gaze on the ground and thought, how? How is this possible? A tomb under a cemetery, what's inside? Is it alive? After a while, Gary walked forward and said that he didn't know who he'd be dealing with, but he hoped they'd be good guys. The protagonist followed him and thought, strange, how there could be something alive in a cemetery, and in such a state, even if it were a monster. Then Gary turned around and asked, Lay, is he listening to him? Really? He asked, what? He apologized. He was just thinking, was he talking about his neighbors? He confirmed it. Then he stopped by the list on the wall and said, great, looks like they've been roomed together. They should see who else is with them. At that moment, Naslavia shouted, they're joking. They looked at her in surprise, and she blushed with embarrassment, and putting her hand to her chest, shouted, this is impossible. How can she live with the boys? They shouted in surprise, Naslavia. At that moment, Gary pointed his hand at her and said, no wonder. He heard that at the academy they treat knights equally, regardless of gender. At least they get along well. She yelled at him to shut up. She wasn't gonna live with them. Then she threw her backpack at him and shouted indignantly that she wanted to change rooms. Several knights peeked around the corner and asked, what's going on here? How noisy? MC replied, no big deal. Their leader was just angry. Then Gary stood up, put his hand to his face and said, hi guys, from now on they live here too. He's Gary. This guy is Lay. The others also introduced themselves. The protagonist looked at Ian and thought that he also had red hair. Then Gary looked at the paper and said, looks like they have 2 more roommates. The protagonist said, Dan and Matthew Woodwork. He seemed to have heard that name somewhere before. Then everyone looked at Naslavia in surprise, and she shouted that she wanted to change clothes. She was warning them not to even try to get into the room. Then she slammed the door behind her, and Gary said that something told him that the knight Lancey hadn't let her change rooms. At that moment, Dan approached them and asked, hey, why are they all standing in the hallway? Gary looked at him and, smiling, said that they were waiting for him. He was surprised. Him? Why were they waiting for him? He pointed to the side and said that he had just found a cockroach there. They were discussing who would come in and solve this problem. He was surprised. A cockroach? That was ridiculous. He grabbed his weapon and abruptly opened the door, then ran inside. He shouted, what is a cockroach for a future knight? He'll show everyone now. The next second, a loud scream was heard from the room. After a while, Dan asked how he could lie to him about the cockroach. Was it really that funny? His friend said, interesting. Then Dan added that he'd angered that crazy woman so much that she might try to poison him while he was sleeping. Gary, enjoying his meal, said he was incredibly lucky. Some people were just waiting for a chance to chat with her. He said, who would have thought she was so hot-tempered? At that moment, Naslavia indignantly shouted, what the hell is he talking about? Is there anything to be proud of? Does he even realize what he's done, huh? They replied, no, nothing. They remained silent. She blushed with embarrassment and folding her arms across her chest, asked how they could eat so calmly. The test was coming up soon. Hadn't they heard about it? Gary asked for the test for the distribution of knightly belts. He knew about it, but that was no reason to refuse dinner. The protagonist also enjoyed the food and said, and it was free too. She sighed and said, The two of them are just hopeless. Just then, two more students passed by, and one said, "No wonder those broke people were so into this." His friend added, "It looked like they'd never tasted anything so delicious in their pathetic lives." Gary and MC looked at them and he added, "In any case, he didn't think he could overcome himself and eat a couple of servings before he got home to his mother." Then they stopped near Ian, and one of them said to look at the guy's size. He barely fit at the table. His friend came up, put his hand on the table, and said, "Has anyone ever told him he takes up too much space? It's amazing why all these red-haired freaks keep coming from Rainy." At that moment, Duo reached for his dagger, but his brother stopped him. One of the bullies said, "It's scary to think how contagious this stuff is." His friend said, "He wouldn't want to be like them. They need to stay away from them. A bunch of rednecks." Then Monk shouted that this was too much. The bully asked, "What? He wants to take over for him?" His comrade added, "All he can do is barely reach the red belt. He better take care of himself and keep his cool." At that moment, Ian extended his hand and said, "No need, Monk. It's fine." Then the bully put his hand on Ian's shoulder and said, "Hey, it looks like he has the beginnings of a brain after all. You red-haired brat." He's warning them again. If he sees them at the academy, he better run away and hide behind the wall. He replied, "Okay." At that moment, a piece of chicken flew into the bully's face. He caught it and shouted, Who dared?" He has to step forward. The next second, the protagonist pressed his face to the table. He shouted for him to let go. His comrades shouted, "What do you want?" The protagonist began to break the bully's arm and shouted, "Do I have to tell you again who we should avoid?" He shouted, "Him, the vile red-haired monster. He's asking for help. This guy seems to have lost his mind." At that moment, the knight looked at them, and the guys shouted, "Fight!" Then Ian approached the protagonist and said, "Lay, he's grateful to him, but they haven't done anything to him." Gary said, "He has to stop already. The knights are watching." Naslavia said, "The test is coming soon. He shouldn't make a bad impression on the knights before it starts." He replied that he didn't care. At that moment, the bully pointed his finger at him and shouted, "Idiot! Sir Knight, he must help him. That red-haired guy is bullying the students." Then Lancey walked up to them and, clasping his hands behind his back, said that he needed to let him go. The protagonist ignored him and said, "He knows, Ian. There's one thing he's learned well since childhood." The bully shouted, "He must help." The MC added, "When someone tries to assert themselves at his expense and bullies him," the knight said, "Lay." He orders him to stop. The protagonist added, "We must give the bullies what they deserve." He twisted the bully's arm tighter. The others were surprised. "What's going on? What's going on? How terrible." Then the protagonist turned to his comrade and told him to understand. "That's the only way they can at least understand and learn something." He replied, "Uh-huh." Then the knight angrily hissed, "Why did he ignore his order?" In response, he apologized and said that his ears sometimes failed him. He only listened to what he wanted to hear. Then he walked forward and, taking Gary by the hand, said that they should go eat. They couldn't let those idiots ruin their appetites. At that moment, whispers were heard in the hall. After all, it was the first time those two guys had really started bullying them. Yeah, even though they were always causing trouble, this time they got their comeuppance. At that moment, Lancey, still angry, thought, "Lay." After a while, the students started whispering, "Aren't those the three head knights? Oh my god, is that Delbert? It's time to prepare for the sorting." Then Winford raised his hand and said that he asked for silence. He would introduce them to the deans of Avrion Academy, the 6 elders. The others started muttering, "Are those the 6 elders? Are they really that powerful?" What should he do? He suddenly felt nervous. No one warned that 6 elders would come to oversee the evaluation process. The protagonist looked at them with his ability and thought that their aura was as powerful as that of those who killed him. Then the knight added that today, in the presence of the elders, they would undergo a test to obtain knighthood rank. Depending on the results of this evaluation, they would distribute knighthood belts of different colors. As some of them may have already heard, if they do poorly, they will receive a red belt. This means they are among the worst. But he also wants to point out that even if they receive a red belt today, they could very well end up in his place in the future. The fact that they became academy students at the age of 5 already means they are more talented than ordinary people. Subsequent training will allow them to develop these talents, so please, they must not give up. Then the protagonist sighed and, crossing his arms, thought, inspirational speeches are clearly not his forte. I wonder if he will be surprised when he receives a red belt. Then Winford looked at Lancey and said he'd leave the rest to him. He replied that he shouldn't worry. He always does his job well. There are 5 tests, each designed to test different knightly skills. These include the Gem of Power, Ignite the Earth, Meta-Acoustic Pursuit, Eye of Precision, and Will of Truth. The first test is the Gem of Power. Lancey pointed at the stone and said the rules were simple. Push the stone with all your might, and when it hits the mark, they'll complete the test. He then held out a gauntlet and added that they'll each be given 2 attempts to pass the test. If they fail the first time, they can use this magic gauntlet during their attempt. It will increase their physical strength and help them pass the test. And of course, using the med gauntlet will affect their final scores, so the decision to use it is entirely up to them. At that moment, Gary looked at the protagonist and whispered, "It seems so simple." He answered, "Yeah, easy." But he doesn't think there are those who really don't want him to go further. Lancey spoke, and the last announcement, before the trials officially began. Gary looked at the protagonist again and asked, what was he talking about? Lancey raised his voice and said, using his authority as examiner, he was not allowing Lay to participate in this trial. Then the protagonist folded his arms over his chest and told them to just watch. Gary shouted indignantly, "Why?" Naslavia shouted, "This is unfair." Why is he not letting Lei take the trial? Lancey held his hand out to the side and asked, unfair? He simply wanted to remind everyone who was going to become knights once again that their duty is to obey their superiors, both on the battlefield and within the walls of the academy. If anyone disagreed with something, they could contact his superiors, and then he would unquestioningly follow their orders, should any come from them. So, they must begin. The others shouted, yes. Gary looked at the protagonist and said, well, it looks like that knight has a grudge against him. Naslavia said, Lei, he should talk to the academy management. They can't do this to him. MC smiled, put his hands behind his head and said, it's for the best. After all, this is what he wanted, so they shouldn't worry and get ready for their performance. They will participate in the next test. Then he looked ahead and thought, how opportune. This prank by the knight Lancey only further guarantees him of receiving the red belt. Naslavia looked at him and said, Lei. After some time, the protagonist's comrades passed the test, and Gary, approaching the protagonist, wiped the sweat from his face and said that he passed. The protagonist replied that then he would like the next test even more. He was surprised. Why? He replied, he sees the examiner of the second test standing over there, and he is clearly from Roland Academy. Gary grabbed his face and shouted in surprise, magic? They hadn't trained for that at all. How would they pass the test? The protagonist replied that the enemy on the battlefield wouldn't care what they had trained for. He assumed the second test would be magic resistance. More often than not, people with greater physical gifts have less pronounced magical aptitude. He thought all 5 tests were aimed at identifying their strengths and weaknesses, so that they could then develop a training plan for each of them. Gary raised his index finger and shouted, and there was something in his words. Maybe he was that super talent? MC said. Well, he found that hard to believe. After a while, the second test, Earth Ignition. The examiner pointed his hand to Gary's head and a few seconds later said, 57 seconds. Next. The protagonist walked up to him and folding his arms said, not bad, he lasted long enough. Gary, leaning his hand on his comrade, said, damn, less than a minute. Dan, supporting him, said, he's already done well. After all, an hour in a mage's fiery illusion in the real world is only a minute. Then the examiner directed energy to Naslavia's head, and she closed her eyes and said she knew it was an illusion. She screamed that magic wouldn't scare her. Cool screamed, wow. A full 5 minutes had passed, much longer than the previous student. Monk added in surprise. So long, it's unbelievable. Then the examiner looked at Naslavia and said, that's it, she's shown her power. The others screamed, wow, who is this girl? That was amazing. She's not his goddess for nothing. He needs to shut up. He needs to calm his thoughts. Then the examiner spoke next. Lei. Naslavia, passing by the protagonist, wished him luck. After that, the examiner extended his hand to him and asked, is he ready? He confirmed it and suggested they begin. He thought 20 seconds would be enough, but no, it seemed better to fall right away. The spectators were saying, red hair. He has red hair. Then the protagonist thought, has it already begun? Good. Now. Then he looked in bewilderment at the enormous dragon's open mouth approaching him. A powerful stream of fire rushed toward him, and he covered it with his hands and thought, what? Isn't that him? The next second, he and the examiner flew apart, and the others watched in bewilderment. Then the examiner pointed forward in fear and shouted, damn it, he's cursed by the red dragon. The others were surprised. What happened? Why did the examiner suddenly fall? He, of course, guessed that if he hung around near him, sooner or later there would be trouble. Didn't he hear? Damn it, he said, damn it. So he's even more dangerous than the other red-haired ones. And the protagonist looked at the examiner and asked, is he okay? Winford, leaning towards him, said, nothing serious, he's probably just too tired. He should also go and rest. The protagonist agreed. Then Winford looked away and thought, strange, he'd exhausted all his mana. After a while, the elders asked, well, had he figured out the cause of what happened? Winford replied, yes, it's a mana illness caused by magic exhaustion. He'll be fine after a little rest. One of the elders asked, could it be because he'd spent too much mana on the students he'd assessed before? His partner said he didn't think so. How could a mage from Roland Academy exhaust his mana on a trial like this? Winford said he'd arranged for a rest area and would look into the matter later. Let another mage finish the trial. The elder replied, okay, he'd entrust all organizational matters to him. Then the knight bowed and said he'd handle it. After a while, the protagonist asked in surprise, mana sickness? What was that? Naslavia replied, when a mage runs out of mana but still releases magic, it has an anti-magic effect. That's what mana sickness is. The protagonist folded his arms and said, so that's it? Gary asked, so he spent too much mana on the students in front of him? Tough luck. The protagonist chuckled and said he could only envy others' talents. Naslavia looked at him in surprise and thought, it's strange. How could something like this happen to a mage from Roland Academy during the exam for novice knights? And what kind of curse was that he was shouting about back then? The next second, everything around them started shaking and they were screaming, what's going on? An earthquake. The students screamed in panic. What is this? The mage spread his arms out to the sides and the others screamed, is this magic? The entire training ground was overgrown with trees. Then Gary started coughing and asked, what the hell? Naslavia, also trying to clear her throat, said, someone used magic. Then the examiner climbed onto a branch of a tall tree and shouted, the third test begins right now. The others were surprised. What? He pointed at himself and said that he was the examiner for the third test. All they had to do to successfully complete it was follow him and exactly imitate his movements. The third test was meta-acoustic pursuit. Then he shouted, begin. He disappeared in an instant, running forward. Gary shouted, already? The protagonist thought, how fast? Then Monk ran forward. Dan shouted, Monk, why is this guy so fast? Gary called out to the protagonist. Then they ran forward, and he shouted, yes. Naslavia ran after them and shouted that she wouldn't lose to them. She looked at Dan and shouted that they would see each other. He looked at her in surprise, and then shouted, what? Isn't anyone going to wait for him? Meanwhile, the examiner was moving forward, jumping from tree to tree. He thought that this test was too hard for these children. Maybe he should wait for them a little. What? He saw the students approaching him and shouted that it was not bad. Gary, rushing after Monk, shouted that they would catch up with him. Then the examiner grabbed a tree branch and said that it seemed there was no need to give them any slack. Then he continued on his way forward and shouted for them to keep up. After a while, the archer said they were getting closer. The protagonist ran with his comrades and thought, damn, he's not very good at chasing. He still prefers to move on all fours. Then he was surprised to notice arrows in front of him and thought, is that it? I think so. He shouted, careful, arrows. The student stopped abruptly, trying to dodge the arrows, and then the examiner folded her arms over her chest and said that there was no need to give them any slack. She could track each of them without a problem. The examiner said that these kids really were good. She should go see for herself. She told him not to hold back and keep moving forward. Otherwise he would fail. Then she jumped out of the tree and shouted that the test had begun. The MC looked ahead in surprise and then jumped onto the platform and said that it looks like they decided to conduct 2 tests at the same time. Gary, taking a bow, asked, is this to test their bow shooting accuracy? Naslavia grabbed the bow and, running forward, said, most likely. Then she leaped further and shouted that she was first. The examiner, watching them, said that all the targets they needed to hit were ahead in the forest. 3 shots should be enough. With her assistance, of course. The 4th test is the Eye of Precision. The protagonist, continuing to follow Gary, thought that although he wanted to get a red belt, he didn't want to be the worst. He was starting the performance. Then he was surprised to notice an arrow full of energy and shouted, huh? He pushed his comrade aside and shouted, careful. Gary called out to him anxiously, and the protagonist gritted his teeth and thought, damn it, he can't dodge it. The next second, the arrow flying toward him was deflected by another arrow and sent flying off to the side. He wondered if they really had to hit the students with such force during the exam. Gary sighed and said that was close. Then Martha asked, are they okay? Gary shouted, yes, they're grateful, everything's fine. Great shot. She replied, for what? She wouldn't have been able to knock it off course if she hadn't been nearby. Then the protagonist shouted, be careful, there's more. Several more arrows flew towards them. He thought something was wrong. The arrow he just fired had a distinct feel. This arrow and the one the examiner had fired were clearly different. Someone really wanted to kill them, or maybe even him. Then he pulled the bowstring back and, pointing his bow to the side, shouted, there. The next second, his bow broke in half and he smiled in surprise. At that moment, the examiner jumped onto a branch and shouted, who the hell is that? She fired several arrows and then, jumping to the next branch, thought about how fast she was. She couldn't believe she hadn't managed to avoid such a powerful shot. She barely had time to breathe. Who wants to get rid of the students? After that, she turned around and shouted that she was sorry. She missed the attack. She was sorry for scaring them. Guys, they have to keep going through the trials. They replied, yeah. Then the protagonist looked ahead and thought, since she was apologizing like that, it was clearly not her who shot the arrow. At that moment, Gary looked at him and said that they need to go. They set off. MC jumped forward and thought, it looks like they are being pursued by really dangerous guys. After a while, the students found themselves on the ground and they started discussing. Dan shouted, Monk, traitor. He didn't even wait for him. He replied, it's a trial after all. The brothers were talking. Maybe next time he'll run faster? He replied, he's lazy. Then Naslavia shouted, what? So that's what happened to them. Why don't they tell the knights about this? The protagonist stood in front of her and said that he thinks it's best for them to forget about it. She shouted, but why? Gary agreed with Lay. The examiner was only keeping the truth from them because he didn't want to influence their grades. It could be a deliberate attempt to hide something. If someone really wanted to eliminate them, it had to be someone with access to the examination room. He was afraid that might be it. Before he could finish speaking, Naslavia shouted, the examiner or the knight associated with him. Then what were they going to do next? The protagonist folded his arms and replied, proceed gradually. He would like to know who that person was, lurking in the shadows. After a while, the examiner noticed a presence near the gate and, pointing her weapon forward, shouted, stop. What did he want from the newcomers? He mustn't move. From this distance, she would simply blow a hole through his head. The man turned and shouted, then she must try. He armed himself with a knife and the examiner rushed to the attack. Sometime later, the 5th test of the Will of Truth. Delbert stopped next to a huge sword and said that this test would test their willpower and control over their chi. He took the sword in his hand and said that this sword was made from the crystal of a high-ranking monster, a firebird. When they held it in their hands, the sword would emit flames. They might not have fully learned to control their chi yet, but they should try to concentrate and direct their willpower in the right direction. Then he said, okay, first. Ian walked forward and said, yes. Then he took the sword in his hand, and a huge amount of fire erupted from the sword. Delbert took notes and said, okay, next. Meanwhile, the elder said, okay, he failed the kill, and the examiner found out about it. His subordinate bowed and said it was his fault. The elder added that he hadn't expected to solve this problem on the first try. He then put on a golden mask that allowed him to change his appearance and added, but at least now they could send a signal to their comrades. They, the Pureblood Guild, had never disappeared. After a while, Delbert looked at Gary and said, "Okay, next." He then walked forward and said that this was the final test, so he should try his best. The protagonist waved at him and told him not to worry. Then Naslavia approached Gary and said that she had always wanted to know if Lei was really that strong. He asked thoughtfully, "Lei?" At least, as far as he could tell, he really was very strong. At that moment, Dan turned around and said, but his results in the first 4 tests were just terrible. Naslavia asked, "Why do you think Lei is strong?" He replied that although the last time they fought, he won easily, but 10 years ago, a mid-level demon wolf attacked him, and Lei was able to defeat it and save him. Then he laughed loudly and told him not to lie. 10 years ago they were only 5 years old. How could he defeat a mid-level monster, and a shadow wolf at that? At that moment, Naslavia thought, if he really is so strong, then why is he hiding his strength? Then Delbert convinced the protagonist to begin. The protagonist looked at the system window that appeared in front of him and thought, it said that he received a large monster crystal. Absorb it? He looked at the hilt of the sword and asked why the flames weren't appearing. MC swung the sword and asked what was going on. The others began to assume that maybe the sword was broken. It was broken, and the light that emanated from the sword was gone. Why did all sorts of bad things always happen to him? Then Delbert grabbed the sword and shouted for him to step back and give it to him. He looked at the crystal and the sword's hilt and shouted, "This is a weapon made from a top-tier beast crystal, the treasure of the Allure Kingdom." What did he do with it? He turned around and grabbed the protagonist by the clothes, and he spread his arms out to the side and asked, what could he even do? This was a weapon made from a top-tier beast crystal, not to mention that he was under constant surveillance. Delbert shouted indignantly, "He's an idiot!" A knight ran up to him and said that he must allow the report. He must tell him something important. He asked, "What is it?" Then they walked away a little and began to talk. After that, the knight walked forward and waving his hand shouted, "The tests are over. Now they can return to their rooms." The others began to whisper, "It's over." He was so tired. Delbert shouted that they would meet for dinner, where they would be presented with a knight's belt. There was a murmur of murmurs all around. He was doing better than that guy, so he definitely wouldn't get the red belt. He needed to be quiet. At that moment, Delbert said he should go to his room too. The protagonist agreed, then thought, is what that knight said true? He remembered the knight telling Delbert that the examiner for the 4th trial had just been found murdered. Meanwhile, Winford had stopped by the body, and the knights were saying, "When we reported everything, she was already there." He thought, the body is still warm. It all happened not long ago. Who could it be? Then he shouted, "They must report everything to the elders immediately." They shouted, "Yes." Sometime later, at a meeting of the elders, one of them asked, "So she's dead?" The knight bowed and said, "Yes, the cut was clean, and she was killed with a single, precise blow, which is a sign of a master's work. Moreover, the criminal hadn't activated the safety mechanism." The elder said that it seemed like someone was acting from the inside. After all, rumors about some organizations never died down. His colleague added that he thought the Pureblood Guild or a Dark Guild was behind this. He said that the leader of the Greenbelt Knights was killed during the exam. The attacker was too brazen. They must see the investigation through to the end. "Elder, what is he thinking?" He said that they should keep it a secret and not spread it too much. They should tell the Knights so that they could continue the investigation and find the real culprit. They answered, "Yes." After some time, the students gathered in the hall. They said, "He is so excited. I wonder what color belt he will receive." Naslavia asked, "How is she, Martha?" "Great, she finally has a girl neighbor." "What is her last name?" Gary said, "Woodwork." "Is Anne Woodwork really her relative?" She was surprised. How do they know her mother? At that moment, the protagonist began to think that if even the examiner had been killed, the killer must have been quite unusual, and the only suspects left were high-ranking officials. And if you think about it, at the academy, only the head of the knights, the elder, wielded such power. At that moment, Gary approached him and asked if he remembered the mercenary they encountered when they went to Rainy. She was Martha's mother. What a coincidence. Come on. He's been daydreaming too much lately when he talks to him, my friend. The protagonist was surprised and told him to back off. He was thinking about the exam. And Naslavia asked if perhaps he was after all about the identity of the one who fired the arrow. He wondered why there had been no reaction to the completion of this test. He thought it would be better not to tell them about the examiner's murder. After all, the more they knew, the more danger there was for them. Then Naslavia said it was just a strange coincidence. He thought it was just bad luck. But besides the sword test, there was also the previous fire test. And then the students shouted, "The head knights are here." Finally, he came. After that, Winford put his hand forward and said that he would announce the beginning of the distribution of knightly belts. Those whose names he called, please, they must take turns coming onto the stage. "Derry," he answered. "Yes." Then he walked forward, and the others began to whisper, "It's that guy. He was too good at everything. He was the best at everything. He will definitely get a white belt." The best of all was his goddess, Miss Naslavia. Whoever it was, he will definitely get a white belt. Then Winford said, after careful discussion among the knights, it was decided to award him a black belt. Gary cried out in surprise. "Huh? This?" Winford told him to accept it with pride. He took the belt and answered, "Yes, sir." The others began to whisper, "What's going on? Shouldn't he have gotten a white belt? By the way, what do black belts usually do?" He doesn't know. He's never even considered anything other than a red belt, so he doesn't know. Then they announced the next one. Ian, a white belt. The others were surprised. What? This red-haired monster got a white belt? He should speak more quietly. Had he forgotten what a boulder he'd easily lifted into the air that time? He knew his goddess would get a white belt. He has a red belt. He can't be near his goddess anymore. Then Martha showed off a green belt and smiling said thank you. Dan looked at his belt with tears in his eyes and asked, but why? Even Monk got a black belt. Then they called the main character. The others whispered, it's him. What kind of belt will it be? Definitely a red one. He walked forward and thought. Finally, it was his turn. Winford handed him the belt and said that after some difficult discussions, they had decided to award him a black belt. Dan grabbed Monk by the shoulders and turning around shouted, how did this guy get a black belt even though he did so poorly on the test? He responded with an awkward laugh and said, not easy, Ray has a hidden talent. He was surprised. What's that? Does that mean he's the only loser here? The protagonist then looked at the belt in his hand and wondered, how did this happen? Why did he get a black belt? Is there some kind of conspiracy? Winford then said, all the night belts have been awarded. They can accept it or not. But this is their current result. Starting tomorrow, after completing basic training, please follow the night captain according to their belt colors to begin training. Gary looked at his belt and asked, black, what are they even doing? Meanwhile, Kay looked at the list and said, they've assigned him 2 red ones. He hoped they wouldn't become a thorn in his side. Future Dragon Knight. The next day, the training grounds, the student waved his hand and said, see you then. His comrade also waved and agreed, yes, see you then. In the crowd behind them, someone said, they should go. They could finally return to the dorm. At that moment, Cool noticed that everyone else had already left. Why hadn't their mentor arrived yet? He hoped he was at least a normal person. At that moment, the mentor appeared behind him and asked, is that him? Then the mentor walked forward and said that he was their future mentor and that they should follow him. Cool raised his hand and shouted, yes. After a while, they walked forward. Kool-Aid looked at the protagonist and asked, did Sir Knight just introduce himself? He replied that he didn't think so. Gary asked, why doesn't he go and ask him? Then Cool raised his hand and shouted, Sir Knight, how should they address him? He waved his hand and said that they could call him K. The protagonist was surprised at what a strange name. Cool said he didn't think that was his real name. Then Delbert approached them and, greeting his mentor, added what a coincidence. K noticed him and approached him, and Delbert said, 2 red ones, it looks like he's going to have a tough time. He then looked at the protagonist and asked, he's probably proud of having received a black belt? Lay, if it were up to him, he would never have allowed someone like him to even enter the academy. He replied, it's good that he doesn't make that decision. Delbert then said angrily, he must be careful. He'll be keeping a constant eye on him. He was then surprised to notice a sword in front of him, and Kay pointed the weapon at him and said, Delbert, he should remind him that Lay is now a member of his Black Belt Knights team. He blew out smoke and added that he wouldn't want prejudice against certain people to provoke conflict between them. In response, he said that very soon they would see whether it was bias or not. Sooner or later, everyone would find out that the prophecy was false. Then he turned around and shouted, good luck to them. At that moment, Gary asked in surprise, a prophecy? What kind of prophecy? He'd never heard of such a thing. At that moment, Kay looked ahead and said that they should come with him. After some time, they approached a building, and he said that they would undergo special training here. The students standing behind him screamed, what a draft. Monk added that he couldn't open his eyes. At that moment, Gary, squeezing one eye shut, looked ahead and said, this place is so wretched. Then Monk cried out in fear, where is Sir Kay? Cool shouted that he hadn't noticed either. But when did he manage to disappear? The door slammed behind them, and Gary cried out in fear. What was that? At this moment, the protagonist used the dragon's eye and thought, disappeared. He can't believe he's untraceable, even with the dragon's eye. At that moment, his comrade called out to him and asked if he could see where he was. He replied that he couldn't. He hadn't seen him. At that moment, the mentor placed his hands on their shoulders and asked if they were looking for him. They cried out in fear, and then he said that from now on, their training would take place in complete darkness. They must hone their skills, sharpen their senses, until the day they become one with the darkness and turn it into a powerful weapon. Gary said, Sir Kay, he heard that in the future, Black Belt Knights will be primarily involved in assassination. Is that true? MC thought, assassination. So that's what worries Gary. The mentor sighed and, confirming this, added that, compared to other students, they possess skills that make them particularly suitable candidates for assassination missions. Then Gary lowered his gaze and wondered why they weren't properly appreciated, like the others. Kay said they were chosen by the Black Belt Knights because they had something special compared to others. He placed his hand on Gary's shoulder and added that if they wanted to fight someone head-on, they had to believe they could do it. Gary blushed with embarrassment and said, Sir Kay. Then the instructor tossed them special devices and told them to take them. From now on, they could fight however they liked. Sometime later, the protagonist lay on his bed. He looked at the device on his hand, which said, Lay, rating 300, training completion for today, 100%. He said, 300. He thought, it turns out this thing can display the current rating. According to Sir Kay, the rating will be updated every day after training is completed, and students from the same class can challenge each other to battle at will. If the lower-ranked student wins, they receive the rank of the higher-ranked student. The higher the rank, the more resources they can obtain. Then MC sat up and, looking at his comrade, asked how many students they had in the course. Gary replied that he thought about 300. The protagonist thought about it. It turned out he was at the very bottom of the rankings. Then he asked what rank he was in. Gary looked at him uncertainly, and Dan leaned towards him. His device said, Gary, rank 1, today's training completion, 100%. Dan grabbed his hand and shouted in surprise, what? They were all wondering who was in first place, and it turns out it was him. What a joke, first and 300th in the same room. He's going for a walk. At that moment, Naslavia turned around and said, boys are so superficial. Martha laughed in response. Martha, rank 89, Naslavia, rank 3. Then Ian looked at Monk and asked, he seems very happy. Is there a reason? He looked at his device and replied, no, nothing. His device said, Monk, rating 65, training completion for today 100%. He felt overwhelmed with the desire to keep working hard. 10 days later, the protagonist walked down the hallway and thought that today's hunt hadn't been very productive either. He was about to absorb 100 lesser beast crystals. At that moment, he peered into the room where his comrades were shouting at each other. What did he mean by that? Monk shouted, thanks to these special exercises, he was able to improve his rating. His rating was 50. Gary extended his hand to him and said that he simply thought all this was rather superficial and wasn't helping him at all. Monk shouted, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's useless. Gary replied that he managed to maintain his place in the ranking without these exercises. Monk looked at him indignantly and said, he. At that moment, MC looked at Dan, standing nearby, and asked, what's going on? He replied that it was the first time he saw Monk so excited. They were arguing about whether the special training for obtaining a black belt was useful or not. So he was interested in what exercises they were doing. The protagonist said thoughtfully, special training. Stealth, assassination, and black belt camouflage skills are indeed things Gary isn't so good at, but Monk showed amazing talent in them. But Gary was also right. His basic training was much better than Monk's in every respect. Even though Monk's skills were rapidly improving, Gary was still the superior student. And then Monk shouted that he wouldn't allow him to denigrate his efforts like that. He was indignant. Had he even said something like that? He should think whatever he wanted. Then Naslavia approached them and, waving her hand, said, okay, they should stop. He should talk to them too. He walked forward and asked, why don't they guys settle this with a duel? Dan punched his hand and shouted, that's a great idea. Then Naslavia shouted, they're here to break them up or egg them on. Then Monk put his hand to his chest and shouted that he agreed. They should have a ranking battle. Gary frowned and said he didn't care. But since they were going to fight, he would show him if the skills he valued were really that useful. After a while, one of the students looked at his comrade and asked, do you want to go and watch? There seemed to be a freshman fight going on. The student asked, is that the blonde guy? And who is he going to fight? His comrade said he'd heard something about him. He's a dark horse who also holds a black belt and seems to be ranked pretty high. At that moment, the knight Delbert's youngest son came forward and asked, fight. Eric said there was nothing to see. They were just hillbillies from Rainy. At that moment, Cool held the box in front of him and shouted, bets. They must place their bets. The Academy's rising star, Gary, versus the dark horse, Monk. They must come and see who will have the last laugh. Dan approached him and said, here, 10 silver coins on Gary. Cool asked, who will win, gentlemen? At that moment, Naslavia turned around and shouted indignantly, Dan, how can you bet on your roommates? Then he approached them and Martha, holding out a coin, said she was also betting on Monk to win this time. Naslavia was surprised. Martha wondered why she was too. Cool smiled and thanked them for their trust. Then Naslavia turned to the protagonist and asked if he thought Monk had a chance. Then Cool stood in the arena and, spreading his arms, shouted, ladies and gentlemen, the moment they've all been waiting for has arrived. The long-awaited battle is about to begin. They must witness this moment together. At that moment, the protagonist looked at the student and asked, so she also thinks Gary will win? Then Cool raised his hand and shouted that he would start the battle. At that moment, shouts were heard all around. He must do it. Gary is very talented, well-versed in various techniques, and the academy teachers were among them. And Monk, more than anyone else, had worked on his special training. It could be said that he is the most suitable opponent for Gary right now. Then smoke appeared in the arena. Monk jumped back and thought, I'm caught. Voices were heard near the arena. Has he lost? He should wait. There's no need to rush. The next second, Monk shouted in surprise, what? He held his sword out in front of him, blocking Gary's attack. He appeared from the smoke and, pointing his sword forward, told him to give up. He couldn't defeat him. At that moment, the protagonist folded his arms and said that although Monk's technique had improved greatly, to the point that Gary had to be careful with him, he still thought he could defeat Gary. With that, he pulled his hand back, and Naslavia said that it seemed there were gaps in his basic training that could be completely compensated for by training special skills in the short term. At that moment, Martha said, Monk. The fight continued in the arena. Monk striking and dodging, shouting, damn it. Then Gary shouted, now it's his turn. He struck and broke his opponent's sword. Monk looked in surprise at the flying part of the sword and shouted in surprise, what? Then Gary turned slightly and said, it's over. It's pretty sad, but that's just reality. He gritted his teeth and said, no, this is not over yet. The broken sword in his hands began to glow. MC thought in surprise, what's that? Monk turned sharply to Gary and shouted that he wasn't finished yet. He swung his sword. Naslavia shouted, watch out. Martha shouted, Monk, he has to stop. The next second, Gary turned around abruptly. The others were surprised. What? When did he? At that moment, the protagonist grabbed Monk's sword and told him to stop. Martha turned her attention to him in surprise. Then Monk dropped the remains of the sword from his hand and shouted that he was sorry. Naslavia thought she didn't even have time to understand what was happening when Monk lunged at Gary. But Lei moved so quickly. How did he do it? After that, Monk said, he's so sorry about that just now. The protagonist said that everything is fine. It's just a scratch. His friends said it was because he was too impulsive. If he hadn't stopped him, he would have definitely been in big trouble. The others were shouting, so who won? He doesn't know. He thinks Gary won. His friend asked, who said that? If his blow hadn't been blocked, Gary would have definitely been in big trouble, but the battle was over before that. Then Cool put his hands in front of him and said that they shouldn't be so upset because a third party had interfered in the battle. The results of this fight would be announced later, and then they could get their money back. The others were shouting, "Damn, did he do that on purpose? It's his turn to play." At that moment, a bottle flew at him, and then he jumped aside and told them to calm down, people. He said he would give everyone their money back. They have to stop. The others started throwing stones at the guys and shouting, "He set this whole thing up from the start. All he does is cause trouble. What's the point of him just giving them their money back? He needs to get out of the academy. Bunch of red-haired freaks. Damn red. He needs to leave the academy." At that moment, a rock flew into the protagonist's face. Gary called out to him in alarm and threw his arm over his shoulder. Then Monk stood in front of the attacker and shouted, "Please, he's asking them to calm down." One of them shouted at him to shut up. He needs to get out of here. Then Gary looked at the protagonist and asked, "How is he?" He replied, "He'll go." Martha ran up to him and shouted, "The game's over, they shouldn't worry." Naslavia also covered her comrades and told them not to do this, guys. At that moment, Eric grinned and, taking a brick, said that he should give him the bigger one. The next second, a rock flew into his hand, and he dropped the brick and shouted, "It hurts." Monk shouted, "Please, he shouldn't do this." In response, he pointed a finger at him and shouted, "Damn, it's all because he's so untalented." Monk shouted, "But Lei isn't to blame." He shouted that he remembered him, kid. Red-haired freak, he needs to get out of the academy. Disgusting. Freak, he shouldn't have been born. The problem is that he's here, so he needs to get out. To hell. The protagonist tried to get away from the angry guys and thought, why is this happening again? All these filthy people are the same. His comrade shouted for them to stop. They're all classmates. Lei, what's wrong with him? The others shouted, he doesn't want to be that freak's classmate. The insults that Lei heard were like sticky poison, enveloping and suffocating him. The insults continued. Red-headed freak. Damn, little idiot. He needs to go to hell. The protagonist gritted his teeth in irritation and thought, damn, this is all their fault. At that moment, Winford approached the arena and shouted for them to calm down. Whispers began in the crowd. It was Winford. What was he doing here? Had he placed a bet too? He shouldn't be stupid. This couldn't be. Gary, looking at the knight, said that he had lost a lot of blood and needed medical attention as soon as possible. Winford extended his hand to the protagonist and offered to help him stop the bleeding. The protagonist waved his hand and said, no need, they're just scratches. He can handle this kind of nonsense himself. The knight replied, Lei, his mother has arrived. After a while, Scarlet turned around, hearing her son shout, Mom. He looked at her and cried out in surprise. It really is her. She stood in front of him and said, they haven't seen each other for a long time. He's grown so much. He replied, yes, he got taller. At that moment, Winford hid behind the wall. His mother reached out to her son, and he offered not to talk about him. Mom, did her arrival mean that Dad was getting better? She answered, his dad. He's gone. MC screamed in fear. Dad died? She said that wasn't true. She didn't mean it at all. She meant that he left their home and went away from the village. He looked surprised. Left? How was that possible? Wasn't he bedridden after being infected with the shadow plague? How could he suddenly move on his own? At that moment, Winford leaned his back against the wall, folded his arms across his chest, and thought that he hadn't had the courage to tell Lei the whole truth about the shadow plague. Most infected die within a year, and only a few, like Jack, survive. But still, in the end, the strongest of the survivors enslave the diseases, becoming active spreaders of it, and this continues for many years. Scarlet said that, in fact, one day she completely by chance learned that his father had been fighting the shadow plague for the last 10 years. Then she held a candle in her hand and walked forward. She wondered what that sound was. She noticed a fallen jar of ink and a piece of paper flying to the side. She saw her husband and shouted, Jack! The man, covered in spots from the disease, turned around and called her. She ran to him and, hugging him, shouted, he's woken up! This is wonderful! He answered, no way, he's losing control again. He's asking her to kill him. Tears streamed down her face. She pulled away in surprise and shouted, no, no way! Jack, she can't! He put his hands on her face and repeated, she must kill him. Then he began to scream loudly, after which he grabbed his head. His wife sank to her knees and shouted, Jack, what's wrong with him? And then he screamed even louder and, spreading his arms out to the sides, released a powerful stream of energy. He was telling her to kill him quickly. She flew to the floor and screamed loudly. Looking at her husband, she called out to him again, and he kept telling her to kill him quickly. In the present, the protagonist clenched his fist and said, but she never managed to do it. She replied that his father actually left him something, so she thought it was important to at least give it to him personally. With these words, she took a letter from her inside pocket and handed it to him. The protagonist opened the letter and asked if he gave it to him. It said, Dear Lei, he is so sorry he couldn't see him grow up. From the moment he and his mother first saw him, they knew he was special. He knows he was accepted into the Night Academy, and he is trying very hard. He is very proud of him. He's incredibly sad that he can't be with him anymore, but he hopes he can do everything he wants in this life. He's grateful that he was their child. They love him very much. The protagonist's body began to shake, tears streaming down his face, and he said, stupid dad. What nonsense. He'll definitely find a way to save him. Sometime later, MC was lying on the bed in his room, covering his face with his hand. He remembered his mother saying she was going to go looking for his father, that no matter what he turned into, she would definitely find him, she promised. Then he said that in that case, he would go with her. She replied, no, he had so many things of his own to do. She thought his father would think the same. He wanted to object, but she added, Lei. She was very glad to see him, but he shouldn't worry about them. He just had to do what he had to. Then she hugged him. In the present, the protagonist thought, but 10 whole years had already passed, and he still hadn't been able to do anything, and the people around him hadn't gotten any better. He couldn't avenge the death of his people and couldn't protect everyone he wanted. All of this depresses him so much. And then he sat up in surprise, noticing Gary enter the room. His friend approached him and asked, since he had already returned, had he seen his mother yet? What did she say? How was his father? The protagonist walked forward and answered briefly, yes. Gary called him and thought something was wrong with him. Then he noticed a letter lying on the floor, and, picking it up, thought it was. At that moment, Dan snatched the letter from him, and laughing, said that he took it. He thinks that since he made such a serious face, it must be a love letter from some beauty. Gary shouted indignantly, yes, he. What the hell? He should give it to him. He replied that he shouldn't be so shy. Gary tried to snatch the letter and shouted for him to give it back to him. At that moment, the other guys entered the room, and Naslavia asked what they were doing. Gary said that the letter was Lei's. She was surprised. What? After a while, they all settled into the room, and Gary, looking down, said, so that's what happened. Naslavia, sitting at the table, said that it turns out Lei's father was infected with the shadow plague. Dan said he couldn't believe this guy had such a tough childhood. He thought they should have been kinder to him. Monk looked down and thought, Lei. Sometime later, in the dining room, the protagonist walked forward. Naslavia approached him and said, what a coincidence, he's going to dinner? Martha approached them and offered to eat together. He looked at them in surprise. After that, he returned to the room and, noticing the folded bed, asked in surprise, what's wrong? What's with his bed and clothes? Dan asked what he thought of Naslavia. She's a good girl, isn't she? Ian said yes, it was Naslavia's doing. MC wondered what had suddenly bitten these guys. The next day, Gary looked at the protagonist and said this in surprise. The protagonist looked at the bouquet of freshly picked lilies in a vase on the table and asked, what again? He replied that he just thought that looking at flowers makes people feel better. He doesn't think so. The protagonist asked, he didn't fall in love with him, right? He shouted indignantly, how is that even possible? He said that he'd long wanted to ask what kind of thing they guys have been doing lately. He lowered his gaze and said, he apologizes. It's all because he accidentally read his letter. He's so sorry. Lei, he really feels very sorry for him. A letter is such a personal thing. He shouldn't have read it. He didn't specifically invite anyone to read his letter with him. It just happened that way. It sucks. In short, he's solely to blame for making his personal information public. He apologizes. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist smiled and said that he was grateful to them all. Gary said that he was not angry. Then shouts were heard from behind the door. Hurry! They have to get him out. Hurry! Dan held Monk and shouted that they were already in the room. He should wait a little longer. Naslavia shouted that they needed to put him to bed. Gary, noticing the beaten Monk, shouted, what does this mean? Dan shouted that it was all that guy, Sebastian. He provoked Monk and arranged a raiding battle with him. The protagonist asked, raiding battle? Doesn't it end when he admits defeat? How could he have suffered so much? He answered, Monk was unconscious. It was too late to admit defeat. But that guy didn't stop. He just continued hitting him. He clearly did it on purpose. Then the protagonist approached Monk, who called him, and asked, doesn't he want to say something? He replied that he was sorry that all these days he couldn't help in any way, only made the bed. Naslavia shouted, it looks like he has broken arms and legs. They need to call a doctor immediately. Ian shouted, okay, then he will run to look for him. Then MC turned around abruptly, and Gary shouted, where is he going? He replied, of course, to avenge Monk. Gary ran up to him and, grabbing his hand, shouted at him to wait. He shouldn't be so impulsive. The protagonist turned around and asked if he wants to go with him. He replied that he would also like to avenge Monk, but the protagonist asked, what but? There's only one rule for him, an eye for an eye. Naslavia approached them and said, because Sebastian is a member of the Delbert family. Gary added, yes, he is the youngest son of the Delbert Knight, so they cannot afford to touch him and his friends. The protagonist walked forward and asked, so what? Since he started it, he deserved a response. Gary shouted, Lei, hasn't he understood anything yet? This isn't the first time he's done this. No one in the entire academy will want to mess with him. He might even get expelled. In response, he waved his hand and told them not to worry. He's not that stupid. Once he passes the official qualifiers, he'll be able to get his revenge properly. Gary called out to him worriedly. Sometime later, during second-year training, while the others were training, Sebastian walked forward and said, so that's great, Eric. He should keep up the good work. Then the guy looked at the protagonist in surprise and asked, what? He's not one of them, is he? His comrade added, dude, they're training, so if he needs anything, he'll have to wait. The protagonist asked, who's Sebastian here? The guy asked, is he looking for Sebastian? He doesn't remember having a red-haired friend? MC said that if he was lying, he should probably leave. At that moment, Eric noticed this and shouted in surprise, what the hell is going on there? He approached them. One of them pointed a finger at the protagonist and said, this guy just decided to barge in. He said he was looking for Sebastian. Eric shouted, he doesn't know this red-haired freak? Didn't his parents teach him manners? Doesn't he see that they are training? And then MC looked at him and asked, is he Sebastian? At that moment, Sebastian approached them and said, Eric, he is the Sebastian he is looking for. He extended his hand forward and said, looking at his black belt, can he assume that he's here because of his comrade? The protagonist waved his hand and said, now that he has found the person he needs, there is no need for him to go on a wild goose chase. He must accept his challenge. Then a system window with a battle application appeared. Sebastian looked at it and said, exactly. The system window said, Lay, rating 280. Ranked match request sent, accept. Sebastian laughed and apologized, saying that it was best for him to forget about it. MC frowned and asked, are you chickening out? He replied, seeing his rating, he really didn't think there was any point in them fighting each other. He thought this black belt was just an ordinary nerd, even among them, but he never expected him to be so stubborn. He waved his hand and added that he apologized. He didn't mean to hurt him. Maybe that's the natural difference between people from ordinary families and them. He didn't want this to happen again either, so please, he should leave. At that moment, he turned around, and the protagonist told him to wait. Eric approached him and said that someone like Sebastian might not want to fight him, but he certainly wouldn't mind. He was currently ranked 9th, so if he could defeat him, perhaps others would be willing to accept his challenge. He then looked at his comrade and asked if he was okay with it. Sebastian replied, as he pleased. The protagonist then pointed to the side and asked if he could defeat this guy. Would he accept his challenge? Sebastian replied that he would have to defeat him first. Voices were heard around him. Another fight, and with such an amazing person, no less. Yes, watching someone challenge others every day made him hope this fight would last longer. Then the MC stood in front of Eric and said that they should quickly stop this useless talk and get started. Eric grabbed his sword and said, well, he shouldn't cry afterwards and look for someone to avenge him. The onlookers wondered why the red-haired man didn't draw his sword. Then Eric charged, thinking it was a perfect opportunity to show off. Using the same trick Sebastian had just taught him, he let out a loud cry and ran forward. His companion folded his arms and said, Eric, as always, is up to his old tricks, mocking the younger ones again. When he got close enough to the protagonist, he shouted for him to take it. The protagonist dodged and cried out in surprise. What? He thought. How did he dodge? He swung his sword again and shouted that it's not over yet. He added a few more hits and shouted, so he continues? The protagonist continued to dodge his attacks. He thought that this hit was his fastest attack. How was he able to cope with this? The next second, the protagonist's fist hit him in the face, and he cried out in surprise and flew to the ground. He thought, how is this possible? After that, the protagonist approached Sebastian and asked if he was good enough to challenge him. At that moment, the people gathered around Eric shouted, for goodness sake, he should be taken to the infirmary immediately. Sebastian asked, what's the point of defeating him? MC pointed to the crystals in his hand and replied that if he wins, then these 2 crystals of an average monster will be his. He cried out in surprise, crystals of an average monster? Where did he get that? If he suddenly gets crystals from an unknown source, he won't avoid problems. The protagonist replied that his parents were mercenaries, so they gave it to him. So what? He still had a chance to get it before he turned it into weapons and equipment. Sebastian pointed a finger at him and replied, okay, he accepts his challenge, but he had one more condition. This fight would be held in public. The protagonist agreed, adding that he didn't want anyone to think he'd taken the beast crystals by force. After a while, the spectators in the arena shouted, here comes Sebastian. He has to beat that red one. Just a little more. At that moment, Cool walked next to the protagonist and asked if he was really going to fight this guy. He'd heard that this guy was second in the rankings. If that was true, he didn't think it was a good idea. Even if he was planning to hit the jackpot by betting on his own defeat, this guy wouldn't show him an ounce of mercy. He told him not to worry. He should collect his bets and do what he tells him. He said that everything was ready and that he couldn't stop him anyway. Then he should promise to at least break that guy's nose. They bumped fists and he said, definitely. And then Cool approached the students and shouted for them to place their bets. The knight with the black belt, Lay, against the knight with the white belt, Sebastian. Who will win? They should place their bets and see. Dan at that moment folded his arms across his chest and asked how long they thought Lay would last. Ian said that he hoped Lay wouldn't get hurt. Naslavia spoke up, but she had a completely different opinion about the situation. Dan blushed with embarrassment and said, love is blinding. She shouted, what is he talking about? How can she like this Lay? That's not the point at all. If he doesn't realize how strong Lay is, he'll lose all his money. Gary thought at that moment, instead of worrying about whether Lay could win or not, he was more worried about whether Delbert would be furious after this fight. Then Sebastian said, the children of knights will become knights. The children of peasants will become peasants. That's the essence of class inequality. He looked at the sword in his hand and added, he knows he defeated Eric, and that gives him some confidence. But thanks to this battle, he'll quickly realize how big the difference is between them. And then the host said, both sides, please, they should take their places. The MC stood in front of the opponent and told him to save his showing off for his backing vocals. Then the host shouted, 3, 2, 1, begin. Sebastian rushed forward with lightning speed. Gary called out to the protagonist in alarm. Sebastian then appeared behind the protagonist and said he was lucky. Usually, only a few fights go beyond their first attack. The protagonist turned slightly and replied that he hadn't been so lucky so far. At that moment, Sebastian was surprised to notice scratches on his face. Then, wiping them, he laughed slightly and said the wound wasn't too deep. If all his attacks continued at this level, he would never defeat him at this rate. MC asked why he was talking so much. Had he won all his battles with his mouth? Sebastian got angry and ran at him, shouting, okay, he was just lucky. He put his sword forward, but the next second, more scratches appeared on his body, and Dan wondered, was that just Lay's attack? Why did Sebastian look so ugly as if he'd been wounded before he attacked? Ian said he didn't know. He hadn't noticed anything either. He thought, When did he learn something like that? The move he just used to avoid Sebastian's attack looked like the one Sir Kai used. And then Sebastian concentrated energy in his body and took a stance, shouting, "Excellent. Now they'll see how he dodges this." The onlookers were amazed. He's gotta see, the chi has gathered at the base of the sword. They're going to see something really interesting today. At that moment, Sebastian charged, but the protagonist suddenly appeared at his side. His opponent smiled and shouted that he thought he'd do just that. He must keep going. The next second, he landed a few more blows, and MC was thrown back slightly. Sebastian stopped and shouted in surprise, "Did you block it?" He continued to strike and advance. The others shouted, "Wow, Sebastian has seized the initiative. Come on." He had to give that little red-haired monster a good beating. Sebastian, he was his god. Handsome. Then Dan yelled, "Damn it, if he kept attacking Lei like this, he'd get him sooner or later." That idiot Sebastian, he was too cruel. Then Gary told him not to worry. He thought Lei would be fine. He wondered, what did that mean? Naslavia had told him to take a closer look. The one who was really losing ground was Sebastian. At that moment, he was already down on one knee, his entire body covered in wounds. He wondered why. Dan yelled, "How was that even possible? Hadn't Lei been dodging this whole time?" Gary replied, "Quite the opposite. Lei had actually attacked." He wondered, when had that happened? He hadn't even noticed. Every time Lei dodged an attack from Sebastian, he had made at least one counterattack. He kept wearing Sebastian down until he finally lost it. At that moment, Sebastian rose to his feet and, clutching his arm, shouted, "Him!" Even his father had never hit him like that. He would destroy him. He concentrated his energy again and ran forward, but the protagonist attacked him with a single swing of his sword. Dan was surprised. Was it really Lei? How could he be so strong? Naslavia turned to Gary and said that Lei clearly had a chance to end everything here now. But why? He said he thought Lei was doing this on purpose. She was surprised. On purpose? It was like a beast flirting with its prey. Lei was simply torturing it. Then Sebastian, his face covered in wounds and tears, screamed, "His face. Stupid, he's a redneck. How dare he?" He wanted to avenge Monk. The next second, another blow approached his face. Sebastian covered his face and shouted, he must wait, he must not run away if he had any courage left. At that moment, the protagonist raised his sword and said, the words of people like him were empty to him. He swung his sword, but his opponent put his hand forward and shouted for him to wait. He wanted to say that he surrendered. Before he could finish, the protagonist thought he should not admit his defeat so easily. He wants to get what he owes Monk in full. He dealt several blows to the face, and Naslavia said that this is not good. Gary agreed, yes, if he continues like this. At that moment, Monk shouted, enough, he has to stop. The protagonist turned around in surprise and thought, why? Why does Monk want him to stop? Sebastian knelt down and shouted that he surrendered. The announcer pointed to the main character and shouted that the fight was over. The winner was Lei. Sebastian's comrades ran to him, excitedly asking how he was. At that moment, Gary ran up to the main character, but he suddenly pushed off the ground and jumped. Eric, holding out his hands to his comrade, said that they should first take him to the infirmary. The others agreed. Yes, they needed to stitch up the wounds. Then Sebastian began waving and shouting, they have to go. Get out of here. Lei, they'll see who wins. After a while, the top floor of the central building of Avrion Academy, Delbert screamed, he can't let this go so easily. Kay folded his arms and said that he thought he should calm down. From a knight's perspective, Lei hadn't broken any rules, and Delbert shouldn't ignore it either. He slammed his hand on the table indignantly and shouted that, if he'd ignored the rules, he would have beaten that brat long ago. They should have seen what he'd turned his son into. His entire face was disfigured. He did it on purpose. He was born a devil. Gibby said he thought Knight Delbert was right. If the prophecy came true, the red-haired boy would destroy all existing kingdoms. Feng spread his arms and said he'd like to add something. The prophecy also said that the red-haired boy could become the savior of the world. Gibby extended his hand and asked if he didn't think this child could cause a catastrophe. He replied that this was why he thought they should proceed with great caution. Expel him was certainly easy, but what about the consequences? Perhaps this very decision of theirs would be the trigger for the destruction of humanity. Then Elder Da said, okay, arguing about this was completely pointless. Since their opinions differed, they should vote. Everyone who was in favor of expelling Lei should raise their hand. Then Delbert, Elder Gibby, and Knightmaster Intiro raised their hands. Elder Da said that everyone had voted. Now he asked for a raise of hands if they were against expelling the boy. Elder Feng, Da, Hancock, Winford, Bernardo, and Kay raised their hands. Then the elder said that 3 voted in favor, 6 against, and 2 abstained. He therefore declines the expulsion offer. Sometime later, on the roof of the dorm, the protagonist lies with his hands behind his head. Then Naslavia approaches him and says she couldn't find him in the dorm, so she assumed he might be here. He sits up and replies that he just wants to be alone. She comes closer and asks, he's thinking about Monk, right? He asks how she figured that out. She says she doesn't even know what to say. Maybe he really does think differently than others, and he's not very sociable. Besides, he doesn't fully understand other people's joys and worries. Then he says never mind, he doesn't care. She says, alarmed, that's not exactly what she meant. She just wants to say that even so, she realizes he's not a bad person. She placed her hand on her chest and added that whenever she saw him confused or angry, she wanted to help him. She wanted him to trust them more, to trust his friends. He paused, wondering, friends? Then he turned sharply and pinned her against the wall, placing his hands on either side of her head. She was surprised. Lei? He activated his ability and said, Naslavia. She said, surprised his eye. He asked if she wasn't afraid of him. She replied, sometimes. But as she had already said, she didn't think of him as a bad person. And his eye is very beautiful. It suits him. He should never think of himself as a monster. He thought in surprise. He's not a monster? Then he turned and thought, whenever he feels like he sees through the true essence of people, everything immediately changes. It seems that he still has a long way to go on the path to understanding humanity. Meanwhile, Delbert slammed the door and walked out of the office, thinking, damn prophecy. Someday, he'll kill that boy. At that moment, an elder approached him and called him. He turned around and asked how he could help him. Elder Gibby, he replied, nothing special. He put his hand on his shoulder and added, you know, he believes all knights should be of noble birth. This is a very interesting point of view, so he will be keeping a close eye on him. Delbert bowed and replied, yes. Meanwhile, Harry, seeing Naslavia, said hello and, apologizing, asked if Lei lived here. She replied that if he was looking for Kay, he was upstairs. He walked forward and thanked her. She sheepishly replied, you're welcome. Then she turned around and thought, does this man look familiar? After a while, MC was lying on the roof again. He was surprised. Naslavia? Why did she come back? Harry approached him, holding swords in his hands, smiling and saying that it seemed he was not quite who he thought he was. He extended his hand and asked him to allow him to introduce himself. His name was Harry Delbert, a second-year student. The protagonist was surprised. Delbert? So a relative? He answered, right, the man he defeated today was his brother. He asked, so he came for revenge? He waved his hand and replied that that was not the case. He should not misunderstand him. That was not the point. In fact, he would like to thank him. The protagonist was surprised. Thank? He laughed and said that he knew his brother was a bit of an idiot. To be honest, his manners were a bit lame, so his defeat was only a matter of time, and it would be a good lesson for him. Then the protagonist turned around and said that if that was all he wanted to say, they would have to say goodbye. But Harry pulled the sword towards him and told him not to rush. Even if he couldn't participate in the ranking battles between different courses, he should at least let him teach him a lesson. After all, if the younger brother was defeated, the older brother simply couldn't stand by. The protagonist took the sword from his hands and asked, after all this effort, that he wasn't here for revenge at all. He started to walk away and told him not to say that. He just wanted to personally witness the power of the one who could defeat his brother. Come on. They must see what he's capable of. Then the protagonist took a stance and thought that he usually didn't like to initiate things. But this guy was interesting, completely different. He would make an exception for him. The next second, he rushed to attack, but Harry blocked his attack, holding his sword in front of him. He clenched his teeth and thought in surprise, this guy? Then he jumped aside, and Harry said, well, he's surprised he made the right decision. The protagonist started breathing heavily and thought he had a strange sensation. Usually, when he strikes such a strong blow, the opponent's sword breaks. But this time, if they continue like this, he thinks his sword will break first. Then Harry raised his index finger and said, it looks like he doesn't know how to use chi. At that moment, the protagonist rushed to attack and thought, if he can't win with strength, he'll have to rely on the skills of a black belt knight. Harry lunged forward and said, not bad. And that's all he has to show? The protagonist thought in surprise. It didn't work. His opponent swung for a strike and told him to watch out. He delivered his blow, and the MC flew to the side, screamed loudly, fell to his knees and spat out a clot of blood. After that, Harry walked up to him and sighing said, it's over. Then he turned around and waving his hand added, that's all for today. The protagonist began to cough and standing up, leaning on his sword, told him to wait. He's ranked first in his second year. Harry smiled and turning around laughed lightly. He asked, is that even possible? He was ranked 50th in his second year. The protagonist was surprised. 50? Harry then suggested they fight again when he had mastered chi well. After that, the protagonist looked at his hand and said, chi, is it possible to become so strong just by learning chi mastery? After some time, Winfred said, things are getting worse at the border. More and more knights are going missing. Elders, he fears that their problem is not only external, but also internal. There are rumors that a dark guild has infiltrated the academy. The elder approached the window and said that, unfortunately, these are not rumors. He replied, then shouldn't they at least take some measures to prepare the students for this? He replied, of course. But right now there are more pressing matters. He looked at him and added that he should bring those 5 children to him. It's time for them to learn their mission. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat on the roof, concentrating energy in his body. He had tried concentrating chi in his body many times, but he had absolutely no success. Then he opened his eyes and thought in surprise, rain? Then that's it for today. Then he noticed a figure on the ground and said, there, what are these people even thinking? A sneak attack? Good. Then he used the dragon's eye. He thought, this color, it's the shadow plague. He pulled the hood over his head and removed his belt. He wondered if these people could have any connection to his father. Meanwhile, several guild representatives surrounded the elder, one of them saying that his path ends here. The elder replied that it seemed the rumors about a dark guild infiltrating the academy were true after all, and the attackers behind him said he was too late. The dark guild would soon take over the entire Avrion Academy, and no one would be able to stop it. Feng turned around and asked, 4-on-1? He hadn't trained in a long time, so it looked like it wouldn't be easy. At that moment, MC jumped up and asked, how about 2-on-4? Then Feng began to take off his robe and said, it looks like he's a student at their academy. He was glad he decided to participate. The guild members were saying, "What the hell is this? It doesn't matter. They're all going to die anyway." Ah, he's right. The next second, Feng spread his arms and said, now that they've sorted everything out, he should help him delay those two for a bit. It should be over soon. The protagonist thought, this old man is simply amazing. Then one of the guild members raised his weapon and shouted, "He must die, the little bastard!" The protagonist charged, thinking that their condition was different from Dad's. They were still conscious. He landed a few blows and then found himself behind another guild member, but his partner held his weapon in front of the protagonist and forced him to jump back. The attacker said, "This kid doesn't know how to use chi." His comrade said, "Okay, so he's not a professional." The protagonist placed the weapon's hilt in his mouth and thought, damn, can they really see right through him? The guild members were surprised. He put a sword in his mouth? What kind of move was that? What the hell difference did it make? He needed to be dealt with quickly. The next second, the protagonist jumped up and, spinning around, attacked all the attackers. The guild members screamed, "This bastard moves pretty well. He's not easy to catch. He has to go after him. We can't let him get away." One of them fell to the ground, and the elder, holding one of them over his shoulder, told them to let him observe what talents this kid possesses. The others were surprised. What now? He wants to take advantage of this? His partner extended a hand to him and told him not to panic. They had to get rid of the little one first. MC thought it seemed like he was worrying for nothing, but now that he had a chance, he would still take the risk. Go ahead. With these thoughts, he rushed into the attack again. He easily dodged the attacks of the attackers. They screamed, "Damn it!" Their battle continued. The protagonist easily knocked the weapon out of the attacker's hands. A guild member shouted, "Little bastard, he must not be impudent. They will see how he gets away with this now." Then the elder said, "Boy, he should grab his arm and pull him towards himself, then turn around and throw him over his back." The next second, the protagonist grabbed the attacker by the arm, threw him over himself, and Feng concentrated energy in his fist and delivered a powerful punch, creating an explosion. The protagonist was surprised. He thought, this is powerful. The others shouted, "Here, quickly." The elder said, "It looks like the knights have finally arrived." The others shouted, "Ambush, they're escaping." The elder told him not to run after them. At that moment, a system window appeared in front of the protagonist, saying a reward had been received. Ability 3 of 1,000 unlocked. He thought, mana attraction. A new ability had appeared. At that moment, the knights approached the elder. One of them asked, "Is he alright?" He replied. Another one managed to slip away. They should go after them. "Yes, he's alright. He's leaving these guys to them." They replied, "Yes, sir. Both teams must continue the search. We can't let him leave the academy grounds." Then the elder approached the protagonist and thanked him for his help. "He's a very gifted student." He replied, "I'm curious why these people attacked him." He replied, "Oh, nothing special. In his long life, he's bound to meet a lot of strange people." The protagonist thought it was probably true, but he still felt like he was deliberately avoiding the topic. Then the elder put his hand on his shoulder and said that he didn't think he knew how to use chi yet. Kid, he should wait until he was a sophomore and join the martial arts club. The protagonist was surprised. The martial arts club? He said that he promised he could get a lot of benefit from it. The protagonist asked him to wait for him, but then the elder vanished into thin air. The protagonist took off his blindfold and said that he couldn't believe he just ran away. He thought, what a strange old man. After a while, Winfred folded his arms and asked, "Is he back?" He was looking for him. "Elder Da wants to see him." The protagonist asked, "Elder Da?" He thought, will he be discovered so quickly? After a while, Winfred said, "Elder, he brought them." He replied, "They should come in." Winfred let the children go ahead and told them to come in, guys. MC wondered how it happened that these guys were all here together. Then Da turned around and thanked them for giving him a little of their time. Ian scratched his head and said that they were only too glad to see him. Cool walked forward and said that the elder must have some important task for them all. The protagonist asked, what should they do for him? He laughed slightly and replied, "The young people are, as always, very impatient." He was sure that they would only get tired of listening to long explanations from an old man like him, so he would be brief. He called them here because of the contents of the prophecy. The protagonist folded his arms and asked, "The prophecy?" 10 years ago, a divine prophecy was announced. The prophecy said that a red-haired boy would save their land when it was on the brink of complete devastation. Cool clenched his fist and shouted, "So there's a chance this boy could be one of them?" He replied that they constantly send knights on search operations. That's how they were able to find 10 children who fit the prophecy's description. The protagonist was surprised. 10? He thought, that's a lot. Then Cool walked forward and, spreading his arms, asked, "But aren't there 5 of them? Then who are the others?" He replied that the other 5 teenagers, unlike them, had awakened their magical abilities and were currently studying at Roland Academy. The protagonist thought, Roland Academy? That's the academy where Amy studies, so she most likely already knows the boys. I wonder how she's doing now. Then Ian said, "Magic, how cool." Duo smiled and asked, "Save the world." Cool laughed and said, "So one of them has to save the world?" The elder said that it could be one of them, or it could be all of them. That was the reason he called everyone here. Long ago, 5 dragon knights saved this continent from disaster. They fought monsters, built Avrion Academy, and protected the common people. They left behind a priceless legacy, and now the task of preserving that legacy falls to them. Of course, this meant they'd have to work hard. In the future, In addition to basic training and specialized training for the various belts, they'd have to undergo extensive additional training. Only these 5 would become the new Dragon Knights of Avrion Academy. After a while, they walked down the hallway and started chatting. Saviors. They would become saviors. He had to stop. Cool asked, "What difference does it make? Aren't they happy?" He answered, "A little." At that moment, MC called out to Ian and said he wanted to ask him a question. Was his hair red since birth? He answered, "That's right, all of them were." Because of that, they had a lot of trouble growing up. The protagonist thought, of course, he'd already asked Cool and the others about it. All of them have red hair naturally, but not his. His hair went from black to red. Not to mention whether he should be considered one of the so-called Dragon Knights. It's hard to say how much of what the elder said was true. He probably meant something else entirely. After a while, Winfred entered the room and said, "Elder, he truly doesn't understand why he revealed the prophecy to these children now. After all, they're still children, and they have enough of their own worries right now." He turned and replied that some knowledge takes a certain amount of time to come to light. Then Winfred nodded and said he understood. Since then, the protagonist has learned a lot about the Dragon Knights. Surprisingly, in the modern world, dragons are considered a symbol of evil, and few believe such creatures ever existed. But there are those who believe that the Shadow Plague didn't exist in the ancient world, mainly because dragons were considered guardians of the earth. While most bibliographic sources tell the same stories about Dragon Knights, but in different ways, he managed to find only one special book. It contained a precise description of the Dragon Knights themselves, their uniforms, combat skills, and even personality traits. Another unique feature of this book was its mention of divine guidance. Since writing books related to gods is taboo for humans, he couldn't find any more reliable information, and he'd heard only a little about the god's existence. He lived in the capital of the Allure Kingdom, not far from Roland Academy. If it weren't for the ban on leaving the academy until you've completed knight training, he would have gone to speak with this god right then and there, and he would have found out why he'd turned him into a human. The first year at the academy flew by. The end of arduous training and the intense hunting season was approaching. Tomorrow, they were set to begin their second year. After some time, MC opened his eyes and heard Gary's voice saying, "No, he mustn't move." The protagonist approached him and told him to wake up. He thought he was having a nightmare. Gary woke up in fright and asked what he was doing there. He replied that he'd been woken by his muttering. Was he okay? He turned around and replied, "Of course he was. He just had a nightmare. He should go to bed. He had to get up early for the ceremony tomorrow." The protagonist said he was glad he was okay, then he should sleep. He thought, he's so stubborn. Then he turned around, sighed, and wondered what he'd dreamed about to get him into this state. When morning came, the protagonist looked at his sleep-deprived comrade and thought, apparently that nightmare had been truly frightening. Then Naslavia approached them and wished them a good morning. She asked if they'd decided which club they wanted to join yet. The protagonist was surprised. What club? She handed him a list and said, "Damn, Lei, he doesn't even pay attention in lectures." All second-year students had to choose a club to join for extracurricular activities. The protagonist asked if she'd decided where she'd go yet. She replied that she'd decided to join the medicine club. Gary said that he'd already decided that he wanted to join the fencing club. The protagonist was surprised. What? He'd decided so long ago. That old man said he wanted him to join. What did he call it? Dancing? Fighting? No, a martial arts club. MC thought, martial arts? What the hell is that? He doesn't want to join any club, so he'll just go watch. If he gets bored, he'll secretly go hunt magical monsters. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him, congratulating him on acquiring a new skill. A new mana capacity indicator appeared. MC thought, after acquiring the new skill, he realized that it had no value in terms of magic, and it's no wonder he had no reaction to the awakening of magic back then. Maybe when he absorbs monster crystals, the situation will change for the better. The battle with Sebastian attracted a lot of attention, and he couldn't move around so freely anymore. He still ranks too high, so he'll have to give up a few fights. This place is in the very outback. Lei looked at the sign Martial Arts Club and said, "This is it. This is a bit too much." He opened the door slightly and asked, "Is anyone here?" He walked in. He looked inside and thought, there was no one at the entrance at all. Is there really anyone in this hole who knows martial arts? MC walked further and asked, "Is anyone here?" He saw a man and thought, there is someone here. He said he came to join the martial arts club. Lei looked at the man's back and thought, he is silent. Besides, he can't even smell him. Is he dead? He came closer and called out to the old man, trying to reach out to him. The old man grabbed his wrist and threw him over himself. MC screamed loudly when he hit his back on the ground. The man screamed, who dared to invade his territory. Lei screamed, he came to the martial arts club. He himself told him to come. The man asked in surprise, the red-haired one? He picked him up from the ground and said, "This is the same student who came to his aid the other day. He's a good boy, a good one." MC shouted in displeasure, "Old man, he attacks all strangers without even asking what they want from him? He already thought he was dying." The old man laughed and said, too many strange people had been hanging around him lately, so it was hard for him not to be nervous. He was glad that he listened to his advice. He would be his first student in recent years. He asked him to sit down. Sit on the floor with the old man for a while. Lei shouted loudly, the first. But no one had ever been here before. He turned away and thought, this old man had completely fooled him. Damn it. How was he supposed to escape from these private lessons? The old man looked at him questioningly, and then laughed and said, the last time he saw him, he didn't even know how to use his own chi, so perhaps he would start teaching him from the very basics. Maybe he heard this. When fists and a sword meet, the sword strikes the fist. When chi is concentrated in the fist, the sword breaks. If both are imbued with chi, then victory will again be on the sword's side. MC folded his arms and said that it's no wonder people leave for other clubs because it turns out there's no advantage in hand-to-hand combat. The old man replied that it's because they don't understand the true nature of martial arts. Lei asked again. Seriously, he didn't believe it. The old man said that when he masters his skill, he'll understand that his hands are the best weapon. MC spoke up, then he had one more question. Who exactly attacked him recently? The old man answered, They were people from the Dark Guild. Lei asked again, Dark Guild? He would learn more information in his second year of training. The Dark Guild is an extremist organization seeking to destroy the kingdom of Allure. At one time, the leader of this was a high-ranking member of the Avrion Academy, and after he was expelled from the academy for some reason, he founded this organization. The aura of the Dark Guild is definitely somehow related to the Shadow Plague. Perhaps with their help, MC will be able to find a clue to what happened to Father. He said, he thinks they are quite dangerous people. Why are they pursuing him? The old man stood up and said, some things are better kept secret, but since he is in his debt to him, he will tell him a little secret. The reason they are so eager to kill him is because he is Feng, one of the 6 elders of the Avrion Academy. He took off his shirt and showed his muscles. He said, and despite his advanced age, he is still confident in his muscles. He ordered the Dragon Knight to show him what he is made of. Lei thought, it seems this old man is aware of his capabilities. He said, then he will try his best. He clenched his fist and thought, since he was an elder, he didn't have to hold back. He punched Feng in the stomach and let out a loud cry. But the old man didn't budge. He looked questioningly at MC, who thought, so hard, it was as if he had hit a steel plate. Feng asked, did he release chi just now when he hit him? MC looked at his reddened palm and replied, no. Feng laughed and said, he's great. He possesses simply animal strength. He sees incredible potential in him. Once he masters chi, he will immediately transform. Lei thought, it doesn't seem like this elder can be trusted. The old man offered to get to work. MC shouted, when did he agree to join? Feng replied, they will start. MC asked him to wait and thought, is it too late to leave? After a while, they were sitting on the floor and Feng was talking. The so-called chi is the energy emanating from their body. From birth, they generate chi with every breath, and the stronger they become, the more chi they can use. The key to mastering chi is to start its circulation. Now he will infuse some of his mana into his body. He held his hand on MC's back and told him to use this external source of power to set his internal force in motion and start the movement of his internal chi. He ordered him not to resist, to feel its flow with his whole heart. Mana surrounded Lei's body, and he thought, it's so warm. It turns out, you can train chi like this too. There was a slamming sound and MC opened his eyes. He saw Feng fall and screamed, what? The system window congratulated Lei. The mana skill has been activated. He thought, what's going on? Why did the system pop up now? Mana skill has been activated. MC ran to Feng and screamed, old man, what's wrong with him? Let him wake up. If he dies, he won't get away with it so easily. What should he do? MC placed his head on Feng's body and thought, great, his heart is beating. He felt like he'd fallen because he'd suddenly lost all his strength. What exactly just happened? Could it be that the skill activated even though he didn't use it was because when the old man started pouring his chi into him, the system involuntarily absorbed the mana from his body? Lei looked at the system window with his mana at 100% and thought, it's full. He couldn't have accidentally sucked all his mana out of him, could he? 5 minutes later, MC was sitting next to Feng, asking why hasn't he woken up yet? He clearly doesn't look like a good person, even in his sleep. 10 minutes later, Lei began to rise from the floor and said, well, whatever. The old man won't die that easily anyway. Instead of wasting time on him, he'd better train on his own. Dragon patience only lasts 10 minutes. He activated the dragon's eye and thought, great, he can clearly see the flow of chi. Then he will try. He needs to concentrate the flows of chi with the help of his consciousness, focus and form, and also fill the dantian with chi. He closed his eyes and released mana from his body. MC thought, done. Now he needs to let it spread throughout his body. He opened his eyes and thought, as soon as it starts moving, it immediately disappears. Again, he continued training and thought, what's going on? Why is the flow of chi so unstable? Maybe this is not enough. He will try adding more chi this time. He frowned and clenched his fists even tighter, thinking, more. After a while, he opened his eyes slightly and thought, does it even seem to hurt a little? He screamed loudly, after which the old man opened his eyes. He jumped up from the floor, seeing a huge flow of mana from Lei's body. He screamed, what is he doing? Let him not move. He put his hand on MC's back and ordered him to stop. Lei screamed loudly, after which mana flew out of the house and blew up the gazebo outside. Feng cried out in surprise. The chi extracted from him alone had amazing destructive power. Boy, he almost killed himself. MC asked, what is this? He asked and fell to the floor. After a while, a voice rang out. Judging by the symptoms, it looked like mana sickness. But that was simply impossible. He wasn't a mage. MC wondered, what? He began to open his eyes and saw Naslavia and Cool in front of him. She said his physical condition had already returned to normal, so he should open his eyes soon. He woke up. Cool screamed. Finally, MC asked, where am I? Cool asked again. Where else? In the hospital, of course. Lei asked, in the hospital? Naslavia answered, yes. They were shocked when the old man brought him here in a hurry. Cool said he even persuaded the dean to come and examine him personally, and he's a good man. When did he even manage to meet such an influential person? Naslavia asked him to be quiet, One must be quiet in the ward. Kule loudly asked for forgiveness. And who was that old man that even the dean would listen to him? MC laughed and thought, Cool's loudness, it was something else. Naslavia said that this old man was still very worried about him. After the dean examined him and said that he didn't see any serious problems, and his physical condition was recovering quite quickly, he calmed down. MC wondered if old man Fen was really so worried that he wasn't even afraid of others finding out his true identity. He asked, is this old man from the martial arts club? Cool repeated after him. Martial arts, Lei asked. Kule, why is he here? Cool laughed and said, because he joined the medicine club. Gary heard this and peeked out through the curtain. Cool screamed, he's always been interested in medicine. Of course he decided to take this opportunity. MC said he was serious. Gary pulled back the curtain and said, he finally woke up, but he's just dying from all the noise. MC asked, has their dorm room completely moved here? What's he doing here? Gary folded his hands behind his head and said, nothing. He just didn't get enough sleep. The training had gotten on his nerves a bit, so he came in to rest for a bit. Cool kept talking and wouldn't let him sleep. Cool screamed loudly. He was trying to find out how sick he was. Gary replied, but he said he wasn't sick. Lei said, I see, he thought. So Gary has his own dream too. After a while, he came to the martial arts club and asked, is he here, old man? Fen hit him from behind and yelled, idiot. And he still has the nerve to come back here. Lei said, no need to be so angry. Fen screamed, what does he even know? If he hadn't been there yesterday, he would have already been dead. At best, he would never have been able to use chi again. MC grabbed the sore on his head and said, okay. He knows he was wrong. The old man extended his hand and said, okay, let him sit down, but he can't help but deny that he is impressed by how much chi he was able to gather on the very first day. Lei asked again, does that mean he has talent? Feng put his hand on his back and told him not to flatter himself, and now he wants him to practice concentrating on controlling his chi. It can be as small as a fist, no more, no less, and when he succeeds, they will move on to the next stage. MC closed his eyes and thought, he will start with simple exercises, just like the old man said. After just 5 days, he could use chi to strengthen any part of his body. Over the next few days, he tried to move his chi where it was needed at double speed. It hadn't been an easy time, but it had taught him a lot. After a while, the man said that today was their first expedition since entering their second year, a one-day expedition to the south gate of Avrion Academy. Lancey said he hoped they had listened carefully to his explanation. It was all for their safety. Cool laughed joyfully, and Lancey explained that near the academy, there were 3 hunting grounds that were safe enough for second-year students to hunt freely. They could obtain monster crystals there for trading or crafting new weapons. But there were also several places where monsters bred, so if they wanted to stay alive, he advised them to be careful and not stray into those areas. Deep in the forest, Lancey said that today, 3 teams would travel to each of these territories and then switch places. This would allow them to learn about the different types of monsters they would be fighting. Martha opened a small book and said, according to the information, the hunting grounds they were in were called the Insect Forest. Cool grumbled. He hated insects. Dan said, oh well, how could some bugs even harm them? MC looked at Gary and thought, he still hasn't recovered. Naslavia looked up and screamed, it's coming. Everyone, get ready. Dan asked, what? She shouldn't be so nervous. In his opinion, it's just a regular ladybug. There's no need to exaggerate so much. Cool screamed, wow, have they ever seen a regular ladybug larger than a human head? Dan screamed in fear. What a nightmare. Martha attacked the creature and Naslavia ordered everyone to be on guard. The bugs might seem weak to them, but they usually travel in flocks. At that moment, a very loud buzzing sound was heard and beetles flew out of the forest. Martha drew an arrow and screamed, careful behind you. Cool waved his swords and shouted, how disgusting. Let them leave him alone, those terrible idiots. Dan asked, why are they so fast? A huge beetle was flying towards MC and Naslavia screamed in fear, Lei, be careful. MC released mana through his body and crossing it cut the insect's body. Cool cried out joyfully, wow, Lei, he learned to control his chi. MC laughed and offered to look at the results of their training. Dan shouted, guys, if they have time to show off, they should use their weapons for their intended purpose. A loud cry rang out, and Dan turned around and cried out, Gary. Lei asked, what's there? Gary was lying on the ground, and a huge ant had sank its fangs into his arm. The guys screamed, Gary. Ian swung his sword and attacked the creature, then grabbed Gary and told him to hold on. Naslavia ran up and screamed, Gary. He sat down on the ground and said, it's okay. He asked to be forgiven for making them all worry. Naslavia grabbed his arm and said, the wound isn't too deep. Ian, let him help her take off his armor, and she'll give him first aid. Ian replied, he understood. Gary thanked them, and MC looked at them and thought, it's about Gary. Normally, he wouldn't even be touched by such a weak monster like this ant. Besides, he hasn't been himself lately. He'll have to find out what happened from him when they get back. Naslavia stretched out her hands and used mana to heal Gary's arm. Dan said she's quite good at healing. Did she learn that at the medicine club? Kale answered, yes. Chi can do more than just strengthen the body and weapons. It accelerates cell growth and can be used to treat simple wounds. Lei thought, it looks like he's not the only one with new skills. He'll have to try even harder. Naslavia finished bandaging Gary's arm and said, that's it, she's done. Gary exhaled and thanked her. After a while, Dan sat down next to the monster and said that before noon today, he'd only managed to get a weak monster's crystal, so he thinks he won't even have enough to pay the tax. MC turned around and asked, tax? What tax? Dan clenched his fist and asked, didn't he listen to the instructions? 1/10 of the crystals mined in the hunting grounds will be confiscated as tax. If he gets less than 10 crystals during the outing, he won't have to give anything back. Lei said it was surprising they'd introduced such a rule. Dan asked how else he thought the academy would make money. They'd pull this off again and again. MC thought they should figure out how to handle all this. This Lancey, he's a tough nut to crack. 10 or less, they said. The system hung questioningly in the air, and Lei thought about it. After a while, at the entrance to the training grounds, Lancey was collecting crystals. Lancey looked at MC and said, Lei Talon, he's the last one out, and with only 5 small crystals. MC spread his arms wide and said, he was probably just unlucky, sir, Lancey said discontentedly. He thinks he's trying to trick him. Let him unload all his gear. MC undressed and asked, well, did he believe it? Is it really not true? Lancey cried out in displeasure. That can't be true. He probably hid them in the mountains. He's seen a lot of people like him. If he suddenly finds out that he's hiding the crystals, he'll get them. MC got dressed and, waving his hand, said that no matter what he said, if he found anything, he could take it all for himself. Lancey told him not to be impudent. He better really be so insignificant. If he ever caught him, he'd be in big trouble. Lei replied, yes, of course. Dan asked, Lei, how did he do it? He probably managed to get more than just the monster's small crystals. MC laughed and said, it's a secret. Some time ago, Lei realized that when killing a magical beast, the monster's crystal can always go directly into the system, while others have to dig through the remains of the killed monster. He said that after he transfers the monster's crystal into the system, the real crystal turns into an ordinary stone, which is no longer good for anything. Monk cried out happily. Finally, at that moment, the system pestered MC, seeing the crystal in his hand, and he ordered him to leave. The system has had enough. To divert suspicion from himself, he controlled the system so that it wouldn't absorb the crystals directly while he was hunting with the others. The system window reported that he would receive 10 weak beast crystals. Does he want to absorb them? Besides, once a monster crystal enters the system, it can no longer be extracted. To proceed to the virtual store, he needs to leave behind some physical beast crystals. He only has 5 left, and he doesn't have to hand them over upon exiting the test. He didn't even know that it was possible to evade taxes in this way. The system reported 10 small monster crystals, 2 medium monster crystals, and 1 high-level monster crystal. Lei thought, by the way, during the last test he thought the system would be ineffective for weapons already created, but he had no idea that it would directly absorb crystals from high-level monsters. He thinks he'll have to be more careful from now on. If Delbert suddenly finds out about this, he'll never leave him alone. MC said the others had already left, and it was time for them to go back too. He turned around and asked, Gary, what happened? Did he lose something? He walked up to him and said, Gary. Gary looked down and said, Red gate. He has to open the red gate. MC screamed, what red gate? What is he talking about? Gary grabbed his head and yelled, no, don't. Lei sat down next to him and asked him to calm down. At that moment, Monk looked around and said, strange. Where did those two go? Dan replied, they were literally just walking behind them. Where did they go? Monk told them to go, and he would come back and look for them. Naslavia told him to stop and offered to go together. Monk said that everything was fine and he would be right back. He quickly disappeared, and approaching the guys, he screamed, well, really? What's wrong with them? The others were long gone. MC said, Monk, Gary is like crazy. All he talks about. Gary interrupted him and said, Red gate, Lei. He needs to go to the red gate. This voice is calling him. Monk asked again, Red gate? This is the place Gary keeps talking about. This is the Avrion Academy prison. After a while, MC opened his eyes and thought, what is this place? The voice said, he is finally here. Lei asked, whose voice is that? The voice said, it was waiting for him. Let him find him, and he will reveal the secret to him. MC asked, who is he? The voice said, and all the secrets about him in this world. Lei asked, what other secrets? A bright glow headed towards the gate, and Lei ordered not to run but to wait. Lei woke up and asked, was it a dream? How realistic. He looked towards where Gary was lying and said in his sleep, red gates. MC thought, those same red gates? Is Gary dreaming about them now? Some time ago, Monk suggested MC to take him to the medical block for an examination. MC asked, Gary, what did he dream about? Gary answered, he doesn't remember. He doesn't remember anything at all. That day, he happened to pass by the red gate and lingered his gaze on it for a moment. And then, every night, he started having nightmares that he couldn't remember when he woke up. In those dreams, he felt only sheer terror. It seemed to him that there was someone behind those gates, calling him. And this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He thought, he really should go and check. Monk screamed, is he crazy? That's a prison. It's forbidden. If he goes in there, he'll be expelled. Gary replied, he knew, but he had no other choice. If things continued like this, that voice in his head would simply kill him. MC said, the main thing is not to get caught. Monk screamed, Lei, this isn't just about being expelled from the academy. If he's not careful, he could easily die. MC asked, so what? If they use their skills, they could sneak in there at night. Is he with them? Monk asked again, was he kidding? Gary said, Lei, come on. Don't let him anger Monk. He'll be grateful if he goes with him. MC said, but Monk can sneak better than any of them. He could be quite useful. Gary said so, but he felt a little awkward because it was as if he was forcing him to follow him. Monk shouted, okay, he got it. He'll go too. He'll pay them back for the duel they had last time. MC said, great. Then they agreed. They'll work out a plan later. Currently, Lei was lying on the bed and thinking, the red gates of Avrion prison. That's the source of Gary's nightmares. Now he was having them too. Did the academy prison really keep all the secrets of this world? Late the next evening, knights were standing outside Avrion prison. Monk asked, is everyone ready? Gary answered, yes. MC asked, Gary, is he sure they won't notice him? Those guards look pretty impressive. Gary replied that if the guards were black belt knights, they definitely wouldn't be able to get inside. However, after some observation, he discovered that every Tuesday from 10 to 11 o'clock in the evening, they were relieved by regular white belt knights. This would be their chance. Lei said that it seemed he had been trying to get inside for a long time. So why were the knights relieved at this time? Gary replied that he didn't know. Maybe they were having some kind of general meeting? Monk replied that they didn't care why they were doing it. MC activated the dragon's eye and scanned everything inside the prison. He thought there was only pitch darkness down there. Even the dragon's eye couldn't make out what exactly was down there. There must be something very, very strange. Besides, the prison was built underground. This is a little alarming. After a while, the guys moved to the barrels that were lying near the entrance and overheard the knights' conversation. Gentlemen, the time has come for their general meeting. They will start it here. The knights replied, yes. Gary spoke. Finally, it's time for the changing of the guard. The knight looked toward the barrels and asked, is there something there? They went straight ahead and said, no, it just seemed that way. They need to hurry. The elders are waiting. Lei said, good that they left, as they planned. Gary said, okay, go ahead. One of them was grabbed by the arm and there was a cry. Stop. What are they doing? A third-year student with a black belt, Jasmine, was looking at them. The guys asked, Jasmine, what is she doing here? Jasmine crouched and said she should be asking them. She was just training nearby, and then she saw them sneaking. Gary answered, it is. Jasmine screamed, they're not gonna get in here, are they? Gary thoughtfully responded, how should he tell her? She's just in time. They are planning. There was a crash, and the knights looked toward the barrels. The knight asked, oh God, why does something always happen on their watch? The other knight ordered him to stop complaining and help. He told him to bring weapons and supplies, and now they also have to set it up. He definitely tightened all the ropes on the tarp. The knight said, maybe it's because of the bad rope. MC said, Gary, Monk is already on his way. They have to hurry. Jasmine said discontentedly, they even dragged Monk into this. Are they crazy? Do they even realize what kind of place this is? It's against school rules. Not to mention that it's too dangerous. Gary asked, Lei, what's wrong with her? MC said sorry, but now that she spotted them, they will have to do this. Jasmine asked again, is he trying to silence her? They are classmates. They are supposed to help each other. How can he? Gary hit her in the neck and knocked her out. He said she was so talkative that he simply had no other choice. Maybe they should leave her here? MC threw her over his shoulder and said, no. If she suddenly wakes up and tells everything, they will be in big trouble. They will have to drag her inside. They will go. They crept up to the gate when the knights were examining the barrels. Monk began to pick the lock, and MC asked, the guards will be back soon. He hasn't opened it yet? Monk asked to be patient a little longer, not to rush him. Done. The knight was talking at that moment. He had asked him to tie it tighter this time. If he had laid them down more carefully, they would not have fallen so easily. The other knight answered. He said that it was not his fault. It's probably all because of the rope. Tomorrow he will ask for new ones. The gate opened, which at that moment was watched by the guy from the tree. He grinned and said, this time he himself went to certain death. Lord Gibby will be pleased. The guys went inside and said, they finally got inside. There's not a single window here. It's good that he took the illuminating stone with him. Gary took advantage of this, after which Monk asked puzzledly, is that Jasmine? What is she doing here? He didn't even notice her at first. Gary spoke up. She spotted them, so they had to take her with them. Monk asked, did he knock her out? Jasmine woke up and said, it was. Monk extended his hand to her and asked, Jasmine, is she okay? She jumped up and screamed loudly. He dared to knock out the elder. She'll report him in full. Gary fearfully asked her to listen to him. They really had no other choice. MC interrupted her and said, she can report it. They are already here, so she can scream at the top of her lungs. But then security will notice her, and they will all be kicked out of the academy. Monk asked not to exaggerate the situation. Jasmine screamed. Monk asked her not to listen to him. Lei went ahead, and Gary said, yeah, they'd already gotten here anyway, so they needed to get a look around and leave quickly. Jasmine watched MC go, still upset. Curiosity got the better of her, and Jasmine told them she wanted them to know that she really didn't care if they got in trouble for it. Gary replied, yes, of course. They'll take care of themselves just fine. Jasmine said, she's the eldest, so she'll lead them. They all have to obey her, okay? Gary replied, yes ma'am. She walked ahead and the guys followed her. Monk said, it's like there's no one here at all. This is a prison, but there are no prisoners in it? Gary replied, he doesn't know. Nothing is known about that. He's never heard of prisoners being transferred here. He doesn't even know why it's so heavily guarded. Jasmine cleared her throat and said she thought they'd heard something about this place, that they were here to find out what really goes on here. MC asked if she'd heard any rumors. Jasmine replied, of course. This place is called Avrion Prison, and according to legend, fake prisoners are kept in this one. Some say the academy calls this place a prison to hide things they don't want to show, and when it comes out, it will be a huge shock. Lei said, they don't know what's really going on here. Jasmine turned around and said, in the end, these are all just words, youngster. Legend. No one has ever been inside, except for the 3 horsemen or the 6th elder. Suddenly, mana began to rise up and they screamed, such a strong wind. What a stench. Lei looked down and thought there was some noise coming from there. Monk said, since they've already gotten here, they'd better go back. He doesn't want to go further. Jasmine laughed and said, that's a good suggestion. Gary said, no, he should go down at least to find out what he's dreaming about. MC said he didn't care. He suggested going down together. After a while, Jasmine said they finally reached the very bottom. They asked in surprise, is there another door here? Monk cried out, how huge is it? Jasmine asked, what is it made of? It seemed very old to her. Gary released his mana and shouted, "Who cares?" He offered to open it quickly. Monk said he didn't think it was a good idea. Gary turned around and ordered him not to stand there, but to help. MC activated the dragon's eye to see everything behind the door. Jasmine said she thought he could handle it just fine on his own. Gary ordered him to push it hard. Jasmine asked if he wasn't sure he could handle it. Maybe he should give up. Lei thought, even with the dragon's eye, he still couldn't see what was inside. This place must be enchanted with high-level magic or have some kind of special shield placed on it. Jasmine said it was simply impossible to unlock. It was just locked tight. Monk wiped his chin and offered to go back. There must be something very important behind that door. Gary turned around and ordered him to stop. He won't come back. Lei, he simply has to help him. MC grinned and said he's coming. The system window asked a question. Unlock the door? Yes or no? MC thought, is it possible? He pressed the yes button and it opened. Gary cried out in surprise. Did it open? Monk asked a question. Lei, what did he do? MC answered, he doesn't know. He just touched it and it opened. The gear moves inward with a characteristic sound, and the magic crystal illuminates only a small part of what is directly in front of the eyes, so it is almost impossible to see what is inside. Gary said to go, and Monk agreed with him. Fear of the unknown instantly took hold of the group. They walked forward, when suddenly they bumped into something and got very scared. Jasmine clung to MC, and he ordered her to let him go. Monk asked, what? What is that sound? Gary replied, he just stepped on something. He put his hand forward and illuminated the skeleton. Monk asked, is it a skull? Gary replied, most likely it was some kind of animal. Does it look like a dragon? But this one doesn't have horns. Monk screamed, this looks absolutely amazing, but how did it die? MC turned away and thought, dragons don't die that easily. Jasmine asked, maybe the knights killed the creature? After a while, Lei said, it looks like they're getting closer to their goal. Jasmine said, they'll finally be able to get out. Gary loudly ordered to look. It's so spacious here. Jasmine looked ahead and said, these are some kind of cages. Monk said, there's too much of this here, like a mosquito nest. MC looked around and said, but it was completely empty inside. Monk grabbed the bent bars of the cage with his hand and said, he was more worried that it looked like whoever was here had escaped. Well, they've already searched everything here, so maybe it's time for them to go back. Jasmine agreed and said that if monster fights really happen here, then the owner of this place is no ordinary person. If they all escaped, then it's getting even more dangerous here. MC said, Gary, they've already gone far enough. They need to go back before the nights change. Gary replied, no. Lei, he doesn't understand. He went down and said that to get to the bottom of it, they just need to go a little further. MC rushed after him and said, Gary, don't let him go any further. Gary replied, he heard a voice calling him. It's there. Lei asked him to stop. He crawled into the cage and MC screamed. He's delirious. Monk asked, what is this? A seal appeared in front of them and threw Gary back. Monk screamed in fear. Gary, MC thought, Aura, this is bad. He grabbed his sword and asked, is this? The image of a minotaur appeared in front of him, causing everyone to be very scared. Jasmine said, no, it can't be. She can't believe it. It's a king-level monster, a lost cow god. The creature screamed loudly, causing everyone to be thrown in different directions. It went towards Jasmine, whom Monk ordered to watch out. She spoke in fear. Her legs won't obey. The cow god grabbed her, after which she screamed loudly. Monk attacked the creature and ordered it to let go. Monster! He cut the monster's hand. Jasmine fell to the ground and said she thought she was finished. Monk asked, can Jasmine get up? Something irreparable almost happened. The creature began to accumulate mana, and Monk said in fear, no, it's a magic attack. Jasmine, let her get up now, otherwise they will both die. Mana flowed rapidly through the monster's body, quickly accumulating. It aimed it towards Monk and Jasmine, but they managed to block the attack. Gary flew to the side and asked, what is that? What kind of monster was that? He thought, Monk and the others. They are all okay. Nova appeared in front of them, covering everyone. Monk asked in surprise, why is this monster helping them? MC held back the creature's attack and said, he doesn't have time to explain. All they need to know now is that he is on their side. There is no need to be afraid. Nova, first, have him escort Jasmine to another, safer place. Monk looked at him in surprise and asked, is he really obeying his orders? Lei crouched and said, Monk, have him hold his breath. And then, when he grabs the monster, he will cut the creature with his knives. Monk said, Lei, that's simply impossible to do. He realizes how strong it is. MC ordered to trust him. Monk said, okay, he understands. Let him be careful. MC ordered him to move forward, buddy. The bull approached him, and Lei grabbed the creature by the horns and thought, horror, it's incredibly strong. It slammed MC against the wall, after which he ordered it to die. He will not let the creature escape. He screamed, Monk, now! He jumped and swung his swords. He tried to plunge it into the cow god's body and ordered it to go to its ancestors. His eyes widened in surprise and asked, what? He thought it was absolutely impenetrable. Is the skin hard as steel? At that moment, a shout rang out. Gary, Monk, get out of the way. Monk cried out in fear, Gary! He thought in fear. Amazing, his sword just flew apart. The guys were scattered in different directions, and MC was pinned against the wall. Lei held the creature by the horn and ordered it not to move. The system window reported mana distribution, passive skill activation. MC thought, mana replenishment, activation. Mana began to increase, after which Lei did a somersault in the air. His mana was replenished and he thought, he needs to concentrate his chi, and then put it all into an attack. He attacked the creature from behind and happily thought he succeeded. There is something in this old man's special training. Gary ordered him to watch out. The bull threw MC aside and he thought, he can't even control his body properly. Not counting the numbness caused by the monster's electric shock, It happened because he splashed out too much mana at once, to which his body could not quickly adapt. Horror, this body still does not have enough endurance, if they do nothing. At that moment, Lei noticed the figure of a man on the cliff. He said, they have made contact with an enemy beyond their strength. He ordered to get out of here, youngsters. The guys screamed, Sir Kay, it's Sir Kay. Monk screamed, they are saved. Kay ordered them not to flatter him. He would deal with them later. He quickly rushed into the attack, holding the cigar in his teeth. The bulls swung his huge fists and they shouted, Sir Kay. The creature with crazed red eyes ran to the side, but couldn't find the man. He asked, isn't it looking for him? The monster's head flew off, and Gary said, there, problem solved. Monk said, it worked. MC approached Nova and ordered them to return. A system window appeared in front of him, informing him of a reward. The ability to absorb elements had been unlocked. Lei wondered, a new ability? Was it because of the absorption of electrical damage? Kay picked up Jasmine and said that fortunately this king-level monster didn't have much magic power left. Otherwise, he wouldn't have escaped its clutches unharmed. He ordered them to come with him before they got into more trouble. Didn't they all have anything to say to him? Monk asked. Will they be expelled? Kay told them to be glad they were just being expelled. How dare they sneak into the dungeon, and how were they even alive? The boys said they were very sorry. The man turned around and said, but he has no desire at all to expel them for surviving an encounter with a king-level monster. If they promise to keep everything a secret, he will pretend he didn't see them. The boys cried out joyfully, yes! Kay was closing the gate and asking, by the way, how did they manage to open this door? MC replied, well, it was open when they came here. Gary said, yeah, that's right. The man asked, was it open? Strange. The door was closing, and at the last moment MC heard a voice he would wait for him. Lei thought, this voice he heard it in a dream. The voice said to come back when he gets stronger. After that, the door slammed. That night in the academy hospital, the doctor said, you can't train like that and then send 4 students to hospital beds at once. He's always nothing but trouble. Kay said of course he didn't want to bother him anymore, but it was an accident. Humphrey told him not to even start. He'll come to the morning council and explain himself. Kay said, Mr. Humphrey, it's just a scratch. Gary said, he's sure Sir Kay will stand up for them. MC thought, he hopes. He thought, the mentor is so scary when he's angry. He sat up and asked, by the way, Gary, why he continued to go deeper into the cave despite them stopping him. Gary apologized and said he couldn't explain. He just felt like he had to go there and couldn't control either his body or his mind. Monk took out a book and said, well, he knows why. He just learned from this book that a royal-level monster, the Lost Cow God, in addition to thunder and lightning elemental magic, possesses a power called Mental Labyrinth. The guys asked again, Mental Labyrinth. Legend has it that the queen of a certain country and a white bull once gave birth to a monster with a bull's head, which was to be sacrificed to the gods. Upon learning of the creature born to the queen, the king became furious and ordered the construction of a huge labyrinth, guarded by vigilant guards, on a desert island at the end of the world. The Minotaur was born and was trapped in this labyrinth for life, and even after death, its soul could not find peace. This Minotaur possessed truly divine power. As it grew, in order to escape from captivity, it eventually gained the ability to radiate an aura that influenced human hearts. Bewitched people lost control of their minds, and their actions were dictated by their strongest emotions. MC thought, what kind of legend is this? And how can a man and a bull have a child? Gary said, the creature is even somehow pitiful. And what happened to the bull afterwards? Monk answered, there is no mention of this in the book. Maybe the creature managed to escape? Otherwise, they would not have discovered the monster in the underground prison. Gary said, that makes sense. The monster must have had a large offspring, so maybe it was because of the Minotaur that he had such dreams? Monk answered, exactly. MC thought, so is it true? If the Minotaur was really the cause of Gary's dreams, then what was that voice he was hearing? Kay came into the room and said, well, the doctor said he'll heal like a dog, so he'll be fine in a few days and out of the hospital next week. The guys thought he was still swearing. MC turned around and asked, Sir Kay, well, he interrupted him and asked if he was worried about his injury. He winked and said, it's nothing, just a couple of broken ribs. For people like him, it's just routine. Lei said, no. He actually wanted to ask if he still had the King's Stone. And would they get any of it? Kay got angry and screamed. He shouldn't even think about that. It was payment for his troubles. Whose fault does he think it was that he got hurt? MC covered himself with his hands and replied, yes, yes, yes. Of course, yeah. Kay headed for the exit and said, okay, let them rest guys, and tomorrow they'll go for a full body checkup. MC said, by the way, he had another question. How did he know they'd broken into the prison? Gary said, sure, they were the only ones who knew, and even if Jasmine had wanted to tell anyone, she simply wouldn't have had the time. Kay turned around and said, they kids have so many secrets that he's dying to unravel. One of the hidden ones told him about it. MC asked again, hidden? He thought, so they've been watched all this time? Monk said, he'd heard something about that. They say the academy has some people assigned to the students. They blend in with the crowd, protecting them from trouble. Gary said, to put it simply, they just report on problem students. Kay waved his hand and said, well, that's probably all they need to know about them, so don't bother him with questions anymore. Lei watched him go and, exhaling, thought, the secrets of this academy are much simpler than they seemed at first glance. They went to bed, and Lei thought, by the way, about the ability he recently received. Is it the absorption of elements? Using the opponent's magical abilities to enhance the power of his own magic of the same type. Right now, this ability is of little use. Maybe he should try learning magic? He asked them to keep what happened a secret, and Sir Kay didn't ask him anything, so he thinks they still haven't figured it out. It seems to him that Gary no longer has nightmares, so it all really was the influence of that monster. After some time, MC was training at the martial arts club. Ben said, "Well done, kid. This technique really suits him perfectly." Lei asked, "Is it really?" And he thinks that in this state, his sword is used mainly for defense, and fist attacks, they're not that powerful. Feng replied, "Well, he's right about that, of course." He slammed his fist into his palm and said happily, "Exactly. He'll give it to him." MC asked again, "Is this it?" Feng rummaged through his closet and asked, "Where did they go?" He remembered leaving it here. MC said, "Old man, if he can't find it, then let him forget it." He thought, what good thing could they hide in a place like this? Bung screamed, "He found it. These are dragon fists." MC was puzzled, wondering what kind of name that was. He picked up the gloves and asked, "Is this really that good?" Feng told him not to worry. It changes size to suit the owner's size. Suddenly the gloves started to shrink and Lei asked in surprise, "Is this made from monster crystals?" Feng asked contentedly, "Not bad, huh? It's a pity, of course, that these are only mid-level crystals, dragon horns. If these were high-level crystals, they would be even more powerful." He folded his arms and said he would gladly give him the highest level equipment, but that would be somehow completely unfair to the other participants. Lei asked again, "Other participants?" Feng asked, "What? He doesn't know anything at all? Does he rarely attend classes?" MC told him to tell him. Feng said that all second-year students and above will participate in the annual Academy Tournament. The Academy Tournament is a one-on-one battle that determines the 5 strongest students of the Academy. These 5 students will represent the Academy and compete against the strongest from other countries of the world in the Tournament of Nations. Feng said he will lend him these gloves. He wants him, his student, to enter at least the top 10. MC laughed and said, and he was really fired up by this, the old man. Feng said that if he uses it wisely and can get a good place in the rankings, then he will give it to him. MC thanked the old man in advance. Feng said he already had a weapon, so he'd better focus on finding something that could protect him. A breastplate, a shield, or something similar, they'll always come in handy when completing missions. Lei pondered, something that would protect. After a while, he shouted loudly, "What? So expensive?" The man said that's the price. If he thinks it's too expensive, he should go elsewhere. Lei said he'd quoted a completely different price last time. The man said he'd always quoted completely childish prices for mid-level protective gear made from monster crystals. It costs 10 minor crystals, or 1,000 yuan. As for the extra 10 minor monster crystals he has to pay, he whispered, that's his payment for his silence. He wasn't at all interested in where he got these extra crystals. MC thought, this is terrible. They certainly won't be able to catch him red-handed while he's hiding the crystals. But if he makes a fuss here and attracts attention, he's afraid he'll never be able to hunt alone again. He replied, okay. He threw the pouch on the table and told him to get to work. The man looked at it in surprise, picked up the pouch, and said he could be sure he'd be satisfied with their family's work. He'd get started. Lei thought, slippery human nature really is present in all areas of life. Suddenly, Naslavia appeared behind him and said, Lei, what a coincidence. MC asked if she'd also come for new gear. She replied, no classes today. She came closer to him, and he whispered to her to change stores. The owner of this one, he's not the most honest businessman. He's just, Naslavia screamed. So that's what happened to him. She walked up to the counter and started banging her hands on it. She screamed, Master, Master, is he here? The man replied, yes, just a minute. He smiled and said, it's Miss Hart. Welcome. He asked for her to pass. Naslavia said with displeasure, that's not necessary. She was here on an errand. She was interested in the price of making armor from medium-level beast crystals for her friend. Lei wondered if this man had called Naslavia Miss. Was she from some famous family? Naslavia turned around and said, Lei. She returned the extra money. MC thanked her in surprise and thought, the difference in attitude towards people is simply amazing. He remembered Sebastian and thought that even though this guy was a disgusting person, what he said was a very true reflection of how things were in this world. Lei reached into his pocket and said, Naslavia, for your help. He gives her this. He took out a medium-level Wally Bear crystal and handed it to her. Naslavia screamed, is this really Wally the Bear's medium crystal? She can't take it. It's more valuable than 10 small monster crystals. MC grabbed her hand and told her to take it. He already had weapons and armor. There was no point in keeping it. Maybe she would find it useful. He turned away and waved his hand, saying, he'll go look for something else. They'll see each other later. Naslavia sheepishly said his name and hugged the crystal to her chest. After a while, MC said, well, not bad. The man laughed and said he was glad he was satisfied. He didn't know he was friends with the eldest daughter of the Hart family, so he apologized if he had offended her. MC examined the armor and thought, he's already mastered Shi quite well. And with this breastplate and gloves the old man gave him, he can't wait to try his hand at hunting higher-level monsters. After a while, Gibby stood by the window and said that he hadn't imagined how lucky he was to get out of the underground prison alive. The guy said that as far as he knew, a spy had told Kay about it. He was the one who saved them. Gibby said that he didn't think that this ancient system even worked. The guy replied that with the 3 horsemen on their side, and now the problematic Kay, it wouldn't be so easy for them. Maybe they should use Delbert? Gibby replied, that there was no rush. They could turn to him, but he was one of the 3 horsemen. He would need to be sure of his loyalty. The guy said then. Gibby interrupted him and ordered him to leave him. It would be easier for them to manipulate him without Delbert's participation. Let him tell him that if he succeeds, the Pureblood Guild will reward him with a new position. The guy nodded and said that he understood and would give orders to his subordinates immediately. Gibby said, and more. If he doesn't succeed, he shouldn't come back and report to him. The guy replied, yes. After a while, the students were walking at the foothills of the hunting grounds. Dan said that today's catch promises to be big. Gary chuckled and said that they need to try and save up money to buy all the necessary equipment. Monk said, he really doesn't know what to say, thanks to him. Ian said that he will pay him back much more when he has such a chance. MC pointed at himself and asked, is he telling him this now? Dan hugged him and said, dude, although he knows that he is shy, they all really appreciate it. MC looked at Martha and asked, was she involved in all of this? Martha replied, well, she didn't really want to draw attention to herself, so bye. Naslavia screamed, Martha! She smiled and said, it's all thanks to the Wally Bear crystal that he gave her. She exchanged it for gold and distributed it to all their teammates in his name. Besides, she already had a pretty good shield, so she didn't really need the money. Was he angry that she didn't discuss this with him first? MC stopped and said, no, not at all. Naslavia. He thinks she would have made a good leader. Naslavia blushed and screamed, horror. Why did he suddenly become so serious? The others looked at them and were touched. Gary smiled and asked Lei to tell him the truth. There really was nothing between him and Naslavia. MC looked at him questioningly and asked what he meant. Gary said to forget it. His head was all in pieces. Just make him promise that he won't do the same to Amy when they meet her again. MC looked at his back, puzzled, when suddenly Dan shouted, attention everyone! Monk ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Huge dragonflies were heading their way. MC looked at them and thought, it's just a low-level monster. No big deal. Dan screamed, that's too easy. Isn't there anything more difficult? Gary looked at him and replied, it just means their fighting skills have improved. Dan cried out happily, sooner or later he'll get a white belt. Monk rushed forward, when suddenly a monster began to emerge from the ground behind him. Lei ordered him to watch out. Monk jumped up and said, it's a Hercules beetle. Is this a mid-level monster? Dan said, wow, even a mid-level magical monster? It's just some beetle. He attacked the monster but couldn't break through. Dan said, puzzled, he had no idea that this beetle's shell was so hard. Lei told him to move aside. More beetles were approaching. Gary tried to strike, but failed to penetrate, nervously exclaiming how hard their shell was. Martha excitedly said she could barely shoot through their armor. Naslavia struck and shouted, don't even think about getting that close. A moment later, the insects surrounded them. Suddenly, a powerful explosion sounded, and one beetle's head flew off. The protagonist, smiling, shouted, let the beetles look here. Let them get out of here. He began attacking each insect with lightning speed. Explosive attacks. Monk, wildly shocked, exclaimed that this was awesome. Dan agreed and asked, what kind of new weapon is this guy, and why is it so powerful? He replied that it looked like the master of the martial arts club lent it to him. Dan, upset, exclaimed, why? He feels like he lost and joined the wrong club. MC, attacking the beetles, wondered how he should act so as not to arouse their suspicions even more. He nervously asked how long they were going to just watch. Let them help him already. Martha started attacking the bugs with her bow, after which everyone else joined in. Monk threw a dagger and shouted with a smile, that's how it's done. At that moment, Dan came up from behind and delivered a powerful blow to the bug. Ian took advantage of the opportunity and finished it off. After a while, Dan sighed and noted that they had dealt with the last one. He began collecting loot and joyfully exclaimed that they were rich. These were all mid-level monsters, and they would definitely drop the same crystals. Monk replied that it was true. These were mid-level crystals. MC thought that he already had 2. Let them have the rest. But then again, the sudden appearance of so many mid-level monsters huddled together resembled someone's well-thought-out plan. Suddenly, he noticed a strange flock of birds in the sky and wondered what was going on. The protagonist used the dragon's eye and, noticing the fire, shouted that it was moving toward them. Dan, perplexed, replied that he couldn't see anything. Martha climbed a tree and shouted that he was right. She could see the flames. Gary lay down on the ground and said he heard the sound of footsteps. Monsters running. Dan anxiously asked, what are they waiting for then? They needed to get out of here. The protagonist replied that he was afraid it was too late. The girl climbed down from the tree and warned that the flames were approaching them from all sides. Naslavia had the Calamity Gem with her, right? Let her give the signal. They must call the knights for help. She replied that she had tried, but the stone hadn't worked. Dan exclaimed, that cat can't be right. It had decided to break at just such a moment. Suddenly, 3 silhouettes appeared from the wall of flames. The ninja emerged from the fire and took up their weapons. Monk excitedly asked, are they here to save them? MC replied that he was afraid. No. Gary shouted, did they start the fire? What do they want from them? Suddenly the ninjas began to attack them abruptly. The protagonist parried the attack of one of the opponents and asked, who are they? Why is he doing this? He wondered if this guy's sword was not an ordinary weapon. The protagonist dashed back and asked if Monk was okay. The guy, although wounded, replied that he was fine. Ian nervously exclaimed that he would help. Suddenly, one of the ninjas surrounded him with a wall of fire. MC, left alone, wondered if they were deliberately trying to separate them. Was their target him or Gary? Or maybe just him? The guy was already caught in the crossfire. It looked like he would have to fight against 2 of them alone. He shouted that they shouldn't worry about them. Let them come down from the mountain and call for help. It was not safe to stay here. They could only be saved if the knights arrived to their rescue. Naslavia exclaimed that he was right. They needed to split up and call for help. The protagonist stood back to back with Gary and asked if he thought they could handle it. He replied that he would take care of this guy. Gary thought that the ninja was fast, but not fast enough to defeat him. As long as he was protected, he wouldn't be able to mortally wound him. He needed to hold him off. He would buy Lei some time. At that moment, one of the ninjas began to attack the protagonist. As he parried the attack, another ninja tried to attack him from behind. He thought he would sneak up on him. MC suddenly grabbed the end of the weapon and began to pull it aside, and then thought that it was really in his way. No matter which one of them he was fighting, the other was there to prevent him from dealing with them. Suddenly, one of the ninjas managed to land a powerful attack. The protagonist fell to the ground right into the fire and thought that he had no idea that they worked so well as a team. Luckily, the breastplate prevented a fatal wound. He needed to come up with a new plan. Suddenly, Gary screamed in pain and asked if he even realized he'd just healed his arm. The ninja replied that he'd make sure he didn't have any more problems like this. The guy told Lei not to worry, he'd deal with him. The ninja suddenly began to attack, shouting that he'd make things difficult for him. The protagonist remarked that if he was going to die, he had no intention of standing in the way. He absorbed 5 small monster crystals and knelt down. In an instant, powerful magical energy formed around him. System windows appeared, stating that the evolution was complete. He had become a dragon knight. The beast he'd summoned evolved into a horned wolf. The MC transformed and shouted, "Let Nova come out. It's time to have some fun." In an instant, a huge werewolf appeared behind him. Ninja, seeing this, noted that intelligence hadn't reported anything about this guy's magic. The other replied that it didn't matter. The mission didn't change. After that, they began attacking together again. The protagonist thought, was this the same trick again? Did he really think he couldn't break this thing? He grabbed one end of the weapon and ordered Nova to act. Ninja, trying to hold onto the weapon, shouted that he was strong. The werewolf grabbed it and began to circle around the opponents, trying to tie them up with a chain. Ninja, confused, asked, is he trying to cut him off from the others? How naive. He quickly broke the chain and freed himself. The protagonist, sitting on the beast, said that he was leaving it with the knives. The werewolf abruptly ran at the opponents, and at that moment, he leaped into attack. The second ninja tried to help his comrade, but the beast suddenly attacked him. He began to parry the blow and shouted at him to stop being so brazen. He's just an animal. He takes down hundreds of them a day. At that moment, MC dashed back and thought, here we go again. This sword is really bothering him, so he needs to disarm it. It's strange. Ever since the chain ninja approached him, he seemed to be trying to keep him away. Why was this so? He needed to find out. He dashed forward with lightning speed and got as close as possible. The ninja immediately began to retreat, agitated. The protagonist began to attack him and thought, that's right. He's afraid of a head-on collision. He should admit his weaknesses already. At that moment, Gary knocked his opponent to the ground. The ninja, trying to remove his sword, shouted that he was just an academy student. So why was he going through so much trouble? He replied that he was right. They were students of the Avrion Academy. Let him tell them why they attacked them. The guy stabbed his sword into the enemy and held it. Suddenly, the protagonist threw a fireball in their direction, calling out to him and warning him of the danger. Gary dodged at the last moment, causing the fireball to hit the ninja. The powerful attack sent him flying back, and, burning alive, he screamed for them to save him. Gary was shocked to think that these guys weren't even sparing their comrades. He tried to help the protagonist, but immediately fell to the ground. MC told him not to worry about it. He needed to rest, and he would crush those bastards. Scoundrels like him didn't deserve to be alive. The protagonist put Gary's sword between his teeth and, starting to attack, shouted that he was the kind of bastard who was ready to sacrifice the lives of his fellow men, so let him die. He tried to pierce it, but it was no use, and the ninja retreated slightly. The protagonist nervously considered how strong his chest armor was. He had not only the Inferno sword, but also special armor covering his entire body. It seemed they had prepared thoroughly this time. If this continued, his armor would give out, so he would have to find another way out. At that moment, another ninja, fighting the werewolf, shouted not to worry, he would let him die before his master. He thought he was strong, but it turned out he was only a mid-level magical beast. Nova began to surround him with lightning speed. The ninja, perplexed, asked, did he really think he could confuse him with this? A simple trick, too easy for him. He yanked the chain sharply and stopped the beast. Meanwhile, Gary, watching this, thought he should do something. As the ninja attempted to kill Nova, the boy abruptly stood up, blocked the blow with his sword, and told him to stop. He replied that he might be a child, but he was strong enough. If he was so eager to die in this beast's stead, he would help him. The ninja delivered a powerful blow and sent the boy and the werewolf flying. He then attempted to finish Nova off, but Gary rose again, grabbed his leg, and shouted for him to grab the sword and fight like his master. The beast obeyed and took the sword in his teeth. The ninja swung furiously and shouted for him to die. The boy replied that he wouldn't let go, even if he died. At that moment, Nova struck him in the back with his sword and killed him. The other ninja, seeing this, thought he was useless. MC, seeing his distraction, quickly threw his sword, grabbed his arm, and, delivering a powerful blow, shouted that they would see how he could dodge this. The blow was so powerful that his mask cracked, revealing Lancey's face. Gary, seeing this, screamed in shock. Why? He's a knight and their teacher. Why is he doing this? The guy pounced on him and replied that it didn't matter at all, because they were going to die anyway. The protagonist warned him of the danger, when Nova suddenly pushed Lancey aside and saved Gary. He shouted for it to come back. He was canceling the summoning. A moment later, the beast disappeared. Lancey began to attack again and shouted for him not to worry. He would get rid of it anyway. MC thought that there would always be scum like him in the human race. No matter what his intentions, was it worth dragging others into this? The guy swung his sword and shouted that time was up. He grabbed the blade and thought furiously. Did he enjoy hurting others so much? Did he enjoy attacking him so much? Then he would pay for it. The protagonist used the absorption of elements skill and literally began to melt the sword. Lancey shouted with a smile, as long as he continues to hold this sword, it is draining all his strength. The fire will consume him. He replied with a sly smile. He will die. The guy continued to hold the sword and shouted that they will see how long he lasts. He wondered in confusion. What is happening? This flame is weakening. Lancey nervously shouted. Let him let go. Why doesn't he just die? The protagonist replied. Don't force him to grab it. He began to kick him, and at the last moment delivered a powerful kick that sent him flying. MC somehow stood up and thought about how he had several broken ribs. It was time for him to make up his mind. The fire element he'd absorbed was precisely the magic he could use. If he could combine chi and fire elemental magic, he could use it as his own weapon. He instantly burst into flames. Seeing this, Lancey, horrified, declared that he really was a demon. They should have killed him earlier. He made a sharp lunge, but the protagonist counterattacked with lightning speed and chopped off his arm. The boy, in shock, wondered what had happened to the Inferno sword. It wasn't responding. MC grabbed his head and told him it was time. He instantly burned him to ashes and remarked that he'd gotten what he deserved. At that moment, Sir Kay and his knights ran up to him and shouted, "Are they all right?" They were the purebloods. They should report to Winford. He should hang on. His face and arm were badly injured. They need to get him to the infirmary immediately. The protagonist fell to the ground and thought that he's glad they were all okay. Sometime later, he woke up in the hospital and thought about the familiar ceiling and smell. It was the infirmary again, right? He tried to get up, but couldn't, and wondered why he was feeling so unwell. Naslavia was sitting next to him, and upon seeing him awake, she exclaimed joyfully. He asked how long he'd slept this time. She replied that it had been about 3 days, but he shouldn't worry. His wounds had been treated promptly, and he was recovering quickly. He rose slightly and thought about how he felt like his lips were about to burn, but now he felt much better. The girl began to leave, mentioning that she would call the others. They waited for him to wake up. After some time, Sir Kay used a magical technique and, creating a barrier, said that now they could be sure that their conversation would not be overheard. The MC, perplexed, asked what was going on and why everyone was here. He replied that they saw that 2 of their students had recently been attacked, which had seriously threatened their lives. He and Winford had discussed the matter and decided to tell them something. But before they did, could Lay tell them who attacked them? The protagonist said there were 3 of them, all wearing red masks, the identities of 2 unknown to him. But the third was the knight Lancey. Monk, shocked, said he couldn't believe it. Cool remarked that he had a premonition that he was a bad person. Naslavia asked if they were from a dark guild. She'd read in a book that it was a banned organization. Kay replied that no, if so, everything would be much simpler. They were from a guild called the Purebloods. Unlike the Dark Guild, the Purebloods had many supporters at their academy. Rumor has it that an elder is behind them. The girl exclaimed in shock. How could an elder allow such a thing? Monk added that this was murder, a real crime. Kay said he knew it, and he and Winford agreed with it, but it wasn't that simple. The protagonist asked what they were planning. He replied that he should have guessed by now. Besides the victims, there were other red-haired boys present here today. The protagonist understood everything and said that they wanted to get rid of them. Juan noted with a smile that they could finally throw away their wooden swords and use real ones. Cool exclaimed that it was pointless. The prophecy said they were the saviors. What benefit would they gain from killing them? Kay explained that it was because the prophecy had a second part. 11 years ago, the prophecy really only spoke of this. The red-haired child could become either the savior or the one who would destroy the world. Despite this paradox, the situation is as follows. There are knights who value their lineage and heritage highly. They simply cannot accept the fact that what their family has been proud of for generations will be jeopardized by a few children born out of nowhere. And unfortunately, many people think so. On the other hand, fierce battles are raging on the borders of the Allure Kingdom. They need knights to defend against shadow beasts and invasions from other countries. They also need to maintain the smooth operation of their academy. Under these circumstances, the upper echelons are unable to deal with the Pureblood Guild, as this could lead to a split in the Allure Kingdom from within, and then the peaceful life will end. Cool anxiously asked, what should they do? Are they really going to allow these people to continue to do this to them? Dan pointed out that, ultimately, it's not their job to save the world. But then again, that's not their job, right? Naslavia exclaimed. How could he say that? They were their friends. Kay replied that whether they liked it or not, he could tell they were in deep trouble now. The incident had shown them that behavior, that the Pureblood Guild wouldn't give up so easily. They must never let their guard down. He would make sure there were sleepers around them, and he and Winford would keep an eye on them as well. But he had to point out that there weren't enough of them to let them relax completely, and duty called. They couldn't be around them 24/7, so they'd be on their own most of the time. Gary pointed out that there was no better way. Monk said he thought they had no choice but to train hard to get stronger. Kay chuckled and said that was true. In his experience, Most guys who rely on others for protection are dead by the time they hear from them again. Okay, they needed to stop talking about this. They could go. He had something to tell Lei. A week later, MC emerged from the infirmary and said he could finally get out of this hole. If he lay there any longer, he'd go crazy. He mused that the dragon gloves the old man had given him were badly damaged, so he'd have to send them in for repairs. Although Nova's life was not in danger, he would still need some time to recover. And to recover faster, he needed a lot of medium monster crystals, and he'd have to find an opportunity to go hunting. After Kay's words, he couldn't relax for a minute. Sometime earlier in the infirmary, the protagonist had exclaimed in bewilderment, "Is this some kind of joke? Is he saying that he's the one most likely to become the one spoken of in the prophecy?" Kay replied that it wasn't a joke. He had something that set him apart from the others. His body has been in terrible condition more than once, but each time it healed itself. Though he tries to hide it, he suspects he's mastered some kind of magic. MC thought about how he could explain everything to him. For example, that he was a dragon in his past life. He'd think he was crazy. Besides, he'd had brunette hair as a child and had recovered quickly. He's afraid it's all just because there's still some dragon left in him. And then there's this strange system. Kay said that, whether he believed him or not, the main problem was that the Pure Blood Guild was convinced of it. Analyzing their actions, one could conclude that they wanted to get rid of him more than anything. From now on, he'd have to be more careful than everyone else. The protagonist was now thinking that dealing with Lancey wasn't so easy. The next one they'd send him would be much stronger than him. He couldn't just sit back and wait. Meanwhile, Gibby, watching from the tower, remarked that he hadn't suspected Lancey would be so useless. He had so much high-end gear at his disposal, and he couldn't get rid of that child. But fortunately, when they died, they couldn't give up anything significant. His bodyguard said that Kay and Winford had already figured everything out. The city was too unsettled right now. He was afraid they wouldn't have another chance to get rid of him anytime soon. The elder put on his mask and replied that it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that important and could wait. Let him bring Delbert here. He'd been in the block for a while. Since he was so eager to prove his loyalty, let him help them rock this boat first. After some time, the protagonist returned home. Gary approached him and noticed that he was covered in bruises again. He lay down on the bed and replied that he'd gone to the martial arts club to train with an old man, which is why he got the bruises. At that moment, the girls entered. Miss Lavia called out to Gary and said he had received a letter. Martha, seeing the protagonist, asked if he had been discharged yet. He agreed with a smile and added that he was already fine. She noted that it was time for him to do something about his long hair. Dan agreed with a smile and asked why he didn't get a haircut like him. MC, perplexed, asked who wanted to be like him. Cool, smiling, said that he thought a shaved head like his would look better on him. He replied that he didn't. What was he doing there anyway? Ian approached them and said that they had some free space in their room, and Cool wanted to move in with them. Monk added that Kay had decided it would be better for them to stick together, so they agreed to let him move in. The protagonist said that they couldn't even imagine how crazy he was. Are you sure Gary wouldn't mind? At this point, the guy himself, having read the letter, was completely horrified. He instantly jumped up from his seat and ran out into the street. Everyone, completely perplexed, began asking what had happened. Dan said he thought he was really worried about being used. The protagonist ran after him, and using the dragon's eye skill, wondered where he was. Oh, he was on the roof. He ran out onto the roof and asked what was going on. All the guys were worried about him. Gary replied that he just received a letter. It said that his sister Amy. After that, he immediately fell silent. The MC, confused, asked if something had happened to her. The guy answered that she had died. The protagonist remembered Amy telling him not to worry about what people thought, just to be himself. He thought that he had never had the chance to properly thank her. He kept thinking that he would always have time to tell her. The protagonist, with tears in his eyes, asked again, did she die? Gary said that it was a nightmare he couldn't get out of his head. He dreamed that Amy was torn to pieces by monsters at Roland Academy, in the palm of the gods under the watchful eyes of the nobles. She was as helpless as she had been then. Now he realized it wasn't a nightmare at all. It was a prophecy. His parents wrote that the Academy's nobles had offered their family a large sum of money as compensation. How could this have happened? Gary flew into a rage and shouted that to them. She was just some dead country bumpkin whose family could easily be bought off with money. And tomorrow, those nobles would be eating food and immersed in their own lives. And his sister's death wouldn't even be dinner gossip for them. He wouldn't forgive it. He would never forgive them. He would find the person who killed his sister. He would kill them. MC grabbed him by the shoulder and replied that he was in on it too. The boy exclaimed that it was true. Strong magic had awakened within him. He can summon beasts and use fire magic. He's seen it with his own eyes. Once he demonstrates this to the elders, they'll let him transfer to Roland Academy, and then he can get his revenge. The protagonist replied that his abilities were truly remarkable, and if he told the elders about this, they'd only start keeping a closer eye on him. Besides, even if he were to enroll in Roland Academy, what would happen to him? They had to find a way to leave Reborn Academy together. Gary asked what they should do. Until he graduated from the academy and served there for 2 years as a volunteer, he was afraid his hands would be completely tied by then. The protagonist said the Academy tournament would begin soon. If they took first place, they would be able to represent the Academy at the Tournament of Nations. By then, they would be able to meet people from Roland Academy. Gary calmed down and said he understood. He thanked him for that. Sometime later, Harry entered the third-year dorm room and asked a classmate if he was alone. Where were everyone else? He replied that they were preparing for the Academy tournament. The boy smiled and noted that this was the same every year. What did he think about it? Did anyone have a chance of winning this year? The classmate replied that there wasn't a single chance. He knew these guys too well. He was hoping that Kira would fight him, but he was currently on a mission. They would hope to see some interesting second years this year. Sometime later, the protagonist and the others came to the training hall. Cool noticed that Gary hadn't stopped training lately. Monk asked if something had happened to him. The protagonist replied that they should leave him alone for a while. Gary himself, swinging his sword, thought that this still wasn't enough. Why was he such a weakling? Kay approached him and noted that he had been training a lot lately. Let him come with him. He has something for him. After a while, he led them to the armory. Gary, examining the weapons, asked if these were the weapons of those who attacked them back then. Kay said that he had restored everything possible to divine condition, so each of them could choose whatever they wanted. Cool asked in surprise if this was the equipment of Lancey's friends. Everyone began sorting through the equipment. He wondered if he could choose too. After all, he hadn't helped them that time when they were attacked. Kay replied that of course he could. The Academy tournament was a wonderful opportunity. All students except first years can participate, so he hoped they wouldn't let him down. Every year, all the noble families attend this tournament as spectators. If they perform well, they will surely receive an invitation from at least one of them, and upon graduation, they will become their knights. It's quite a job. Gary took the blades and said that if they performed well, they would become knights of one of the noble families. Realizing this, the boy smiled broadly. MC took the weapon and asked if it was Lancey's sword. Kay replied that it was apparently undamaged, but it had lost its fire magic properties, so it was now essentially a regular sword. He would suggest he choose something else. He reflected on the fact that he had absorbed all the flames from this sword. On the other hand, the skill absorbing elements could be quite useful. After some time, the protagonist found a cave in the rock and entered. Inside, ice golems began attacking him. He instantly detonated one of them and remarked that with so many ice golems, it was no wonder he had to work hard to get to it. The protagonist summoned Nova and told him to go left. 3 weeks later, the day of the Avrion Academy tournament arrived, and people from all over the country began to flock to the castle grounds. In the waiting room, Jasmine asked Harry if he wouldn't give in this time. Would he? He replied with a smile that if they had to fight each other, she should go easy on him. At this time, Eric approached Sebastian and whispered in his ear that he had already arranged with everyone. Naslavia saw Martha and asked where she had been. She greeted them and explained that she had just learned that the tournament rules had been changed this year. Monk, confused, asked if the one-on-one fights were supposed to start first. The girl replied that they were. They said that would be the first round of the tournament. Suddenly, she was interrupted by the conversations of other students as the knights entered the room. Intiro announced that the top 5 second and third year students would step forward. Monk said he was curious to know what they were planning. Dan thought that if Lei hadn't deliberately given up his seat, he wouldn't be here. The 5 of them stepped forward. Intiro turned and asked what was wrong with the third years. Intao shouted for permission to report that Kira had left on a mission. She replied that everything was fine. And what about Jay? The boy himself laughed and shouted that he couldn't wait for them to challenge him. The students began to mutter among themselves, saying that he ranked first in the academy. He was the stuff of legends before. They didn't think he'd come to the academy tournament. Monk dejectedly remarked that he didn't think he'd give the third years any slack. Intiro said that the 10 students listed above automatically advanced to the next stage of the tournament and wouldn't participate in the first round of selection. Cool excitedly said that he was afraid they'd wipe them out. But suddenly they'd just been pushed forward. The protagonist replied that it was his own fault. He hadn't made it into the final 5. He pointed out that they all lived in the same dorm, so there was no point in competing against them, though he was still confident he could beat Dan. Intiro announced that the rules of the first qualifying match were a battle royale, with the second and third years competing separately, 5 people in each match. She called out to Ian and remarked that he looked quite robust. Would he come to her? The boy anxiously complied and approached her. Intiro aimed her bow at him and announced that all participants in the elimination round would be allowed to use only the wooden weapons provided in the arena. Each of them would be given 100 hit points. She fired a shot and said that if they were hit, their hit points would be reduced. However, if they used chi in their attacks, their damage would be increased. Accordingly, if they defend themselves with chi, the damage inflicted on them will be reduced. When their hit points reach 0, they will be considered losers and removed from the battlefield. Now, have the second-year students get ready. They need to return their weapons to the storage room and choose another one, and then have them enter the arena. Sebastian approached Eric and said that they should not give the protagonist a chance to enter the arena. The protagonist chose a wooden sword and said that it suited him better. After a while, the gates opened and Intiro shouted that she welcomed everyone to the Avrion Academy tournament. They were announcing the beginning of the first match of the tournament. They were introducing the participants. An information screen appeared in the arena. The girl said that, as the spectators could see, the screen displays the life points of each player. When life points reach 0, a player is eliminated, and this continues until only 5 players remain. The participants are ready. They will see who will emerge victorious. The elder, watching the protagonist, thought it was time for him to shine. Enro announced that the first battle royale match had begun. Almost all the students immediately began to pounce on the protagonist. Confused, he began to fend off their attacks and wondered what was going on. Eric shouted, "Let them get rid of him first." Sebastian quickly lunged forward and shouted that this time he would teach him a lesson. The MC instantly counterattacked, knocking his weapon out of his hands and grabbing him by the collar. 3 students immediately pounced on him. He instantly turned his body and used Sebastian as a human shield. Eric, seeing this, furiously shouted, "What are they doing? Can't they see the boss?" They excitedly replied that this guy was too fast. Sebastian asked why he was acting like some kind of monster. The protagonist abruptly threw him aside and replied that he should be happy he was the first to be eliminated. The guy lost all his health points from that throw and was eliminated. Enro announced that they already had their first eliminated. After that, MC turned to the others and asked what they were waiting for. "Let them gather already." Eric nervously replied, "Don't get cocky. They need to attack together." He quickly approached him, grabbed his arm, and kicked him in the knee. Jay, watching this, noted with a smile that the red-haired boy was head and shoulders above them all. Nai said he landed a pretty powerful blow, even a little brutal. He said that this duel was originally intended to test the student's skills, but he never thought he'd be so captivated by watching it. He hadn't expected this from him. The girl noted that each attack reduced their health points by a maximum of 20 points, and if the fight continued like this, someone could very well die. Meanwhile, Ian, watching the action, said he thought they were in pain. Gary replied that they deserved it. Did they really not stand firm with 10 against 1? That was ridiculous. At that moment, the protagonist continued to destroy all of his opponents. Dan asked if they really didn't know how to use chi. Naslavia replied that they knew, but Lei was just so strong. The spectators watching this began to mutter among themselves in bewilderment. Why was he striking with such force? This behavior was completely unworthy of a knight. He shouldn't have been allowed into the tournament in the first place. The protagonist heard this, and twisting his opponent's arm, looked at them. In an instant, horror gripped the people. They fell silent and wondered if he had really heard everything. It couldn't be. He was so far away. Was this red-haired man really some kind of monster? One of the elders asked if they should stop him. Another replied that it wasn't necessary. He didn't see anyone trying to beat him with the other 10. Gibby noted that these were completely different situations. What if this boy kills the other students? Feng replied that he thought he was simply defending himself wisely against a possible second attack. He was his student, so he would take responsibility for the outcome of the fight. Meanwhile, Ying Tao, watching the proceedings, said that it looked like the top 5 had finally been determined. She regretted saying this, but she hadn't thought Harry's brother would be the first to go. The boy replied with a smile that he thought it was for the best. His father had spoiled him too much. Jay shouted that he couldn't wait for his fight. Meanwhile, MC had single-handedly killed all the students. Eric, lying on the ground, shouted, "Just give him a chance. He'll beat up his family." He remembered Amy and began walking furiously toward him. The boy, frightened, asked what he was planning. The protagonist silently grabbed his head and lifted him up. One of the elders exclaimed that he would kill him. He squeezed his head and said he couldn't be a knight anymore. Frightened, Eric asked what he was doing. The protagonist used the mana absorption skill, sucking all of his mana out of him, and then slammed him into the ground, causing the boy to lose all his health and drop out of the competition. The elder said it seemed he was right. He hadn't done much harm. Feng sighed and noted that at least his arms and legs weren't broken. Suddenly, Asura shot at him and shouted for him to let go. He began dodging arrows with lightning speed and approaching her. The girl worriedly wondered what was wrong with this guy. He defeated them all. It was simply impossible. Just as she reached for the arrows, MC quickly approached her and grabbed her by the neck. Suddenly, her father shouted from the stands, "Make this monster stop! Get his hands off his daughter." The other spectators grabbed him and told him to calm down. This was a competition. If he went down there, Sura would be disqualified. The protagonist thought about the man being her father. But what about his father? He had done so much for this country, saved so many people, and what happened in the end? All he wanted was for his mother to kill him. He swung his sword and shouted, "How ironic." Suddenly, Cool tied his hand with nunchucks and shouted, "Stop." The protagonist nervously asked why he stopped him. He replied that the girl was innocent, so he shouldn't be so cruel to her. Marta added, "Let him wake up, she hasn't harmed anyone here." Juan stood between them, noting that he had gone too far. Those bastards already got what they deserved. Duo added, "Let him be a gentleman." MC recalled all the friendly moments they'd shared and furiously demanded why everything always ended like this. What did they even know about him? Radiating an incredibly powerful fiery aura, he shouted that if they were so determined to stop him, why didn't they just knock him out? The protagonist pulled Cool up with a chain and began beating him, then told him that if he was going to defeat him, he should train harder and use his chi. Taking advantage of the moment, Martha began firing at him. The protagonist turned around in a flash and caught the arrows. She was shocked to think how he'd managed to grab the arrows flying so fast with his bare hands. He instantly launched them at her, then quickly lunged and grabbed her. MC remarked that if she wanted to win, she shouldn't hesitate so long. He tossed her aside and told her to learn to anticipate his movements, not just his destination. At that moment, moment, Duo and Huang attempted to attack him from behind. The protagonist repelled them with his powerful aura and shouted that bravery without proper strategy would lead to certain death. He instantly grabbed their heads and slammed them into the ground. Asura, watching this, was horrified, wondering how strong he was. The spectators began to mutter among themselves that his aura was devastating, and that was too cruel. Jay, smiling, mused that if this red-haired guy wasn't going to make it into the top 5, then those same top 5 must possess even more astonishing power. Ian, seeing this, asked if they should. Dan interrupted him and told him to shut up. He knew what he was going to say. Monk remarked that it really wasn't the most pleasant feeling to be on the other side of all this action. At that moment, MC started walking towards Sura. She, horrified, thought that she simply couldn't compete with him. He silently conjured a fireball in his hand and approached her. Her father shouted, "What's the judge looking at? Stop him. He's going to kill his daughter." The protagonist apologized and poked her in the forehead, causing her to take significant damage and be eliminated. The spectators, perplexed, asked, "Is it over? What the hell just happened?" At that moment, the organizer shouted that they were announcing the results. They congratulated the 5 participants who had advanced to the next round. They were announcing a short break while they prepared for the next round. After lunch, they would resume the Battle Royale competition, but for third-year students. Have everyone take their places before the competition begins, so they don't miss anything. MC silently left the arena, abandoning his comrades. At this point, one of the elders remarked that the red-haired child was quite talented. Gibby agreed, adding that if he gave into his anger, nothing could stop him. Feng said he was confident he could save many people. Winford approached the elder and reported that the doctors had examined the students, and they all showed signs of mana sickness. It seemed they would be unable to use their chi for some time, and they didn't know if they would be able to recover in the future. The elder told them not to spread the word. This boy had enough to worry about. In the training room, the guys were watching the training closely. The guy said he was trying so hard. Another guy laughed and asked, "That's a second year, isn't it?" Gary was fighting a dummy at that moment, striking it with a wooden sword. The dummy announced that he had passed level 12. Gary exhaled and said, "It's still not enough." Every year, all the large families attend the academy tournament. Some time ago, Kai said that if they do well at the tournament, they would surely receive an invitation from at least one of them. And then, after graduation, they could become escorts for that family. That's quite a good job. Gary clutched the hilt of his sword and thought, "Not enough, too little." Intao asked what he thought of the guy who ranked first among the second years. Harry answered thoughtfully, "I think I like the second one better." Intao said, "At least this one is cute, and his style reminds her of him. Maybe he will be the best after all?" At that moment, Harry approached Gary and said, "Level 12, start." The dummy rushed towards him and he quickly dodged and attacked. The dummy announced, "Level 12 completed." Gary thought, he copied its movements, and Harry said he didn't think it was that hard. Gary looked at him carefully and said that if he wanted to fight, he should just say so. Intao said she thought they were in for some fun. Naslavia said, "Gary, there you are." She grabbed his hand and told him to go. The competition would be today. She suggested that he hurry and get good places. Gary asked her to wait and not to pull him, Naslavia. They left the site, and Gary told her to let him go. Why did she stop him? Naslavia told him not to be a jerk. What if he gets disqualified for getting into fights at such an important tournament? Gary lowered his head and asked to be forgiven. He somehow didn't think about it. Naslavia turned away and said, "Gary, she knows that he really wants to win, and she believes that he has what it takes, but he must remain calm." Gary replied, "He understands." "Thank you, Naslavia." A voice rang out. "The afternoon battle is about to begin, so let them get ready for the third years to enter." Naslavia said, "The third year's competition will begin soon. By the way, did he see Lei?" Gary answered no. He disappeared as soon as the battle ended. Suddenly a voice rang out from the side. "What did he say, Lei?" Naslavia looked out and said, "He is with the knight Winford." Gary asked, "What are they doing together?" MC spoke up. He said that he does not want to participate in the tournament anymore. Gary and Naslavia screamed, "What?" Winford asked, "Lei, is he serious?" He answered, "Yes." Winford asked, "Can he tell him why?" MC answered, "No." Winford exhaled, and, at that moment, a voice announced that the students were already ready for the final battle, so they asked them to take their places. The Overseer Knights were already hurrying to join them. Winford exhaled and said that he would observe the tournament. They would discuss this later. Lei, he is an independent guy. He wants him to know that no matter what choice he makes, he will respect his every decision. Lei remained silent and lowered his head. Naslavia asked him to let them explain. Gary folded his arms and said they weren't going to eavesdrop. MC asked, "Did they hear everything?" Naslavia spoke, "A little." Gary quickly answered, "Yes, they heard everything." Naslavia blushed and said that they really did hear their entire conversation. Lei passed by and said, "Well, let them not worry. They did not discuss anything that important." Gary shouted, "Lei, let him wait. Does their promise mean nothing to him?" "Amy? Will his sister's death really be in vain?" Naslavia asked again. "What?" she thought. So Gary's sister. No wonder Gary has been so moody lately. MC screamed, "How could he forget? She's human. She's his first friend. It's not that he didn't want to help Amy. He just... Naslavia asked, "He's just confused, isn't he?" Lei's eyes widened in surprise, and Naslavia said, "Lei, she knows he's hurt. Deep down, he's angry at those horrible people. And he feels guilty that he got angry at his friends and innocent people. But it's not his fault." MC said sadly, Naslavia. She smiled and said, "They want him to know no one blames him." She remembered their conversation with the team and said, "Be it Kyle, Martha, or anyone else, everyone will follow his advice." Gary said, "Yes, Lee. He knows how much injustice he's suffered in the past. but let him believe he won't always be alone. MC looked at him in surprise and said, Gary. He smiled and said, they will always be his family. Lei, he won't let him be alone either, will he? Lei replied, yes. At that moment, shouts of forward could be heard in the arena. Martha said, what's taking so long? It's almost over. Dan replied, she doesn't understand anything. There's nothing better than a one-on-one fight. Dan turned around and asked, really, Lei? He's so sweet. And Gary is here. Well, he's a leech. Gary angrily ordered him to shut up. Naslavia approached Martha and asked, how are you doing? Is there anyone to pay attention to? Martha replied, the third years are very good, and everyone is good in their own way. That young man over there, Harry, he fights with amazing grace and is the only one in the arena who hasn't been hurt at all yet. Gio has incredible strength and his physical fitness and chi are on par with the first. The Zidong and Lu Shui sisters are excellent at working together. They're quite good at both attack and defense. Martha feels like even the Huangyi duo brothers probably don't have that level of nonverbal communication. Martha started looking around and asked, where did she go? MC said, over there. It's Jasmine. She laughed and said, it's easy as pie. Martha said, she's in the top 5 too. The voice said, here are the results. He suggested congratulating the 5 third-year winners. Gary frowned and thought, all that's left is the decisive battle. Winford came on stage and said, after 2 rounds of selection, they've chosen 20 finalists. In the first round, the second-year students exceeded all the judges' expectations. He looked at MC and smiled, then said, and that's why the judges have adopted new rules for subsequent competitions. He asks everyone to look at the big screen. The final standings are shown above. Voices rose in the crowd. Second year against third? That's not fair. Even if second years are strong, they train a year less than third years. The guy said he was looking forward to these fights. Gary thought he couldn't believe that he would be his opponent. He said that's exactly what he wanted. Now Slavia thought she was surprised that she would fight against Jay, who was recognized as the strongest in the academy. Would she be able to handle it? Jay said he was sorry he wasn't lucky enough to fight that boy. Harry said he knew he might still get a chance. Lei had grown a lot since their last meeting, and he would also like to fight him again. Jay replied that he was right. To fight him, it didn't necessarily have to be the tournament rounds. The knights were talking in the gathering place. He was sorry he wouldn't be able to watch their fight today. No big deal. They only visit Avrion from time to time anyway, so they should ask for a tour of the academy. The man suggested discussing it later, going to see the elders first. Big brother, he was, as always, quite busy. Winford came on stage and announced that the finals would be in a day, and there would be no restrictions on weapons and equipment, so they should prepare for the fight in advance. Dan folded his arms and said, easy for him to say. It was not for him to fight third years with their equipment. They were at a clear disadvantage. Ian ordered him to simply consider this another special training session. Monk stood to the side and thought, Jasmine, she was a senior with a black belt. However, if he wanted to succeed, he would still have to fight her sooner or later. MC looked up at the scoreboard and thought, his opponent still hadn't shown up? Never mind. It would be easier for him if he didn't have to fight a second year. After a while, MC asked, are they not going to come back? Gary replied, they were going to train again. Lei replied, well, he'd go home then, and they should try not to be too late. He thought, Gary can't afford to lose this fight. Harry is quite strong. He hopes Gary will still defeat him. MC remembered Winford's words. He's glad he changed his mind. What a relief. Lei replied, a couple of people talked to him, and he came to this decision. Did he want to talk to him about something else? Winford replied, he can't say much about it, but he will say only one thing. 10 finalists will be given the right to represent Avrion Academy at the Tournament of Nations. MC asked in surprise, 10? He thought there were only supposed to be 5 finalists? Winford said, all he can tell him for now is that it has something to do with the Pure Blood Guild, and the elders will announce it after the tournament is over. At least he hopes that he is not giving up his place to others in vain. MC said with displeasure, these purebreds again. Okay, he got it. He now lay down on the bed and stretched his arms up. He never thought that one fight would bring so much trouble. What will the purebloods do next? He touched something with his hand, and lifting a pillow, asked, a note? Is it a trap? He read it. They will see each other at the arena today at 9 o'clock. After a while, he walked and thought, although Sir Kay and Winford asked him not to go alone, but he found it much more convenient this way. It was much easier for him to solve everything on his own. Be it a pure blood guild or a dark guild, he knew almost nothing about them. He needed more information to find out everything he could about his father. If it was a trap, then it better not be boring. His thoughts were interrupted by a guy who said coincidence that he finally had the opportunity to talk to him alone. Jay smiled and said, these guys get underfoot too often during the day, don't they? MC turned around and said, so it's him? He's one of the purebloods? Jay asked again, purebreds? No, don't let him get the wrong idea. He just can't wait to fight him. If they couldn't cross swords on the battlefield, then they better end it right now. Lei turned away and said, he's not in the mood, that's all. He thought it was a hint, but it turned out it was just some boring guy. Jay swung his sword and screamed, he's already here, so where is he going? Lei quickly turned around and blocked his attack. He asked, what's wrong with him? He already said he doesn't want to fight. Jay laughed and screamed. He knew it. He knew he was strong. No one has ever withstood such blows. MC screamed, who cares? Jay swung again and screamed, if he wants to end this quickly, then let him show him his real skills. MC flew back and screamed. He landed and thought, he's as strong as a lost cow god. He said if he doesn't beat him up good, he won't let him go. He thinks if he doesn't give him a good beating, he won't leave him alone. Suddenly he saw a silhouette behind him and thought, what's that? Jay mockingly asked, "What's going on? If he keeps looking around, he'll attack him." Lei saw the masked man and thought, "This is the Pureblood Guild." He rushed forward and ordered Jay to get out of the way. MC pushed him away and headed towards the man who blocked his attack. He flew back and thought, "Something's wrong with this weapon." Jay cried out in displeasure. Where did it come from? Didn't anyone teach him not to interfere with someone else's fight? The man said he was getting in the way. Jay swung his weapon and shouted, "If he was asking for a fight like that, then let him fight him." The man put his hand forward, and warriors appeared around MC. Jay said he had no desire to fight anything else, but right now he even liked it. Lei looked around and said, "These guys are worse than annoying flies." He grabbed his sword and thought, "He gets it." He quickly moved, and the guys asked in confusion, "Where is he?" He disappeared. "He is a black belt knight, so let them be careful." Suddenly, the guy turned around at the rustle and saw Lei swinging his sword. He tried to attack, but his sword flew back. He screamed, "Nightmare." The man ordered to block it. Forward. Lei jumped back, doing a few somersaults. He looked at his frozen glove and thought, "These guys are good. And their weapons are not the most ordinary either." He is afraid he will have to repair the gloves again if he does not use the protection of the ice golem. He does not think he should fight them in the next battle. At that moment, the man began to attack Jay, who screamed, "He's as nimble as a cockroach. Let him stop running around like that." At that moment, the man decided to stab Jay in the chest and widened his eyes in confusion. Jay grabbed his spear and asked, "He doesn't think he can harm him in any way, does he? He doesn't know how to control his chi, and he doesn't need to." He swung his sword and said, "This chi, which is several times stronger than usual, is poisonous to others. For him, it's like fine wine." His mana headed towards the man, who screamed loudly. Jay grabbed the man by the head and screamed loudly, and MC looked at it and thought, "This is incredible. Is this really the strength of an ordinary person?" Jay happily said, "A worthy weapon to withstand his blows. It's a pity that he's not strong enough for him." The man began to rise, and Jay asked, "Can he still stand?" He didn't know that it was he, Kira, who was hiding behind the mask. "It looks like he's been hiding well for the last couple of years, Kira." Kira yelled in irritation. Jay glee. He tried to attack, and MC was thinking at that moment, "These five are causing a lot of trouble, but it's good that this big guy is nearby, who took on their leader. It looks like he owes him this time." The guy rushed to attack and ordered to die. The other guy screamed. He disappeared again. Lei thought, he'll stall for time a little longer. Once he regains his strength, he can deal with all these guys. The guys were yelling loudly. They need to be careful. Don't let him sneak up on them. Where did he go? He knew he wouldn't last long. Let him come out before it's too late, and they'll give him a real laugh. At that moment, Jay swung his sword and asked how long he was going to keep this up. Morning would come soon, and they would find out what was going on. Kira opened the flask with the potion, and Jay asked, "What?" MC looked at it and thought, "What the hell is this?" Kira drank it, and Lei realized it's a shadow plague. Jay looked at it and thought, "This is chi. It's somehow different." Kira screamed loudly and began to spread his mana. He turned into a monster, and MC ordered Jay to watch out. Bright mana headed towards him, and he thought, he can't get hit by this thing. Mana injured his body, leaving a huge wound on his chest. Jay thought, damage and speed. This is at least 10 times stronger than what he inflicted before. He's afraid that if he doesn't get hit, he'll get into trouble. If he doesn't dodge, he'll end up in complete hell. MC thought, terrible. If they don't do something now, they'll get caught in the crossfire. The man screamed. He's there. He swung and commanded MC to die, but he quickly created a stream of mana and screamed. He doesn't have time for this. He quickly attacked the man, who screamed. What? Kira screamed. Jay. It seems he's not as strong as everyone said. Jay flew back and said, he really isn't used to constantly defending himself in battle. Kira said, even if he's still standing now, he's finished. Kira rushed towards him and commanded him to die. Jay frowned and thought, he can't move. Suddenly Kira was enveloped in dark mana, and he looked forward in confusion, where Lei had already grabbed his spear. He asked, how is he? He saw his fighters lying on the ground and thought, he can't believe one person dealt with 5 elite warriors so quickly. MC screamed, freeze. Kira was even more surprised by this and jumped back. Jay said he didn't expect it. Lei saved his life. MC said, and from then on, he's on his own. Jay spoke carefully. This guy's weapon is made of crab demon armor. It not only reflects any blows, but also contains a neurotoxin. If he gets hit, he will die. Lei answered, he understood. He quickly rushed to attack and mentally suggested to end this quickly. He hit Kira in the stomach, dark mana pouring from his mouth. Kira grinned and said, he knew it. He swung his spear and threw MC aside. Lei jumped back and thought, horror, this problematic weapon can also change shape. His chest armor is completely destroyed, and his gloves won't last long either. If he gets hit again, he will have a hard time. He should check his equipment for. His thoughts were interrupted by Jay, calling him Red. MC turned around and Jay asked, do you need a weapon? He tossed him his sword and said that he can borrow his weapon. Lei caught this and widened his eyes in confusion. He dropped it on the floor and said, heavy weapon. Jay replied, it's heavy, but he thinks he can swing it. Lei picked up his sword and yelled, of course. He released his mana and said, if he can't, they'll both die. The guy's mana clashed, and Kira said, it's useless. His spear is too thin for that heavy weapon. MC smirked and asked, yeah? How about this? He released his frost mana and Kira yelled, what? Lei swung his sword and attacked him. He landed a couple of hits on Kira, who yelled loudly, and Jay yelled, well done. MC put the sword on the ground and thought, he put almost all his power into that strike. It won't work. He said, he has no more mana left. The system window reported, anomaly. The host is unable to absorb mana due to infection. Lei thought it was all because of the shadow plague. After drinking the contents of that vessel, his chi turned blackish purple. just like those people from the Dark Guild. But the Pureblood Guild and the Dark Guild are two completely different organizations. How then did the Pureblood Guild members get their hands on such a dubious potion? Is it possible they have some dubious relationship? The system window reported that he had unlocked a new skill, body modification. MC thought, another skill. Every time he manages to emerge victorious from a situation where he is in mortal danger, he gains a new ability. So that's how he gets them? But first, he needs to get rid of all these corpses. He cried out, there you go. Lei picked up the flask from the floor and thought, so this really isn't some one-off potion, but an organized mass production. Even if Winford and Kai can be trusted, their entourage is clearly not. There's a possibility that the potion was produced at the academy. The Shadow Plague originated at the academy, and the students don't even know about it. This can only mean that someone at the very top is deliberately covering this up. Perhaps it's even the eldest knight or the sixth elder. MC turned around and thanked Jay for the sword. He asked if he was okay. Jay replied, you're welcome. He won't die that easily. He thinks his weapon suits him well. He's a mage, right? Lai replied, yes, a little. Jay screamed, that's awesome. He'd never seen a mage fight like that before. MC replied, he'd explain everything to him later, but for now he'd prefer for him to keep what happened a secret. Jay asked, what's this about? He just saved his life. From now on, Jiggly's life belongs to him. He'll do whatever he asks of him. Lai replied, no need. Nova will take him to the infirmary. It's better to patch him up before the match starts. Jay screamed in surprise. He can summon a beast too? He can't believe he was going to beat him. Doesn't he need treatment himself? MC waved his hand and said, nope, he has a specific body structure. He'll be completely fine by tomorrow. Nova, have him take him to the infirmary via the bypass road so they won't be noticed. Nova barked loudly in response. After some time, the blacksmith told him to take care of himself and to come back in the evening for his gear. He'd make sure it was like new. MC came out of the armory and said, okay, he got it. People around started whispering, isn't that the red-haired guy from yesterday's competition? Let him speak more quietly. Hasn't he seen how strong he is? No need to get into trouble. Lei turned around and thought, people don't change. After a while, he looked at himself in the mirror and said, that's it. He'll try out his new ability. He clicked on the system window with body modification and covered himself in mana, and then saw a dark-haired guy in the reflection. After a while, the girls were walking down the street and talking. They hadn't finished hunting yet. Are they going to the game tomorrow, as planned? The girl said, of course they're going. It's not often that something like this happens. The academy tournament is only held once a year. Another girl said that if they don't get into the tournament this year, they'll have to wait for the next one, so they should take care of everything. This year's second years did well in the first match, so the finals promise to be quite tense. Yeah, it will be interesting to see which knights the families are interested in, and only then start actively working on themselves. The girl walking in the middle froze. The girls turned around and asked, was she listening to them? What was she staring at? She blushed slightly and said, that man, he's a hottie. MC walked and thought. Body transformation consumes about 5 points per hour, and with his current magic level, if he doesn't fight, he can last at least 8 hours. That's good. Now his movements won't be so limited. Still, some townspeople approached Lei and offered something. The man said, Mr. Adventurer, just by looking at him, he can conclude that he has been on more than one difficult mission. He has several good healing potions stashed away, only 98 silver coins for a set. Let him take these with him, and he will not be able to withstand any danger. The merchant said, sir, the dried meat is of the highest quality. It was dried for 11 months and will not spoil for another 6 months. This is the perfect dry ration. The man pointed at the brochure and said, he doesn't look like a local. Has he come to see the tournament with the academy? They have rooms with a view of the stadium at a reasonable price. He offers to stay with them for the time being. Where is he going, handsome? Can they show him around? Lei thought, it's not that simple. This is just a banal change in appearance, and such a dramatic change in the way people speak and act towards him. How hypocritical. Suddenly, he noticed Naslavia in the crowd and shouted, Naslavia! She turned around and looked at him, puzzled. MC asked her to help, and she asked, was that her he just called? Had they met somewhere before? Lei's eyes widened in fear and thought, oh no, he completely forgot about the disguise. He said, he knows that she is one of the participants in the tournament and a representative of the Hart family, right? He is glad to see her here and is looking forward to their match tomorrow. Naslavia said, thank you. She also hopes that everything works out for her. Does he know her family? She apologized for asking, but what is his name? MC answered, his name. He thought about it. Name. At that time, he was known as Sen. Naslavia waved her hand in front of his face and asked, sir? Lei apologized and said, his name is Ness. Naslavia smiled and said, nice to meet you, Sir Ness. MC asked, so where is she going? Naslavia replied, she was going to the weapon shop. She wanted to balance the weight of her one-handed weapon. Lei thought he would go there too, to be less conspicuous with Naslavia. He asked if she minded if he went with her. He would like to choose a new breastplate. Naslavia replied, of course. Her sword was made of high-quality beast crystals, wasn't it? Naslavia said it was forged from tiger crystals with shark fins. Last night her family sent her this. mentioning that she could use it during the tournament. She thought they shouldn't have worried about her so much. Lei wondered if her family helped her with the weapon. A child from an ordinary family must have had to work hard enough to get something like that. It would take them years to buy such equipment. Naslavia asked, Mr. Ness, he's an adventurer, right? And does he often go to different dangerous places? MC replied, yes, I think so. Sometimes he has to complete quite difficult tasks. He had been to places even right next to the border. Naslavia said it was cool. She wondered if she would ever have the chance to visit a place like this. Ever since she was a child, her family hadn't allowed her to do anything dangerous. When she leaves the academy, she's afraid she'll have to go back. She really admires these free adventurers. MC asked again, free adventurers? She'll be disappointed. No one in this country can be completely free. There was a bright explosion ahead of them, and the townspeople screamed in fear. An explosion. Naslavia asked, what's going on? Lei ran ahead and ordered them to hurry. A man stood in front of a pillar of fire and shouted, the building! His building! A citizen screamed, the hotel is on fire. Naslavia looked out and asked, what's going on? The man answered, there was a car parked near the hotel. It seems a merchant had brought a shipment of monster crystals, and suddenly there was an explosion. Lei asked again, the merchant? Where is he? The man answered, he doesn't know. They probably took him to the hospital. A woman with tears in her eyes walked forward, and she was ordered not to come closer. She screamed, children. Her 2 children are still inside. Naslavia saw her and screamed, damn it. If they don't get them out as soon as possible. MC asked, what is she doing? She can't go in there. Naslavia turned around and said, she can't just let them die. Lei exhaled and said, then he will do it. Naslavia asked again, what? But then he will get burned too. MC asked her not to worry. He has a little knowledge of ice magic. He spread his arms out to the sides and said, ice fine. Naslavia looked at him in surprise and thought, is he also a mage? MC quickly ran into the fire and thought, damn it, he needs to hurry. If he runs out of mana, he will be exposed. Mana points were being taken away from him, and he continued to run forward. Lei activated his ability and saw silhouettes above. He screamed, he can't let those little ones get hurt. Another explosion rang out, and rocks flew towards the townspeople. The guy waved his hand and screamed, hordes of water snakes. Naslavia screamed happily, bro. The guy smiled and said, they haven't seen each other in a while, sis. At that moment, MC ran out of the burning building, holding the children. The woman saw this and screamed, children, her babies.